He finally drops dead, crushed under the weight of non-stop, overworked office life, and then gets reincarnated as a noble who's so lazy he barely lifts a finger. A noble who vows, with teeth-bared fury, never to lift a hand and work again. But the instant he gets his divine skill, once those skills run out, everything crashes down. His land lies in ruins, shattered by destruction. He watched his world collapse, then everyone he loved was gone forever. And now, just 2 servants are left standing. He's got only 2 powers, and both are totally useless. Rise it, then crash it, up and down, back and forth. He had 0 army and 0 resources, nothing to fight with, to smash the state right when it was teetering on the edge of collapse. But what if those weak skills were still holding you back? So, can you really break the rules of this world? Can a lazy noble really end up with everything, or get absolutely nothing? Nothing slipped into the strongest territory. This story kicks off with the main character getting slammed down, hard. He bolted into the night, monster roaring behind him. Run, run, as it chased him down. On the road, he shouted for a servant named Maya. Is she there? And the girl answered, yes, she is. She's sprinting, and behind her, he's yelling at the top of his lungs for her to protect him, while Mia just replied with a quick yes, then she snapped and started stabbing. She drove her blade straight into the colossal monster, like it was the only chance she had. Right as they were still struggling to get there, her shadowy handler let out a cautious, worried sigh, like he already knew trouble was waiting. And then, right then, the monster got hacked into scattered pieces, right there, leaving MC's father hanging in the aftermath. Rutherford, the owner of that big, small estate, and his older brother, Wishart, slammed into the scene right at the last second. After they finally wiped out the monster, the brother stormed over, knocked hard, and fired off a furious remark. He sent the girl. So he's stepping in to fight for him, and trash-talking his father's name. That's a disgrace, and it sure doesn't fit an aristocrat. He tore up, apologized for the mistake, admitted he wasn't that strong, and begged his savior to stop the fight before it turned into another argument. After a while, his brother leaned in and promised, tomorrow, you'll finally get your skill, and then you'll have to fight no matter what. Rutherford told his sons calmly, shutting down the arguing before it spiraled. As they argued, Wishart tried to flare up with indignation, but his father cut in and told the protagonist, everyone gets to choose their own path. Forget trying to copy his brother. He's got his own path to carve, and deep down he knows it, even as he starts to. He locks onto his path and refuses to look back, no matter what anyone throws at him. MC snapped back that he got it all, and Art shot his father a furious look like, you heard him. Rutherford snapped back, it's not me. He's just always worried some orc is going to wander into the strange. This estate is full of secrets, and he's determined to go poking around every last corner. That evening, lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling and knocked muse in that thoughtful way. Everybody's born with some gift, so when people chase the work they truly love, they don't just succeed, they rise up and start running the country, maybe even the whole world. Father, look at him, wise and kind, the real deal aristocrat, while brother, strict as a blade with himself. He's going to step right into his father's shoes, no doubt about it, and he's got just one real gift. He could drop off to sleep anywhere, no matter what was happening. That was his gift. He zoned out into a heavy, deep slumber, even with the maid moving and bustling right beside him. The next morning, he cracked his eyes open and groaned, I don't want to work, because after burning out once already, the last thing he wanted was to go back to being an office worker in Japan, or face whatever that future, one day I'd, was about to be. He'd been struck by that brutal chest pain, and when he opened his eyes again, he was a baby in an aristocrat's home. Because in this world, the gods hand out a gift to everyone the moment they hit 15. When he finally got his, he knew he'd have to clash later, so he charged out the door, heart pounding as he left the. Right at the gate, a sign shouted congratulations on his 15th birthday. But still, he felt like this was the worst day ever, as the estate workers lined up and waved goodbye. He swept Wishart into a tight hug as she walked him to the carriage, then begged, come on, can't I get even a bite of cake? His brother shut him down with a grim no, because one crumb would make him doze off. He nodded off almost instantly, and right then the mayor swept in, grabbed his hands and shoved him to hurry home. She had a cake saved. He didn't want to go anywhere, so he faked a sick spell, groaning to the maid like it was the worst thing ever, and insisted he needed to. He had to collapse onto the bed, and the girl blurted, here, let him sit, give her that seat. One heartbeat, then, with those words still hanging in the air, she pulled a bottle from her chest and said, here, take this medicine. The protagonist asked, what if I get sick? The mayor snapped, I've got motion sickness medicine in my right pocket. She dumped more into his pocket, his brother hauled him into the carriage, and then he said, that's it, he's ready. His father told him he didn't just get a gift. He got a chance to see the whole world, so he better grab it and enjoy every second. The MC dropped onto the bench, staring into the distance like, yeah, maybe that's all there is, and then, after stammering through the rest, trails off. After what felt like forever, he finally stepped into the capital, and the massive city overwhelmed him with pure joy. He strode down the street, thinking this place felt alive, then spotted an inn and started wondering if they had. He spotted those hammock beds, then leaned in and realized the whole building was falling apart. This place hadn't seen a renovation in ages, but hey, no orcs were lurking here, so for once you could breathe easy. After all, it was the capital, so he couldn't stop thinking about that massive little estate getting slammed again and again by orcs coming in from the great. In that wild great forest, everyone prayed the gods would train him up, and he was soaking in every single moment of his carefree life. After what felt like forever, he finally reached the church, nodded at the priest, and said who he was. Then the priest cut him off with a simple, "Come in." When the man knocked, he froze. He looked just like his brother, and for a second, fear crawled up his spine as the priest guided him into imagining things. A magic circle snapped into place and ordered him to stand dead center, so the protagonist obeyed instantly, and the moment that circle hit the floor, the ground turned into something like liquid water. The protagonist blurted, "Whoa, he's literally standing on water." But the shock hit him hard because he had no clue what was going on. He couldn't grasp a single thing, and right then, a goddess's image slammed into view. Shot out into the void of space like it was arriving out of nowhere. "This is a goddess," he dropped to one knee, bowed, and thanked her for giving him life in this world, not to end it. Sure, life isn't that simple, but his brother S built different, and he's stronger than any demon out there. His father is warm and generous, everyone sings his praises. This is a truly good place, and that's why he pleads with her for anything at all, just don't make him face combat skills. And it sounds like desperation, because he begs hard, and then his brother steps in and inherits the estate. So yeah, he still needs some kind of utility skill, and that's where the goddess comes in. Lotties clammed up, then leaned in and asked, "Hey, are you even listening to me?" Then boom, everything vanished from his sight, and the protagonist finally broke the silence, explaining everything. Stunned, the priest blurted out, "What's happening here?" And even as he searched with his eyes, he couldn't figure it out. See, he actually pulled off the skill. The MC can't help but think, wait, is that for real? Because it all ended way too fast. Lucky for him, the priest snapped him forward, telling him to reach out and stretch his hands toward the orb. Then he pointed straight at the spheres. We're up on the pedestal, he stumbles, grabs the orb with his hands, but the priest snapped at him, freezing him mid-reach and forbidding him to touch it. He lifted his hands over the sphere, and the priest leaned in for a hard look, then murmured, could it be the son of some noble? The nobleman snapped back that it was true, and the other guy just said, I see. Like wow, he sounded crushed by everyone else's expectations. The protagonist demanded, what's my skill? And right then, a blinding light exploded from the orb. A glowing magic circle snapped into existence in the void, and spells flared across it like they'd been waiting. Said it in shock, this skill can both enlarge and shrink, and it's usable in everyday situations. The priest shot back, no. The name makes it obvious, so MC lowered his gaze and murmured, I see, well no. No worries, he'd still try to help. He apologized for the interruption, then threw a final nod and got ready to bolt. The priest snapped at him to stop spiraling, because those two skills almost never show up side by side. Everything had a reason, and it was about to hit hard. Everything has a use, knocked shot back. It's fine, he'll do his own thing. Then the priest drifted off, wandering in somewhere. In shock, was he really happy? Later on, the protagonist headed back to his place with pure joy in his chest, and as he lounged on a bench, he couldn't stop himself. He chuckled now and then. Across from him, a woman with her child leaned in and asked if anything good had happened to him. Then he grinned and said, oh yes, definitely. He can stay in bed for the rest of his life and thank his lucky stars, because he stacked up useless skills instead. Of course his brother would blow a gasket, but hey, it doesn't change a thing. He even grabbed souvenirs just to keep his brother and father happy, then spread everything out and pushed on, jewelry for the maids, a tiny figurine of the capital's tower for his dad, and if he can get his brother to finally wear that eye patch, he'll be the absolute coolest. The carriage jerked to a stop, his companions jumped down, the kid waved frantically and called out goodbye, and the woman leaned forward asking where he planned to go. She fired back at the guy with the grand, tiny estate, then, right out of nowhere, she gasped, snapped her hand to her face, and demanded the answer all over again. Big is small, she blurted out, all flustered, and then he stared back at her, completely stunned. Later on, he finally reached the estate. Then a horrifying sight tore into his eyes. The whole estate was set ablaze. Every room, every building, absolutely nothing was left standing. The MC stared at the crumbling ruins, completely stunned, and then pointed out that he wouldn't be able to get comfortable for long. At that exact moment, Joseph snapped, hey, and called out to him. He's back, and before anyone can blink, the butler sprints toward him, with Mir right on his heels. Noct snapped his head toward the man and demanded an answer. Asterisk what happened? Joseph flinched, apologized with a trembling voice, and choked out the word, orcs. Corks slammed into them, then the great forest erupted, and a monstrous army poured out in seconds. Quickly, he blurted, stunned out of his mind, orcs. So wait, where did his dad and his brother disappear to? And what exactly happened to them? With a heavy sigh, the butler admitted, yeah, we still haven't found them. They charged to defend the estate with pure courage, only to realize they hadn't seen them in 4 whole days. The protagonist seized the man by his shoulders and blurted out in pure alarm. What is he saying? They can't possibly lose. Joseph drops his head and says it with a heavy, sad sigh. He didn't even want to wonder what was going on, but something had to be wrong. So the confused protagonist blurted out a question. How could the butler, nearly in tears, apologize and choke out that, yeah, it was just too hard for him to talk about. While they're gone, he'll have to step in and take over. So the MC stared at the wrecked ruins, totally lost, and Joseph demanded, what? What skill did he learn, and why did everything hinge on it? The others had. Other servants stared at him with bated breath. Then he paused, thinking hard before he acted. And then right on the dot, he blurted out, let them. He just let them look. Then he snatched a tiny stone off the ground and demanded, can you see it? Really see this stone? If he uses his skid just right, that stone can balloon until it's the size of a whole horse. A skill so small it's basically the size of an ant. Then with that, he knocks and tosses. He hurled the stone into the sky, then used his gift to blow it up bigger and bigger Medea. Then he snapped at the servants, come on, doesn't this feel like the perfect setup to you? The butler looked totally confused. Hold up, how does this help us? And the protagonist just insisted, I know what I'm doing, now follow my lead. In that moment, his talent was useless, plain and simple, but he still should have begged the goddess for combat skills. After mulling it over, he pitched a plan. Maybe they should lay low at the nearby estates for now. Then Joseph cut in, consider. With so many still standing, maybe it was doable. Yet the estate owner's escape is unforgivable, because if he bolts, he's facing the death penalty. So the protagonist stared into the distance, then stood up and told the whole staff, I won't blame a single one of you, your choice is yours, and you're free to do what you want now. Once the servants finally left, Joseph was alone with them, and he pushed the decision on everyone, stay or go. Then he let the next move belong to the neighbors. The MC tried to lift the old man's spirits, insisting his dad and brother's chase wouldn't last a second longer. The butler burst into tears and swore they'd be back soon. Then the mayor started to look like he was about to say the same thing, but the sentence cut off. He got ejected, and suddenly it hit him. Maybe only he'd ever dreamed about a carefree life waiting out there. So what the hell was he supposed to do now, without his father and brother? It was utterly impossible, because his father's words echoed in his head, and once he felt this truly was his land. Let him defend it his own way. Yes, it was his land, the butler pressed, so what were they going to do? Knocked, purposeno. Purposefully striding toward his bed, he said, all right, first things first, I need a nap, then promptly dropped onto the mattress and lay down. And he yanked the blanket over himself. Mir and Joseph stared at him, totally baffled. Then the old man snapped, are you kidding me? How on earth is anyone supposed to sleep in this chaos? So it's all just an act, right? But the protagonist won't say a word. Then the old man steps in, closing the distance. After watching him for just a moment, I gasped, because they swear saliva production drops like crazy during sleep. It didn't even look like he was swallowing. He was just out cold, muttering in his sleep, because the protagonist could tell he couldn't handle it alone. The butler grabbed his head, choked out, looks like it's over for this estate. The mayor stared at the protagonist like it was already over, resignation heavy on their face. Then they walked out of the room. She brushed past him, yanked the can into place by his door and disappeared. Then, sometime later, right by the front door, Joseph slumped and said, the young master has already slept for 12 hours, and it's scaring me. He couldn't believe the young master even grasped what was happening. So he snapped his gaze to the mayor and told her to go straight to the neighbor. The next estate loomed nearby, and the girl stared at him, totally confused, asking what on earth he meant. The old man shook his head and said all that was left of their state was the name. No people to fight, no food to survive. Food was running low, their walls got smashed, and monsters could strike any second. Nobody would blame her. She opened her mouth to object, but right when she was about to speak, then boom, the front door swung open, and the protagonist burst out like they'd been waiting to unleash something. He burst out of the estate, stretched like he owned the morning, greeted everyone with a bright good morning, and said, plain and proud, that it was a good morning. A deep night's sleep crushed his fatigue, like someone hit the reset button on his whole body, and he was reborn. Confused, the butler snapped out, calling his name. Maya tossed out a hysterical laugh as he asked for the name. and demanded to know what the guy was even talking about. The old man finally pointed out that this was absolutely the worst time to laugh. As the moment hit, the protagonist turned to them both and said, "I've got to thank you again for sticking around." He craved a way to bring life back to their lands, and he wasn't letting up until he got their help, right up to the point where it all depended on him until while his father and brother were gone, would they still step up and back him like he needed? The girl grinned, of course. Joseph blinked in shock. Did she really just pitch a maze to solve things like this? Mia spun around to the old man and declared she still had to help their master. After everyone finally cooled off, the MC leaned in and said that at least the mansion stays safe and sound. No worries, they can finally sleep easy and chow down at lunch. He kept sipping his tea as he went on. Mia says the well's fine too. Sure, they can still scrub up in the tub and do the laundry, but now comes the real problem. They've got nothing to eat, right? And right on cue, his stomach growled with relentless hunger. The mayor said yes, and for once, he was right. Then the butler finally confessed they hadn't eaten a single thing since yesterday. The girl dropped the basket with barely enough provisions to last, then swore she'd dragged in every last thing edible just. Joseph beamed and praised her. She was incredible. Knox shot his hand toward the basket, eyes locked on it. So, the butler snapped back, so little. Surviving villagers nearly stripped the place bare, taking almost every provision with them. He snapped back, I understand. The servants froze, the room turned dead quiet, and an awkward pause stretched on, until the girl finally spoke. Joseph said, "She's on a diet, so you can both dig in, go on, eat." Even though he couldn't put his own hands anywhere near his mouth. He stopped and stared at the master's food, because if he gobbled it all alone, that would be pure selfishness. So he pushed the plan, split it between the three of them. "Yeah, it won't be much, but it's the fair way." Suddenly he blurted, "I can make it bigger." He used the skill right then, and it worked. He admitted he could shrink or enlarge any object on command. Then the protagonist dropped the tiny supply piece sat right in front of him, and he slammed the enlargement trigger, watching it balloon up in front of him, right before the astonishment could even finish. Every single person's eyes snapped to her. Mare shouted, "Incredible." And then she cut off mid-sentence as the butler leaned in and said, "This is absolutely marvelous." Magnus thought, yes, he pulled it off, but it still wasn't he had one goal, fill it to the brim with those who believed in him and never left. His father and brother should have stood there, steady, wise, unshakable. This world is dead wrong if it thinks he's ready to rule. School, while he kept cranking up the supply, the mayor panicked and begged him to stop. Suddenly MC keeled over and fainted, hard. The maid snapped into action, caught him, and frantically tried to bring him back to life. He snapped his eyes open, and she said, "I think you went too far with the mercenary." And sure enough, the supply had ballooned into unbelievable proportions as he stared at it. Then he looked out. He stared out over the endless horizon, and muttered that he was the laziest guy alive, because he just wanted to return to a world where he could finally lounge in peace. Peace finally settled. Then the mayor spun toward him with pure joy and told him, "Thanks to you, we're about to be able to." He went for seconds until everyone ate their fill, and then he gave a nervous little grin like, "All right, now I gotta figure out what to do next." She blurted something out, then thrust her finger toward the horizon and snapped. "From up here, that neighboring estate looks absolutely tiny. Absolutely unbelievable." He stared in shock, wondering if he could even build something this big. Building that whole estate from scratch would have killed him, straight up by sheer overwork. The big small estate, right now it's in Har. It's run by the owner and just 2 residents, but the place is falling apart, and the only ones left are those 3, so they have to fight for survival. They had to grind all day. Then, after the work finally took its toll, the protagonist straightened, leaned on his hoe, let out a heavy breath, and started to say, "How?" Joseph felt pure bliss sweating through his work, and when it was over, he crashed into sleep like a baby. When he rubbed his back and said, "Yeah, that's true," he nailed it. Grasping what common folks feel is the first real move toward becoming a ruler. The butler eyed the protagonist's work with pure disgust, barely chipping anything out, yet somehow even his old body fought like it was furious. Then, just as everything finally started looking up, Mare snapped them out of it and shouted, "Lunch time." And right after that, she added, "MC said it was the perfect moment to finally take a break." And as everyone slid into their seats at the table, the MC looked at the lunch and blurted that it was packed to the brim with greens. Every bite was fresh. The girl grinned and said she'd cooked a whole stack of recipes so they could chow down their fill, and then she cut herself off. She could grab more, but first she made them taste the mamordica enamel. And Nock noticed the sesame oil turned that faint bitterness into something addictive. Joseph said mamordica helps smash blood sugar levels, and right after that the mayor handed it over to them, deep-fried with no batter, no breading. The protagonist bit in and said the seeds were crunch and bitter as hell, and the butler chimed in that memortica helps. After that maid said it, a generous soak in oil came next. Then you could cool your tired body with pickled memortica, and when the protagonist finally tasted it, they grimaced. It was still bitter. Joseph struggled to get the words out. Spicy food is good for the liver. And MC slapped a hand on his shoulder, warning him not to choke on the sentence, while the old man looked down sheepishly and said, with your permission, I don't think I can eat anymore. Maya shrank back, apologizing, then admitted the truth. If her cooking were even half as good, they wouldn't all be reacting like this. Joseph hurried in to calm her down. Don't stress, you've got nothing to cook with. Then he shot back. Arugula needs about a month to ripen, but after 14 days those leaves are still good to eat. And with that, the protagonist wrapped it up. They'd have to survive on memortica for at least 2 weeks, and just 2 days in, he was already terrified to even look at it. It's bland but still somehow nutritious, yet afterwards he's still starving, empty inside, and he can't bring himself to do anything. He needs something made with iron, because this memortica life is killing him. Maya just muttered it, like the answer was sitting right in front of him. With iron in hand, they finally hit the jackpot. She yanked her blade free. Blade yanked it up and clamped it right against her throat. Then both of them gasped, shouting in sync, what in the world is she doing? She shot back, clearly confused, insisting she wanted to be useful to the master, only for the butler to snap back with outrage, telling her to drop it. Memortica has plenty of iron, so the master's just slacking off. Then he leans toward the MC and murmurs, you haven't noticed she's been acting weird. Lately Nocturne couldn't help but stare in shock. Hasn't she always been this way? And then, with a jolt, he rose from the table and blurted it out. Lunch break's done, and they finally shoveled in something to eat. Now it's bedtime. He shot into bed like it was calling his name. Joseph snapped, furious. Listen, we've already got more than enough work to handle. But the protagonist didn't hear him anymore. After a while, he dropped into deep, heavy sleep. He jolted awake, stormed out to the servants, and the butler rushed over to swear he'd arrived just in time, because they were desperate for his help, and it looked like the trouble was already creeping in. Right now, they're sorting out the big issues for their domain, and then the protagonist stares them down and fires off. So tell me, what's actually stopping someone from reaching success? The servants stared at their master, totally dumbfounded. Then he just snapped, food. And honestly, for anyone to perform at their peak, you need fuel first. That's the whole foundation. Messing this up tanks your sleep quality fast. So when he scanned their to-do list, he demanded for. He grabbed a pen and scribbled it down, then threw in one more thing, something that wasn't memortica at all. Right after that, he said, so the big deal is this, now they can't eat memortica anymore, right? He treats that like it's priority number 1, and they need it gone. They've got to break off, hunt for food, and move fast. Joseph will head to Lawrence's plantation, while the mayor checks Sammy's field. The butler caught it too, Sammy, right? Yeah, those fields were being cared for properly, and the girl swore it. So that means they've got a CH. A chance finally opened up. MC nodded and gave the green light to start, and he personally decided to push even further. Push his skill to the edge of what it could really do, just a few steps from the. Inside the estate, he spotted a jelly slime, and from the way it behaved, it was an all-devouring monster that ate anything. Shakily and barely holding himself together, he reached out and touched it, whispering that this monster had swallowed something vital. Without a second thought, he plunged his hands into the creature and triggered the upgraded skill, right on the spot. He leveled up and the slime ballooned in size, thumping around like it was thrilled. Then he leaned back and rested his head on it, thinking, I knew it, it's insanely springy, soft, and comfy as anything. He dribbled the ball and it gurgled like a water pillow, so why did it smell like that? Did he really eat a strawberry? He was born to be a pillow, and right then, the slime lunged up, swallowed his head in goopy goo, and cutting off his oxygen supply, so the protagonist shot upright, ripped the slime off his head, gulped air, and then roared, S. Staring at the monster, he blurted, You've got to be kidding. Then he slammed the shrink skill, turning the creature tiny, and all he could think was, a nasty little revulsion crawled over me. Maybe this move wouldn't stand a chance against the tougher monsters. But who would have guessed it would still work on a living creature too? So now he'd need to make it happen, even with a pulse and all. So he decided to switch tactics. He fired up the shrink skill again, and this time he shrunk himself. His amazement exploded, he couldn't believe it. This is unreal. So he shrunk himself, staring in awe as he looked. He spun around, stared at the grass grown up over everything, and saw trash piled everywhere. He gasped, Wait, is this even a jungle? Out of nowhere, a massive bird bursts from the bushes and charges straight at him. MC's mind screams, What? It's trying to eat me. That's insane. But then boo. But the bird didn't attack. It leaned in like a buddy, revealing itself as a long-tailed kiwi, a rare species teetering on extinction, and even with all that, it could still fly. It finally flopped up onto its wing, settled in, and proudly admired the view, because this little thing wasn't meant to fly at all. it was born to be a futon. Those feathers were so soft they felt unreal, and at that exact moment, the long-tailed kiwi launched into the air, and the protagonist snapped, "My futon's flying." He launched into the air, then mid-flight, he crashed off the bird like the sky betrayed him. The bird shot forward, and then bit by bit, it started to drop, spinning its head as it scanned everything around. He wondered, if you hopped on a bird and took off, the scenery would blow your mind. The scenery looked gorgeous, but there's zero time to stop and admire it right now. No way, he's done for. He's tumbling down, and the second he hits, the protagonist grabs something soft and fluffy and cradles it like he just found salvation. He stared around, panicking, "Where am I?" And that calm, dreamy feeling kept washing over him like a warm wave, because the whole world was suddenly packed with brand new sensations. Soft grass sprawled everywhere, crowned with fuzzy blooms, and when the MC sank into it, his tiny heart felt pure bliss, because in his eyes, the whole world looked stunning. But the ground is way too far below, and that's what makes it even wilder, because in that exact moment, it felt perfect. Mia stepped up to him with stars in her eyes and blurted, "Wow, you're adorable." Then she leaned closer and asked, "But what are you even doing?" He said he's training a new skill, then asked, "What's she doing?" She answered, "The fence is busted, so monsters flooded every field, and I figured it'd be safer to team up." He begged her to help him for a bit, anything to keep Joseph from catching him. When they laughed and answered back, the protagonist snapped, "All right, then it's done," and her voice trailed off as she stared at what might come next. "Hey, could you just turn off the sun? This heat is brutal." The girl snapped, scanning the area, then grinned and said she'd be happy to serve, if that's what you wanted. Master, was he burning with heat? She edged closer, slipped the hem of her dress up, and started to create. He started building something like an awning and blurted, "How's this better?" Then stared at her, waiting for her answer. She jumps back in surprise, and still she feels weird. He blurts, "This isn't normal." Then he stares and realizes he can see everything, right there. Joseph stormed up to her and snapped, "What are you doing, and who? And who is she talking to?" When the protagonist showed up, his face went crimson with a blush. He snapped with pure indignation and blurted, "What on earth does this mean? Why is he forcing her to flash her underwear?" The MC snapped, and he never even asked her to do that. The butler kept going, because the mayor had warned him not to pin this on the master, or his own father would be furious. The old man barked at her to cover up, and she finally blurted that she was just trying to shield the master from the sun. The grass buckled with the screams, yanked the inflorescence tight and snapped at the others. "He wants you to be quiet. There's an earthquake right here." Then he couldn't even hold on. He stumbled and went down hard. Mayor lunged, but he couldn't grab him in time. Bang, he hit a rock. The girl gasped, panic in her voice, but he shot back, "Relax, it's nothing, just a scratch." Then the butler fell too. He dropped to his knees and started bowing like his life depended on it, begging his master for forgiveness, yelling that it was unforgivable for him to get hurt because of his mistake, while the protagonist reassured him, "Don't worry, everything's fine." The fine maid leaned in and demanded that he show her the wound. With her foot planted right on her lap, the girl slipped her. Cell activation blasted to life, and with it, the scratch shield snapped into place. Magnus thanked her, grinning, and said he was as good as new, so much so that there's not even a scrap left, so tell me what's her power. The mayor said she activates cells, which cranks up the natural healing of wounds. Then he murmured, "Cell activate." Could that crazy skill work on vegetables too, like the ones she was trying to use it on? Then bam, a tiny sprout burst up through the soil like it had something to prove. "The soil," she blurted out, joy lighting up her face. "Just a tiny bit, and that sprout shot up, and..." The MC snapped, "It's not that simple, you know," then quickly added, "But hey, she's actually doing great." Joseph cut in fast, "Either way, don't let him crawl into bed. Not yet." When night finally dropped, he had things to do. Then someone knocked, and he just lay there. Lying in bed, he heard something snap in the night, then peeked out of the house, heart pounding. He spotted the mayor grinning as he enthusiastically called out to Constance, mastering concentration from every angle and every kind of position, and using. When the sprout cells sparked to life, he couldn't stop thinking about her. She's totally off, like, did she eat something cursed? Feeling awful, she dropped to her knees beside the sprout, yawned and murmured. She laughed, said, "All right, it's at 10, then turned to the plant and begged it to grow bigger. Bigger, she insisted with fierce urgency. Their master can't go hungry. She's got to pay him back for what he lived through 10 years ago. No excuses then. A wild situation exploded. Sammy, the owner of the neighboring estate, found himself right in the middle of it. The villagers barreled in and stopped him cold. He erupted in a scream, brandishing his hoe, shouting at whoever dared steal from his field. Stop the thief, drag him to prison, and do it fast, before he turns around and beats that vile man himself. Rutherford barked an order, bring her in. It was Mia, and they dragged her straight into the room. A cold chain collar clamped her neck, shackles pinned her hands, and terror ripped through her body as she shook uncontrollably. Fear hit like a wave, Right then, the protagonist spun to Sammy and demanded he stop, pointing at her torn clothes as he said. He didn't think she was doing this for fun, she had to just to survive. Please, he begged, let me forgive her. Sammy blurted out in shock, because how was he supposed to live after everything that just happened? He answered that he would. So he figured he'd make up for the damage by selling one of the souvenirs his mom had given him. How could he even think he could pull that off? He paused in dead silence, then let out a heavy sigh and finally said, all right, I get it. He doesn't have to carry this, he's got to handle his own problems himself. The protagonist bowed deeply, and with a grateful smile, thanked him for his kindness and understanding. His father slammed a hand on his head and demanded, why did you do that? The MC snapped back, so your family's supposed to shield the ones you call your subjects, right? Wishart demanded to know what he'd do if she pulled that stunt again, then shrugged and said it was okay, because from this moment on, she was going to be his personal. He made it personal, and everyone erupted in shocked amazement, because what he just said left them totally stunned. Noct spun toward the girl and demanded her name, then she told him. He whispered it back in a trembling voice, then he apologized for asking why. Then right out of nowhere, he drops it. He has urgent work for her, and she has to rush to make his bed. Can she pull it off? Can she handle it? And now the mayor finally spoke up, shouting that the young man's out here causing trouble. The master had pulled off the impossible, saving a girl whose life was hanging by a thread. Now it was her turn to jump in and save him. He stared at it, and the girl kept looking at the sprout with a heart full of sadness. So why couldn't she lift a finger when he needed her help the most? If she couldn't help him in even the smallest way, then what was the point of her existence at all? So she sprang. He got fully pumped, braced his mind, and started activating his concentration again, pushing hard to make it work. A tiny sprout sprang up, and the protagonist snapped back to his father's words, protect it. Stand guard over his people, the way only he was capable of. The antagonist cracked his knuckles, then pushed his skill to the limit to see exactly what it could do. It kickstarts your cells, sends natural wound healing into overdrive, and get this, those enlargement and reduction powers can even work on living beings. You stepped up to her and told her, try again. She stared. Stunned by his presence, she hit the cell activation. But that sprout only crept up a single millimeter, and Mare's frustration finally boiled over. And tried again, he reached out, placing his hand on hers, clamped onto her shoulder and triggered her enlargement power, right in that instant. Power surged, and in that exact heartbeat, the sprout shot forward, grew into a full-fledged plant, and the MC's shock practically burst out of him. He even admitted he never expected it. God handed him exactly what he needed, pure, perfect power. Now the answer finally slammed into place. He could see the exact route to using his ability. If you master reduction, it unlocks everything an object can truly be, and when you stack it with other skills, the possibilities explode wide open. Disability is simply limitless. Mare burst into shock. How did that happen? He demanded, and then he answered himself. He paired that surge with cell activation, and yeah, he didn't know if it would actually work, but the pain in his body wouldn't lie. His suffering wasn't even close to what she dreamed. His family was gone. They had zero money, zero food, and he still had the nerve to stay. He just was buzzing with joy, picturing Joseph and the others right there beside him. So he leaned on them like always, and the girl's eyes welled up with tears, overwhelmed by everything she was feeling. She finally heard it, and right then he reached out his hand toward her, just like he had before. He saved her, then she grabbed his hand, smiled bright, and answered. Of course he could count on them, so they all marched right into the house. Then the butler burst out of the room and took note of. He shot a look of shock, because even he couldn't believe it. The young master was awake, and something about his behavior felt really off. Noct said they'd cracked the food problem, and the old man snapped in shock. Wait, you mean after all that? But his words trailed off. The mayor swept them in for dinner and beamed as she announced the feast. Fried avocado and arugula with no breading or batter, plus crispy fried asparagus, beans, and peppers. And of course there was the vegetable soup, packed with the kind of nutrition that actually hits hard. The butler took one taste, lit up with genuine awe, and praised how perfectly balanced everything was. The healthiest food of all time. MC couldn't hold it in and blurted out, "That's delicious." Then the girl clutching a pyramid of cups grinned and said, "There's more." Wait, there's more. Noct was stunned like, wasn't that too much? The girl slid into her seat with a book, and Joseph snapped, "She's not behaving right at the table." She snapped back, "It doesn't matter. We've finally got all the ingredients, so stop using excuses. Now go study." The old man leaned in and asked, "You're not forcing her, are you?" And the protagonist shot back, "Of course not," then warned her, "Just don't overdo it." After a beat, Mia slammed the book shut, flashed a grin and answered, "Yes, she'll push herself harder and rise to the level he's set for her." The protagonist scoffed, and right out loud, he brushed it off like it was nothing. "Vegetables are great, sure, but I want meat right now." The maid snapped, and in the next breath she grabbed, before cutting off the rest like it was already moving. She snatched a knife and lunged toward cutting off part of her own leg. Then the butler exploded up, horrified, and yanked the blade away, while MC blurted, "Could she? Can she please stop cracking those jokes?" Knocked finally snapped, then slammed an earthen shield into place. The mayor never stopped. He hauled water in buckets like a warhorse, then rebuilt a stone stove from his sheath piece by piece. Then it hit him this world didn't run on skills alone. Magic was real here, and it came in 6 deadly elements: fire, water, wind, earth, light, and darkness. He was born with earth and fire magic, and the protagonist scrambled to light up a flame, trying to activate it. He blasted a fireball, and when it hit, he grabbed the flames and lit a torch right from it. It cranked the heat higher and then, whoosh, it finally set the wood in the stove ablaze. Mayor Dove gasped with admiration. Of course he'd say it, because everyone knew he was the fire god's favorite. He nodded and told her she could count on him, and once everything was set and the heat hit the exact mark. After making it inside, he slowly eased into the scalding bath and muttered that about half a month had gone by. Now he could finally relax. He sank in, bliss hit him instantly, and he burst out. What a spiritual delight. The butler yanked his fogged-up glasses and muttered, "This is a real desert for him," and the protagonist cupped water in his hands, whispering in pure bliss, watching the shimmering surface catch the endless. A blue sky stretched overhead. What else could anyone want for true happiness? The mayor, clutching towels, leaned in and asked if he needed anything else, and she swore she wouldn't say no to a gentle chamomile fragrance. Just wrap her up in that sweet, fruity scent. He muttered, staring at his glasses, then admitted he'd rather see without them, because this haze had never fogged his lenses up like this before, and if only he could just wipe it clean with something. MC blurts out, totally stunned, "Wait, what are you even talking about? Stop dreaming the impossible, or it's only going to get worse." And the moment Joseph says it, the servants snap out of it instantly. Noah yanked on his glasses and shot, "Maybe there'll be a sale tomorrow." Then Noct blurted in shock, "Wait, what are you talking about?" The old man answered, "Right on schedule, that merchant train rolls in tomorrow, and because he and Rutherford are solid, he's got the inside connection." She just said so. And once he showed up, this guy was the real deal. You could order pretty much anything you wanted the moment he arrived. His rivals, especially that young master, always crashed for a midday nap, while his allies just stood there with their arms crossed. They passed the mic around and shouted their wishes, until the protagonist demanded a memory foam pillow, and the mayor barked, "Champ." Chamomile sent the package. Joseph threw in a white frame for eyeglasses. Then the friends slammed their fists together, and MC shouted. The next day, when the merchant rail finally rolled in, their lives suddenly looked brighter, because the moment he saw those estate grounds in their ruined state, horror gripped him. The protagonist grabbed his suitcase, bowed politely, and said the long trip must have wiped everyone out. Then the mayor scooted into view, asked the comrade who'd come with the merchant if they wanted lunch or maybe a hot bath, before the moment could even finish. When the merchant got a quick rundown of what was happening, he snapped his gaze to the protagonist, shocked, and demanded, "So you're the new owner of this land?" MC fired back that yes, he was, then tossed over his name, making the merchant drop to both knees, but, melted like a dream in front of him, she politely kissed his hand and murmured, "My name was Rail," and he welcomed him. Nock just stood there, thoughts shy and quiet. Honestly, it felt so unreal. This was the first time he'd ever run into something like this. The merchant told them he and his missing father had actually gotten along great back in the day. Even now, when the trading's rolling, he still lives by his father's advice, like it's tattooed on his soul, and the protagonist swore he could smell something minty in the air. He caught himself, shot a sheepish grin, and admitted it. "Sorry," he said, because of course he only ever talks about himself. Now it was time to get down to business. Yanking open his suitcase, the merchant leaned in and asked if he wanted to buy any. The moment the protagonists saw it, they were blown away by just how elegant it was. Ray said, "Go on, tell him to have it all, whatever you want. He's got everything your heart could ever crave." The MC shot a shocked look and blurted, "Wait, what on earth could possibly fit in a suitcase that small?" Joseph glanced over and realized the pillow he wanted wasn't there, then awkwardly asked, like he didn't want to make it weird, "Does he have a cleaning cloth for his glasses?" Rail snapped his head toward Pico, who gripped the drum and started hammering it with fierce, solemn power. To the thump of the drum, the merchant snatched up the request and drove it forward. He yanked the requested item out of the suitcase and blurted, "Of course I've got it." He burst out in delight, and the sweet chamomile smell hit the air. Fragrance burst into the air, then, right on the drum's beat, the merchant yanked the bottle out. He barreled back, shoved it into the girl's hands, then slammed through the door and knocked in a flash. He snatched his pillow, bolted out the door, then blurted at the rail, "I switched to a memory foam pillow. but this slime one is still not gonna feel like it's worth a damn, Pico. Rico blurted out in shock. The memory foam hit, the protagonist's hearts dropped, and he immediately started thinking. Sure, they've got nothing like that, no rails on the side, so they just ordered it and went. Pico stepped up to drum, he stared him down. He snapped in with a jolt of surprise, and started hammering the drum at once. The merchant tore through his suitcase for ages, digging and digging like the answer was buried at the bottom. Every few moments, he would snap his eyes back to the protagonist. Everyone went stone still in total suspense. Then, at last, the man yanked out what he needed and blurted, "We've got it." Pico crumpled to the ground, stunned. The protagonists froze in shock. Wait, really? Rail snagged 5,200 gold from them. The MC counted every coin and froze. 3,000 gold, and still it wasn't enough. He thrust the pile out, bewildered, and the merchant just chuckled, sliding over a choice: the pillow or the air freshener, and a napkin to go with it. Noah drifted into deep thought. Then, like a switch flipping, Noct finally snapped into a decision and said, masking his heartbreak, the owner forces himself to take it on. He had to look after his people, so he handed the coins straight to the merchant, and he grabbed the air freshener, wrapped it up in a napkin, and said, "We've got a deal." Later that night, he tossed and turned until sleep just wouldn't come. He just winked and couldn't stop thinking about that pillow. After what felt like forever, he burst into the merchant's tent. Rail blinked in shock at his arrival and blurted out. "And he told him you could have just called." The protagonist shot back. "Yeah, it happened that way." "What happened? Did you really just offer veggies?" Pico thanked him, then turned to the man and demanded answers. "Are you sure? Because they could absolutely use those beds." The mansion, like, for 3,000 goals. Rail just sighed and admitted they were already used to this kind of place, and the protagonist couldn't help but notice that heartbreakingly, this was just how it was. "Is that so? Then what about the bath? Freshly made just now, and they're offering a special deal for them," the merchant asked. With a shocked gasp, the MC blurts, "Yeah, sure, and the bath shop's like, you can use it for just 3,000 goals, or..." Rail studied him like he was a puzzle and asked, "Do you truly believe building a bath is your destiny?" "Destiny right now," he muttered, baffled. "Then my destiny? Nope." He cut himself off because making a bath was the will. Up in the clouds like a promise from heaven, then a merchant lit a cigar and mumbled, "I see." Noct stared at, "If that's the case, they're never showing up here again." Pico stared at him, totally baffled, then sprinted right up, clutching a ladle filled with water. Water slammed into him and a voice blurted, "We've got to kill the light, and snuff that cigar too." Rail promised he'd let it slide, but they flat out refused to bathe, then crashed from exhaustion, and the scene cut off mid. Wait. After he left, the protagonist replayed every word in his head, already convinced they'd never return here again. Why would he say that, right here? Because even from this spot, he could still smell the merchant's stall. That sweet scent hit him, and just like that, the realization snapped into place. No way that smell wasn't some random thing, it was a monster, closing in. The man looked on edge, and when he said they were used to this, it sounded like a warning hanging in the air. His kind of sleeping arrangements and staying away from baths. Then, if he ever stepped into the bath, bare and he'd be completely defenseless. So the protagonist marched straight toward the source of that smell and he blurted out, shocked, then realized it was nothing but a slime when he told his allies. Allies started to speak about the rail and Maya froze in pure confusion. "Wait, what did he just say?" "The merchant won't come back," Joseph demanded. MC snapped back, "But why?" And it was clear they weren't guessing, they'd already seen monsters. Out in their fields, right, and they've practically got 0 people living there. Their territory is insanely deadly, and there's not even a fence in sight, so nobody dares come here to trade. Let them forgive him for messing up his priorities, and for somehow building a bath. The butler warned that it would be a real tragedy if Rael ever stopped visiting them again. He was the living thread that held everything together. If that exchange with him ever stopped, everything would unravel fast and right away. Lands would stop growing, the knock hit with a gloomy thud, and he'd never get to buy that pillow. Then it hit him out of nowhere. He blurted, "They'll build a fence, so Rail has to come back and visit." The mayor shot back with doubts and he answered, "Can we really finish this before morning?" Trust him, they've got to believe him. He's got a plan. With those words blazing in the air, he slammed his hand onto Joseph's shoulder, and the butler stared at him in shock. And a little later, he was hauling massive, heavy logs like it was nothing. All his might, the protagonist channeled his muscle-enhancing skill, and just like that, the butler looked like a beast, muscles bulging under his skin. Joseph slammed the logs like they were nothing, sharpened both ends, then lashed them tight together. The protagonist stared at him, and with his help in mind, made his decision. Help these guys crank out 10 meters of fence every single hour. They'll run out of time and resources before more. Morning hit, and he honestly believed his plan was genius. Then Mayor asked him. MC wondered if she could help him. She figured he'd finally appreciate a bath, especially after. After all that sweat, he blinked in shock, then shouted, "A bath," and knocked hard. Staring at the girl like she'd just unlocked a secret, he suddenly blurts out, "A purr." Right then, a perfect idea detonated in his mind. Railwork Pico came in hot, and his assistant fired off a cheerful "good morning" before the merchant's handed him an item and said, "You dropped a drumstick," and Pico was. Rail was caught off guard, then he snatched his chance and hit it, Rail packing his suitcase so fast. Rutherford had pulled him up when it mattered most. If only he could finally return the favor and help. Maybe it could help, but nope, this is impossible, and things are way worse than he ever imagined. But seriously, why is the protagonist even building a bath right now in the middle of all this chaos? Is he trying to run from reality, because the weight of being a ruler is crushing him, too much to bear? Perfect for him, no fences means this place barely even deserves to be called a domain. He met Pico's eyes and apologized for dragging him into such a brutal, dangerous place, but when the merchant finally stepped out from inside his tent, he went stone still, then froze with pure shock. The estate grounds were locked in by a tall, unshakable high wall that stood guard all around. He stared past the fence, and the merchant burst out in stunned amazement, like what he was seeing was straight up impossible. In just one night, he and Pico pushed it to the limit, and it came back even more mind-blowing than before. He stared in stunned amazement. Then the main character was straight up dozing on the mare's lap. Lap broke into laughter as she fanned him with a branch, then nudged her master like, "Come on, wake up." Master blurted out in sheer shock, and Hill has finally shown up, and the merchant stared at him, completely stunned. MC grinned and told them he'd fused his skills with earth magic. Yeah, the power was coming. Pico couldn't stop admiring it. They made it before morning, and honestly, that luck feels almost too convenient. Rail struck back, "Wait, it isn't that easy. Pulling off something like this takes a ridiculous amount of work, like, absolutely colossal. How in the world did they pull off something this insane in just one night? It all blew up on this massive scale in just a blink. Then it hit him, he blurted out, "Should we just push this to tomorrow, or is that a mistake for example?" MC snapped back that tomorrow could already be too late. Thanks for driving it into him. This place is insanely dangerous. He didn't even dare picture a world where he couldn't protect them. With those words, he snapped his finger and pointed at his assistants. Rail grinned and said he finally got his purpose, then he wanted to show him something. He pointed at one exact spot, told everyone to stand there and join hands. Once all four followed suit, he slammed a tiny piece of the memordica right in the middle, and slammed magnification into place. Then the memordica ballooned to colossal size in an instant. Hurling the allies skyward, he watched them vanish into the clouds, while the merchant gasped, stunned by what he'd just witnessed. A memorial. An Amortica elevator. Are they honestly still hiding something to blow their minds? The protagonist shrank the moment he faced the Amortica. Then the comrades dropped down to the ground, and the protagonist led the guests straight to a huge open-air bath carved into the wall. The merchant gasped in disbelief. He was seeing a bath again. He shot back right then. Yeah, they'd never had a real chance to bathe before, but out here, they could finally breathe easy and feel totally safe. He stared the merchant down and said, "Man, you really need to get this pillow, like, right now." "Let him come back again," Rahl snapped, staring straight at him. "A merchant has to bring one essential thing to the table, because without it, he can't possibly be." MC blurted, stunned, "Wait, you can actually tell the value. You're telling me that?" The man snapped, because he insisted anyone could figure out a thing's monetary value. In their case, they realize something way bigger matters. He points him straight to what truly counts. He clutched the precious stone in his palm, wrapped it up tight with a handkerchief, and kept going, his mind locked in on only protecting his territory was the goal. But when he knocked, he wasn't thinking about anything except what came next. He kept asking himself how to light up someone's world, even with everything falling apart. And when he looked into the faces of his assistants, he finally saw his own worth clearly. Like, he really didn't want to say it out loud. He tore himself free of that kind of person, and when he yanked the handkerchief away, a fresh rose bloomed in his palm, no stone in sight. Handing it to the protagonist, the merchant leaned in and promised he'd come back again next time. The protagonist blurts out with pure, unstoppable joy. He blurted, then jabbed his finger in one direction and said, "That way, there's the safest park to nap, where you can sprawl out and doze to your heart's content." He yanked his clothes off and snapped back, Yeah, everything's great, but we're starting with a bath first." The MC couldn't believe it. When he looked in the mirror, he realized he was way more muscular than he ever expected. He stared at the door knock, then looked up and said, "With your permission, I'm gonna use the bath." Then, after a bit, the allies watched as Mare splashed around with Pico in the tub. He yanked off his towel and shot back, "Seriously, why are you covering up? This isn't a swimming pool. then the butler. The butler snapped back in fury. What is that young master thinking, stripping in front of a girl and the guests? Then after a while the whole place turned into a bathtub chaos fest. Pico cornered the merchant and demanded, so what's with the protagonist, huh? What is he even doing? He's totally messed up. Weird Rail shot back. Yeah, he's right. This guy is nothing like Mr. Rutherford. But that's exactly why he's so damn interesting. Now he's the new boss of these lands, so what kind of world is he about to build? After a while, MC finally snapped his thoughts toward his father, and realized with a jolt that a whole month had already slipped by since they started rebuilding their holdings. Thanks to the teamwork with Mia, they finally crushed the food problem, earth magic in his hands and pure skill behind it, and then he rebuilt those walls brick by brick. Then Rail kept the trades rolling like nothing could stop them. Working with them, his next move was straight to human resources. Maya hunched over his telescope, snapped, Rail, right there in the heat of the moment. Rail's scribbling out a sign right now, and it looks like he's got migrants trailing right behind him. Noct grinned, already buzzing with an idea. He'd march right up to the merchant, beg for help, and use his skill to make things move. Rail would get his cut, half the money made from those gems. Joseph grinned so wide it hurt, then suddenly worried. Maybe he shouldn't be blasting the skill like that, because now their revival might have been getting cut off. The story is finally complete, can you believe that? The protagonist nodded and said, yeah, obviously, because that's exactly what he'd been thinking. Now he could finally kick back for real. Then just a short time later, he was already face to face with a merchant, grilling him on how things were going. Rail leaned in and said, yeah, we're going. Then he hit them with, I brought 4 migrants, and left it hanging. He wheeled around, and right as the merchant did the usual routine, he reached into his suitcase while Pico started beating those drums again. The protagonist just watched, stunned. What was he up to? Were those guys jammed in the suitcase too? Then, right at that moment, a cart screeched to a stop. A car squealed in behind him, and right after it stopped, the migrants spilled out. Laughed yanked a thing from the suitcase and blurted, that's it, like it just changed everything. MC is eyeing a fresh souvenir straight from the capital, like it just landed in his hands. Arrivals froze in shock. Beastman. Rail answered without missing a beat. But he didn't need to panic. Those weren't former slaves, and he figured they'd been hit with all kinds of punishments simply because they didn't fit the equal standard. They picked this road themselves. Noct stared at the eldest and said her eyes shone with blood-red fury. Her apron carried the weight of it all, every single wound, every ounce of sadness reflecting back at her from the things she'd had to survive. Endure, wait, who is she? The girl looked up and said, Olivia. She leaned in and told her daughter, go on, introduce yourself. And the girl barely found her voice as she whispered her name. Kuklua. The protagonist flashed a warm, nice to meet you, and introduced himself. Right then, Jelena cut in and said, perched on the carriage roof with her brother, she stared at the protagonist and snapped, he's too short to be a feudal lord. The lord, Rob snapped back, like he'd been made for this from the start. She grumbled because she hated children. He replied. He snapped back, let 'em come down, up here it's deadly. Up there when they launched into the jump, he froze and let out a shocked gasp. Why their dwarves, even with those tiny frames, were already full-grown adults. Rog shot him a look and admitted they'd only just stepped into adulthood, turning 121 this very year. Then Jelena said, I'm Jelena, and immediately introduced her brother. The protagonist dropped their gaze to their feet and noticed. He jolted in shock and realized the ground had caved in beneath him. Jelena snapped back irritably, right on the mark, nothing special, just average weight. Wait, Joseph snapped, fury rising as he told his lord. You don't talk to girls like that. What happened to his manners? He quickly, sheepishly apologized to Julie. Jelena slammed her hammer down and snapped, this weapon is so. The rail was so packed that MC could barely breathe. And even then, there were tons of people clawing their way to the capital. Those dwarf clans plunged into the work, building the capital's towering crown from the ground up. He couldn't believe it, those guys were top-tier first-class carpenters, and that very tower was proof. And why in the world would top-tier craftsmen choose to come all the way here? Rog tried to speak up, but Jelena whacked him on the head with a hammer. He shot it down hard, he shouldn't say a word, then she blurted out that they want to see the world around them. Around them, he clocked something. Like these people had their own reasons for pushing on, and still, somehow, thanks to them, they can rebuild their homes. Rog, head bowed deep into his collar, muttered to his sister, why'd you have to be so cruel? Cruelly, Noct told them he'd spotted the capital's tower. So, she stood tall and breathtaking, then the dwarves fired back, sure we're small but we're not done yet. But their deeds felt straight up divine, Galena said. That big was the same kind of divine. Dwarves eat that stuff up. And Rog swore the blueprint for the capital was. His sister forged the tower, and as soon as he begged to see the model, she built it for him. The protagonist grabbed the model and stared at it with pure awe. praising how insanely detailed it was. Leaning in on Galina, he caught it instantly. She was absolutely thrilled. The moment he laid eyes on the Capitol Tower in real life, he blurted out how blown away he was. So huge and jaw-dropping. He stared at Galina's annoyed face and immediately wondered what kind of reaction she was cooking up. He kept going, rebuilding an insane-sized tower from that tiny little model. Like, how is that even possible? Galina snapped ROG across the head again and snapped, irritated. Enough she couldn't even explain why rage was burning in her chest, and the MC just stared like, I don't get it. He snapped, all right, let them try again, and the words turned into pure, heartfelt gratitude. He's grateful they stayed, and now he has to fill them in on what's going on, fast. He broke it all down, laid out every guarantee, and then shoved the sheet of paper straight into Olivia's hands. The girl flicked her eyes to it, and froze when she realized it was marking the food reserves. Nock did hesitate. Yeah, that's right. Then he whipped out an apple as his example and showed off how his enlarged skill really works. Then he added, apologizing as he admitted it's mostly just vegetables. Vegetables? Kaklua's jaw literally dropped, and he stared in stunned disbelief. She's got fangs, so tell me, why isn't everyone freaking out? Out of nowhere, the beastwoman burst forward like a lightning strike. The protagonist couldn't stop thinking, where in the world is she headed? And the girl sprinted off toward her. He ripped the vegetables straight out of the garden and hauled every last one over to her. When it hit him, he stared in shock. She was crazy strong. Kaklua shot a question, could he make them bigger too? Olivia snapped back to her daughter that she absolutely shouldn't. But the protagonist grinned, and with a snap, the vegetables swelled bigger right in front of him. The girl's request, Kaklua snapped into action, greed burning bright as he began gnawing into that root vegetable. She reached out and grabbed the MC's sleeve, and Stephen called him father, and his eyes locked on her like something in him snapped. Olivia looked at her in total confusion and blurted, I love vegetables. Vegetables? They were lucky the owner was so kind. He glanced at the girl, caught sight of her bright smile, and when she saw her she thought, she's basically a tiny little fox. So Olivia asked how they could ever repay him, and Noct said, the rule above all rules in their lands is simple. If you want to work, you work. No point in wasting effort on anything else. Doing something you hate. He snapped his head toward the girl and said like, for example, she's obsessed with vegetables, huh? So why not take it a step further and grow her own? Kaklua burst out, thrilled beyond words. She will. She would. He ruffled her hair with a grin, then told her he was betting everything on her. Rock grabbed Jelena and snapped, what do we do now? And she shot back, obviously. Every single day they dropped flat on the ground. Then the dwarf used those exact words, laid himself down, and showed them how it was done. She stared at him, baffled. Wait, how is this possible? I thought they were going to fix everything and get our land back. Lands, Galina blurted, stunned. What's wrong? He asked, because only those who want to. The protagonist finally dragged himself to work, totally baffled, because if he doesn't work for him, then he can't stay lazy. So he snapped, hold up, lazy. What is she even saying? They've got talent. You won't believe it, they refuse to work, because they're too busy trying to create something wild. Right, don't you let them quit. Jelena stared at him in shock, then shoved him with the hammer, snarling. Enough with the talking, make him answer for what he said right now. Is he the owner or what? Kaklua stepped up to him and warned them to stop teasing her brother. Jelena just muttered and grumbled under her breath. Kids shouldn't barge into adult conversations. Stay out of it and let grown-ups talk. The girl shot back with a fair answer, so all right, let them get to work. Because they were grown adults, the whole room froze, and everyone stared at her in shock. He stared into the eyes, and the dwarf finally muttered, not bad for a dogger that might just get us a response. He shot back by calling her lazy, and the dwarf snapped, how dare she say that? She had labeled her a total layabout. The girl shot back, I'm a real pest. Like she was disgusted that some people just sit there and take gifts like it's all they're good for. They're nothing but walking corpses, like it's the most normal thing in the world. Olivia, totally baffled, leaned in and asked her daughter, what are you even saying? She snapped back that she couldn't take it anymore. She was done, and every single day she'd just sit there and hear a brand new excuse from them. All they could think about was getting drunk. Then the real problem hit. Where were they supposed to find the money? Olivia snapped at her daughter, enough. And Jelena's composure shattered, tears erupted, and she managed, okay. All right, she'll work. MC thought it was downright touching. He gently stroked Kuklua's head and couldn't stop smiling, thinking, she's so smart. He thanked the dwarves out loud and blurted, will you forgive me for rushing like that? But could he squeeze out one more request? Jelena shot back, let him do what? Do what he wants, just don't let him in on the fact that it's time to start building the house. He shut that down immediately. No, not at all. He stormed them straight to his father's study and slammed the news down. A crack had shown up in the wall. You mean to tell me you'll just let this slide? They fixed it, Jelena blinked and asked, what? Even with no breakfast, Rog still had to say something. But she cut him off right there and told him to hit the bed for now, then turned to Noct and said, "And you. So he needs to haul himself out of here too, because he'll only slow everything down." Confused out of her wits, the protagonist bowed to her, blurted out thanks, and then hurried out of the study. He felt the cracks nagging at him, dragged his hand along the door and the walls, then snapped his gaze back to his father, brother and mother, promising them that the master who built the capital's tower himself would take care of the repairs. This house, just like that, the one room where their family memories were locked away, erupted in a horrifying roar that shook the whole house. Then everything lurched, and the protagonist bolted into the study, hearing Rod's panicked voice as he spoke to his sister. MC leaned toward his sister's room, peered into the study, and grinned, wondering if it was too loud to slip in and patch everything up. One tiny crack was all it took. What he saw hit him like a truck, and the wall with that fracture had already fallen apart completely, revealing their property in the yawning hole. Jelena, staring out the window, paused and murmured, "Now that things have taken this turn, they..." With those words, she slid right over the rough edge, like, "They've got to finish this off," and then she smoothed over the... He leaned in over the cracks and demanded answers, then pushed harder until he could finally hear everything in that study. He wore a crushed, heartbreak look, like the whole world had flipped upside down, and he couldn't even say her name out loud. For a split second, she couldn't stop staring, pure shock on her face, while Rog yanked his head down and buried it in his collar. She whipped her head toward Noct, panic screaming, as the wall crashed down. Then it all hit, the pendant fell by itself, and the protagonist's legs instantly buckled out from under him. The attendant slipped right out of his hands, crashed down, and he dropped to his knees. Then a sudden thought hit him. His father's office wasn't just a room, it felt like a whole world, and in that exact moment it all hit him. He remembered coming. Rutherford came running here as a little boy, spun around to face his father and burst out, joy blazing in his voice. "I'm here. You've got to see who's come to meet you." Once more, his father yanked him into a chair, and when the moment finally hit, the protagonist burst out with joy like he couldn't hold it in. As always, the softest Wishard, still sucking on his pacifier, looked them dead in the eye and said, "No, you can't do that," and made it sound like the end of the conversation. When he grows up, he's gonna park himself in his chair. But after they both grow up, his father steps in, scolds him for it, pats MC on the head and says, "Listen, you've got to help your brother," he snapped back. And just like that, Rutherford spun around and said the same thing to Wishart. Now it was time to ditch the pacifier for good. This office was the very place where all three of them had spent so much time. They're together for a moment, but now tell me, what on earth is this, Jelena? Staring in disbelief at how sluggish he'd become, she choked out the words, her hands trembling with fear. After that, she dropped to the floor and let out a chilling howl. Right then, Rael burst through the doorway and demanded to know what all that noise was about. He stepped in, scanned everything fast, and snapped, "I see it." Listen, hunters were the kind of people who jumped at it, and they all nodded in agreement, as long as they got one condition. They would. They were about to get a roof over their heads, and meat on top of it, so Nox's me twitched. And he couldn't stop thinking, what does it really mean to be a feudal lord, and why should he never turned his back on his people, so he could truly see their strengths and weaknesses and make sure they're ecstatic. Then, snapping back to his senses, he whips his head around, stunned by where July. Jelena bolted off, then stared at those smashed footprints, and couldn't help wondering what a dwarf weighs on average. He went hunting for her, and after a tense stretch, he finally spotted her. There she was. "She is, and she's not stopping. Let me sit next to her." Jelena snapped, pure frustration boiling in her voice. Frustration crackled in his voice. Was he about to march in and scold her? Then he blurted, "Everyone messes up. As the local owner, he makes nothing but blunders too. Her hands just..." She just trembled right. She glanced at him sheepishly and blurted out, "What, are you stupid? To fall for someone that dumb?" Pathetic excuse. Truth is, she doesn't know how to build a thing, and she can't even. She keeps swinging and somehow never lands the blow, like the hammer's cursed. And every time her strength runs wild because she can't control it. For a dwarf, nothing tops building something legendary, so she bolted from home, chasing her dream before anyone could stop her. Home, there's nothing left for her to do but build those models, and with those exact words, she wasted no time and blew everyone away by crafting a model of. Between two towering fortresses, a bridge stretched across the gap, and the protagonist blurted out, completely baffled. "Fusion? Wow, seriously, what do you have to do to make this bridge sway like that? Isn't that way too cool?" She answered with a shy little smile. "Yeah, it's a..." He stared at the bridge. It should have been swaying, and because it was built out of sand, he couldn't help but look at it. He stared at her in shock and blurted out whether she liked huge buildings too. "He gets it, these are the dwarves, usual, widely accepted values. But doesn't she love making those little model palaces? Just look at the two of them. She said it's weird for a dwarf to do that, and MC shot back that, honestly, it's really. Yeah, so what if being different is hard? He wants to build a place where everyone can chase the things they love. No limits. Love and oh, he wants to sleep all day long. Jelena blurted, totally stunned. What? He said he can knock out in 3 seconds. Seriously, how is that even real? Wait, what? That smug little look, what was she really sensing there? If that was the case, then her talent mattered way more than ever. Let him see. 1 second later, a full-on model house snapped into place right in his hands. His hands, crafted to perfection, down to every tiny detail, came together and knocked. Then he blurted it out in a burst of excitement. She gasped, stunned by how exquisite it all was. Down to the windows and doors opening just like that. Then she chuckled awkwardly and replied. He just answered without thinking, then leaned in and wondered, what if I unleash my power on this? The protagonist instantly slammed the model's magnification, and it ballooned into something absolutely. Jelena blurted out in disbelief. Her model had ballooned into something absolutely massive. He swore he knew it, and that his magnification could be the key they'd use. Right before their eyes, even her model turned into a real, full-fledged house. So everyone there stared at the thing in pure, jaw-dropping disbelief. Juliana suddenly snapped back to how her fellow tribesmen had mocked her. Was she a dwarf, or what? And the whole thing felt like some pathetic joke, and the Magnus slapped a steady hand on her shoulder, and boldly declared that she could. Kuklua screamed, she's going to live here. Right as they were trying to build the house. Olivia grinned like it was the best thing ever. The mayor grinned and declared that the interior decoration was downright jaw-dropping. Joseph hurriedly wound the wall clock, and Jelena, shocked, repeated MC's words. A place where people live for what they love. Rog talked to her and said, good thing we came here. She nodded right back. Rail spun around, stunned. And this is a model. Even this is a model. Model Knock thought, so where's the bed? A few days later, the protagonist was tearing through the forest after a rabbit. Then he whipped out a knife. He blurted, gotcha, and with that, he whipped the blade through the air and slammed it into the animal. The rabbit bolted to safety, and the knife jammed into a tree, and he sprinted over to him. He tried to snatch the weapon, then an apple smashed his head, yet no miracle kicked in, unlike what happened to one of the scientists. Greg and Luz blurting out, what is he doing? The protagonist then rubbed the bruised spot and with a resigned sigh, he addressed each of them by name. Name, he stuck on them, and the girl fires up her enhanced vision like a switch. Vision sharpening in her mind, she knocked her arrow, locked in a precision shot, and let it fly. It hit the target. Meanwhile, Greg, using his knives, slammed down and stopped his blade mid-swing, like the world caught its breath. A rabbit and a bird, then boom, he blurted, excellent. 2 birds. Luz muttered, it's not really 1 stone, but still, he's a good guy. As the man twisted through the moment like a champ. Knife tips glinting as he strolled, he calmly said, everything's going exactly to plan. Then the MC stared at them, stunned, then said exactly what you'd expect from hunters, excellent work. And the moment he finished, his eyes snapped to another animal and he said, in total confusion, he yanked his knife from the tree. Then boom, not just an apple dropped, a whole bee came flying down too. Beehive then right in that exact second, when he finally saw the deer and those forest bees barreled in on them. And Luz snapped back with arrows, while Greg unleashed his fireball skill. Nox muttered, fine, I'll let them handle it, then flashed his thanks to Jelena and let out a breath like, so it's on them now. Their whole domain sparked into beauty overnight. Then boom, 2 new arrivals crashed in. Luz, Elf, and Greg. An adventurer. Meanwhile, Luz told her partner to get the sticks ready, because the hunters had already built some kind of. They hauled those carved wooden stretchers out, and laid the gutted carcasses right on them. Greg blurts out, what a catch today. And the protagonist grins, after a month and a half, they'll finally find. All right, Greg, now we're finally getting to eat meat, he said, and right then it hit. Time to head home and whip up something ridiculously delicious. Delicious, then MC shot a confused look and hurried after them, praying they'd whip it up and eat it on the spot, and just then he asked, maybe they could chow down here, and the view was absolutely breathtaking. So the adventurer nodded and agreed. He's probably right, the view here is unreal, and he'll call the others as soon as he's done, because that's what they told him to do, stay put. Day and start a fire, he'd call the others himself, and after a bit, everyone finally gathered. Huddled around the firelight, they just stared, stunned by how beautiful the flames were. Olivia and the mayor dove into the poultry and vegetables, while Joseph and Greg hurried along, cutting off mid-sentence. Skewered meat sizzled on the grill, and the moment the dishes started cooking, Rael tore open the wine. The protagonist thought, this is it, pure bliss. The moment the meat finally hit the grill. She licked her lips, snatched it up, and declared, perfect, medium's the way to go. Medium rare, the protagonist slammed on the brakes, then she used his boosted skill. Skill exploded into action, and he piled on the cooked dishes until Mia and the butler fell. They dropped to their knees in front of their master, and the girl burst out, "He's just wonderful." Joseph, eyes shining as he fished out a napkin, swore, "I'll follow our dear master anywhere." Lou gasped, staring at the gigantic plates, and Greg couldn't help blurting, "What on earth? That's the size of a whole piece of meat." Jelena stared at the meat, confused. What was with all the drama? Joseph shoved it into her hands like a trophy and ordered her to take the biggest piece for their beloved master. He smiled warmly at the butler, then snatched the plate right out of his hands. Staring at the meat with pure hunger, MC finally swallowed it, like he'd been waiting forever. His hands shook with unstoppable anticipation. Then, out of nowhere, he burst into a scream. Hot steam blasted up as the plate rattled in his grip, and the meat slid right up. It skidded off the platter and shot forward, totally unshaken. No clue how he managed it, but he slid the plate under the meat in a flash. He went for the meat, then, shockingly, it kept sliding forward like it had a mission, and he lunged after it, snapping at the piece with his teeth. Maya bared his teeth, then the butler snapped, "Be reasonable," as Maya practically screamed in panic. He can't risk his life like that, so the protagonist. Chasing that meat, he couldn't stop himself, thinking, even if he dies, he still won't regret a single thing. Then out of nowhere, he starts to. He tumbled down and smashed into something soft. He thought he finally slammed into the ground. No pain, no warning, just another gut punch coming. Keep going beyond this one, because man, it feels that good, yeah this is paradise, until Verdena snapped her eyes open and blurted. She blurted in shock, "Wait, why is it tickling me?" And the protagonist froze the moment he saw her. He scrambled up in total confusion, blurting out in shock, "Where is he? Wait, this isn't paradise, is it Mother Earth?" He stared at the girl, stunned, like, was everything he'd been thinking about really just about her? That was the meat, and that's exactly why he went tumbling off the cliff, until this girl showed up and somehow saved him. But why is she so gigantic? Right then, his allies explode into terrified screams. Screamed, "Is he okay?" Verdena stood there with MC perched on her shoulder, and when the giant finally looked at everyone, his surprise was total. They all screamed at the exact same time, right when the amazement hit. Shock hit her a giant. The girl sniffed in disbelief like her world had just tilted. So, spots the prepared food and bursts out laughing with pure delight. She reached out and yanked the tender meat onto the table like it was nothing. He grabbed it, then tore into it piece by piece until the whole table was gone. Under the stunned eyes of everyone who was watching, he knocked the door, confused as hell, and wondered if that meat belonged to the giant girl. The girl licked her lips and purred, "Delicious." She craved more fast, and he just stared in full-on confusion, like he couldn't even process what he'd heard. Is she really gonna devour every last bite? No way. He yanked her hand in with a firm grip, like he wasn't about to let her get away with it. She stared him down and dared to ask if he was really that strong, then he just shook his head. No. Enough, everyone digs in and gets their share of the meat. Peace finally settled, then his allies crashed into grief, and Verdena burst out in a furious, breathless shout. An absolute embarrassment, so * this is their meat. Fine, let them swallow it and forgive her. She was starving and the meat tasted like heaven. She dropped to her knees and then, half her body rose out of the abyss, like the darkness itself had split open, so. She was so huge that the protagonist froze. Then a wild idea hit, and he started enlarging. He cracked open one piece and handed pieces of it out to everyone. Greg burst out in delighted excitement, just like their amazing master always managed to pull off. The moment the food hit the table, everyone's faces lit up as they dug in and savored every mouthwatering bite. "Dishes," Verdena leaned in and said, "This water tastes unreal, so sweet." The mayor, who totally hooked her up with it, bragged that it was a special fruit sauce, and the giant burst into pure, gleeful delight. This was the first time she tasted something that good. Could she have a little more sauce? Because MC didn't expect to be that impressed. "So what did she eat before?" she asked, and then he nodded. Everything from animals to fruits to monsters, like it didn't even make sense. "Wait, she's out here eating monsters," Raul grinned. "She's a giant, no less, and yeah, the name absolutely matches the chaos. They've got a reputation for being absolutely massive, and somehow fearless enough to face anything." Verdena was staring at them, and the creatures couldn't stop themselves from gaping in shock. She stared in shock, wondering, had she been quietly feasting on the local monsters this whole time? Even if she didn't see it herself, she was still guarding their whole domain like it was her lifeline. A tiny piece of meat sat on her plate, and she leaned in, telling him to make it bigger. The protagonist snapped back, "Of course," and right after she leaned in and asked, "Can I have more?" And then he cranked it up even higher, feeding her more and more until Verdena was utterly spent. The plate was empty when she grinned and said it was the best meal ever. Then she leaned back, insisting she truly couldn't take another bite. His stomach was stuffed, and still he couldn't shake it. Why was he the only one who looked exhausted? Maya spotted how rough he looked and snapped, "Are you tired?" And the protagonist started to answer, "It seems I'm O." He pushed the technique too far, now he's bone-tired, with zero strength left. Greg snapped, "That's it, time to head back." He said, "Yeah, that's right," then spun toward Verdana and told her goodbye, only for the girl to look crushed and whisper, "Yes, Xian." She finally got it, then the allies peeled away, and with a heavy, aching look, she choked back her tears and crawled after them anyway. The second he heard it, the MC snapped around, locked eyes with her and froze, pure shock on his face. Verdana blurted that she wanted to go with them, and he stammered in pure shock, "So you're saying you want to live live here in my domain?" He grimaced, taking care of her felt out of his reach. Still, he reached out and extended his hand toward her. He lunged toward her and snapped, "You can't do this, your family will worry sick about you." Verdana shot up to her feet like lightning. She stamped the ground, and the whole earth shuddered under her anger as she blurted, "I want." Once everyone there jolted off the ground, blasted upward by the sheer force of her sudden stop. Nox yelled, "All right, just make her stop," the girl immediately. He snapped back into calm and flashed him a sweet, genuine smile right away. The protagonist shrugged it off, no big deal for him, especially with her son. Her sheer size would be a nightmare, so he'd try to shrink her, just so she could let her finally drop her guard and stop fighting. Then he pulled it off. She crouched, pulling herself down until she shrank to human height after. After that, everyone linked up and headed home together, and the moment she stepped onto the grounds and spotted the huge spread of buildings, she burst out with pure delight. "They all live here," the protagonist shot back, "right?" "Yeah," she beamed. "This is big small land, being little feels amazing." She had the power to slip into any house, so after that barbecue in the mountains, they hauled her right along with them. MC couldn't shake the feeling he might have messed up, but then his mind slammed straight into one question. What about her family? Family, the moment he used his power, it never got refused. Nothing like that nasty rejection he'd gotten with the slime, and the truth, she didn't care at all, seeing her there in front of her. With an excited, curious spark for everything, he basically threw his hands up and said, "All right then." If she wanted it, he could just snap her right back to the way she was. Then he blurted, "I'm worn out, and I'm going to." He headed to bed, and just like that, Verdana blurted, "She wants a tour." He shot her a quick wave as he left the house, grinning, "Tomorrow," and Mia told the girl that. So by then she could finally use the bath, right? Olivia clocked it, and knew she had to change fast. He blinked in surprise, "What a bath," and after a moment, his eyes drooped with a sleepy little nod. Nox sat up in bed and, without even opening, he cracked his eyes open and stared at that soft pillow like it was the strangest mystery in the world. When he finally understood his hand was on Verdana's body, terror ripped through him. He blared her name at the top of his lungs, but she just slept like nothing mattered. Then, after a while, her eyes fluttered open, heavy with sleep, and she blinked. She greeted him good morning, and he blurted her name in pure confusion, until she snapped back, "Yes, it's her." Right then, Mary burst into the room, grinning as she announced she'd brought in freshly picked fruit. The protagonist blurted, "Oh meh, the maid." Seeing them both sprawled on the bed, rage swallowed him. He hurled a knife at them and demanded. In a creepy voice, she asks, "Isn't she even going to bother explaining herself?" Verdana blurts out, a plum. Rage boiled in the mare's eyes as she snapped out, "Bon appetit." Then the giant lunged, snatched the fruit, and yanked the protagonist along with her, shouting, "Wait, what is happening? Where to?" Verdana only smiled and promised, "A tour." Remember that moment? When they stepped outside, Kuklua shouted to him, and Olivia beamed as she wished him a good morning, like it was the start of something big. Morning hit, and he told Verdana, "This is Koklua's garden." MC leaned in and asked the girl how the vegetables were growing. Vegetables were everywhere. She grabbed a gnarly root veggie, shoved it into his hands, and shouted, "Go on, let him see how huge this thing is." He burst into laughter and said, "That's right," then spun around, faced Verdana, and let the words rip. "Wait, don't giants chow down on vegetables too? Turns out in the right amounts, they're straight up delicious." "Tasty," Kuklua shot back, and with that, he shoved the root vegetable into her hands. The girl held it up and asked, "Want a bite?" Ferdinia snatched the vegetable, tasted it, and smiled. "Sweet." "Is that fruit?" the girl gasped. "No way." Verdana stared, then grinned. "It's a vegetable, a daikon." "Seriously," she said. "Of course," the girl answered like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "They are that delicious." Kuklua started tearing into the veggies, one after another, plucking them straight from the pile and shoving them into her guest's hands, while Verdina burst out laughing. Still objecting, she ate it anyway. Then she knocked and asked if she liked that daikon so much. She just said, "No," and he shot back, "I noticed." Surprise, what she added totally blew me away. It was delicious too, of course, but sitting down to eat with everyone else was just *amazing. The protagonist flashed back to her pure joy at the meat, then hesitated, She had no clue, not even a hint, about what came next. Cooking came next, and her looks stole the show. Was she really going to blow all this? Back then, at the barbecue, while he was stuck alone, he told her, maybe her family would. Would have had him worried, but she wouldn't answer. Now he's stuck wondering if he should. He shouldn't have said that. Calcula leaned in and dared her. Go on, try your po. Her pumpkin too. Then out of nowhere, a horrifying howl tore through the air. Everyone snapped to attention as that terrifying sound hit. Then the protagonist shot a remark back. He stared in shock as that howl, like it was ripped straight out of hell, rolled out into the dark. Under a silver moon, he stared into the night like he was calling a wolf by name. Blood-red eyes blazed, and silver fur shimmered like it was lit from within. But this is one of the deadliest things that lives in the great forest. There's no way that monster should have showed up. They came dangerously close to their domain, and then, right as things started slipping, losing GR. Greg is outside now, and Kuklua is huddled low, trembling with pure fear. Covering herself with her arms, Verdena gently stroked her head and whispered, said everything's fine. Then she spun toward MC and said, they said they had to go, and he snapped, okay, where's my? Just in surprise, wait, where do you even go from here? She didn't say a word. She snatched his hand and yanked him forward in one sudden rush. Verdena said she could feel him pushing forward, like something was already moving. In Greg's shadow, they still felt safe for a second. Then the attack hit, and they were forced to lose ground fast. Attack right then the hunters. Reuters was completely boxed in, wolves closing in from every side. Both of them stayed locked in, eyes sharp, guarding every move their opponents made. Luz gloomily muttered, who would have ever guessed the silver moon would? Greg shot back, this is where it would be, then immediately said they had to cut the conversation off, right there. Somehow yanked their attention away, then slipped back into Big Small's turf. Verdena and Noct hit the wall like they'd been dropped there by fate. The girl leaned in, eyes blazing, and screamed. There they stood then, right on cue. One of the beasts lunged to attack. Then the protagonist tried using Shrink on the wolves, but it totally failed, and they still had the upper hand. It failed, and the wolf studied his skill in silence. Then the beast snapped its jaws open. Greg's mouth snapped open, and he roared with a terrifying voice, while anxiety slammed into him hard. He swallowed his fear and called out his comrade's name, right when Verdena's name hit the air. Dragging the protagonist along with her, she tore through the enemy that was left in ruins, who came in swinging a kick at Luz. MC froze in shock, his mind screaming, Verdena is that strong? Greg blurted, checking if he was okay, and the giant. It leaned toward Noct and told her, you're moving way easier now than you were before. He grinned, perfect, let her tear it up with the other wolves there. She smiled and he told her she could trust him. Then she charged straight toward the enemy, and they kept hovering over her, always watching, like they were waiting to see when it was time. Time to end this right now, then she would. She fired up her power and their tails tucked between their legs in pure fear. The protagonist sprinted off from that place, full of support behind him. Just like that, they freaked out and bolted, and the girl snapped around to him and called his name. He said it to her by name, then praised her with a grin. That's all. Of course a student would do something like that. Verdena burst into joyful laughter, glowing with delight at the praise. Lewis stared in disbelief. Where on earth did that silver moon come from? Then Greg chimed in, right after. Maybe the orcs scared it off, the protagonist muttered, like some dark truth he couldn't finish. Something's gone wrong in the forest, and if they can't uncover the reason fast, it'll all spiral out of control. They're never going to get a peaceful night's sleep again. Something in the forest tugged at his attention, so the MC stretched like he could feel it watching. He watched, thanked her, and everything finally worked out. So yeah, it's nap time, until she screams. She shouted at him to stop, because she knew the exact place where the tastiest fruit was growing. She grew up in the forest after scaring Kuklua, and everyone else too. So she wanted to hand them some. He stared at her, completely thrown off. Why would they? But in the end, they caved and followed her. Then the allies finally showed up, and Noct stared into the cave, stunned. This place was pure chaos. Ferdinand burst out, there are fruits in the garden. She's about to deliver it, so for now, everyone take a seat. And then the allies stormed in. He stepped inside, and everything hit him like a giant wave, absolutely enormous, leaving him blinking in confusion as he muttered, what is going on? Luz asks, where can we sit? And he fires back, right there are chairs. 3, she just couldn't figure out what he was even saying. The protagonist straight up explained, there are 3 chairs, and right then, Verdena. Dina burst in, apologized for the wait, then slammed a huge tray of some mysterious fruit onto the table and shouted, There, this was exactly what she meant. MC reached out, brushed the berries, and immediately thought, those look like grapes. He asked what the fruit was called, and Verdena snapped back, it's called fruit. Fruit is fruit, and sure, it can be delicious, Luz said, like the answer was obvious, because this one didn't seem to have any name at all, so he took a bite. Took a bite and found it was a little sweet. Then the giant snatched the fruit right out of his hands and demanded he hand it over so she could try it, and he did. The girl blurted in pure confusion, "Wait, this doesn't taste sweet like before." Kaguya froze, her mind catching for a second, then she snapped, "Maybe it's the S." He eyed the fruit, stretched out his hands, and triggered shrinking, turning it smaller than it had ever been. After one bite, Verdana's eyes lit up, delicious, and suddenly it was exactly like before. Before that, the protagonist blurted out that the huge fruit's sweetness was barely there. He cranked it tight and instantly the flavor popped. Then, after that first bite, he stared in shock and blurted, "No way." Delicious, he'd never laid eyes on anything like it. And in that moment, he swore he could even brew his own alcohol. He ripped the whole out of it, and sure enough, the mansion had the exact equipment they needed. He spun to Verdina and demanded to know if she was truly okay with it, right? The girl snapped back, "Yeah, that's what I am." Then the others jumped in too, and every single one of them nodded. Yep, it was absolutely delicious. The protagonist broke into a smile and told him, "Thank you, Cuckler would be happy too." And when Verdinia caught his eyes, she blushed and whispered, "Thanks to you." They'd barely had any time together, but it was totally fun until he spotted that crushing sadness on her face and asked her name. She whispered, "Those wolves, they always watch me, but they never come close." Close because the last time their eyes locked, they bolted, and yeah, it's probably that something happened thing again, like, happening in the... That forest is stealing her away, bit by bit, so she's not running. She's staying right here to defend. She hardened her resolve, protect them at any cost. The MC stared at her with heartbreak, then swelled her back to her former size. She dropped to her knees, smiling as she took it all in. He grinned at how tiny he was, then cracked up and shot back. "No, she's the one who's too big," right as they were about to leave. Dana waved them off, then leaned in and told them to make sure Kuklua and the others were okay. He figured if she chose it on her own, then he'd done his part. Said it's done like he nailed every single step. Looking back, he caught the tears in her eyes as she fought to hide them, smiled, waved again with that same grin, and the protagonist's resolve hardened, no wavering. He shot back, "No, this can't be right," like the truth was carved in stone. The girl shot him a confused look and demanded, "What do you mean?" And he said, "If you don't show up, come back." And the moment she said it, Kuklua would start crying. Verdinia clenched her fists and snapped, said voice cracking that if she stayed with them, she'd only end up She put them in danger, and she couldn't even tell if she'd be able to shield them next time, because the protagonist swore that if danger came again, he'd protect everyone, her included, and every single one of the other inhabitants. With those words hanging in the air, he thrust his hand toward her and kept going. Continued, so yeah, together, they walk right back home. Together, Verdna choked up with tears, sprinting toward him just to wrap her arms around him, while the MC shouted in panic, "Wait, is she? Are you serious?" He snapped his shrinking skill into action, and in seconds, she went from giant to plain human-sized. He huffed and then burst out, "All right, that's it, time to go." Dina shot back, "Hold up, let them wait a bit." She sprinted into her cave, grabbed the fruits and snapped, "Forget souvenirs, this is what we need." Then she demanded, "Bring back as many as you can." Not shriveled the berries smaller so she could haul them with ease. Then she popped another fruit into her mouth and blurted out in awe. He burst out, "How delicious," then added, "Oh, and by the way, since the fruit does, who's got no name, they should slap one on it because it's still awkward when it has no name." And the giant astonished totally caught everyone off guard. She stopped, eyes wide as if she couldn't believe it, and said it herself, because she'd finally found what she was looking for. Dina paused for a second, then said she'd decide what to call it herself, because she was the one speaking up. Nadia, she grabbed part of her name like it was destiny, and he couldn't help but think, okay, not bad. Things were going badly, so they named the fruit Nadia*. The allies tear back home, while the protagonist and I stay rooted in place, like we're stuck in the aftermath. He shoved the fruit into the dirt and started nurturing it, day by day, until it began to take root and grow. The girl kicked the cells into action, and right then the MC unleashed his enlargement skill. A massive, fruit-bursting tree burst up from the ground like the earth just snapped awake. The maid blurted with pure joy, "This is unreal, he can do anything with his skill." He snapped, "Oh no, he's not in the mood to work, now's the time they finish this." Mare snapped her attention toward him, grinning through a shy laugh. "I think there are still good people out there." "A good match," he said, staring at her like he was trying to crack a mystery. Then with a quick nod he cut in, "Yeah, but I should probably check. Make sure it matches the others too, like Olivia." She opened her mouth to protest, but Joseph cut in and snapped the whole conversation away from her. The butler practically burst with excitement, shouting to his master, and then leaning in to whisper something urgent. In his ear, the message hit like lightning. Noct had just learned a tax inspector was in town. Maya blurted out, "A tax inspector? They're the ones who collect taxes, right?" And the protagonist realized, yeah, he'd seen it before. Even. His father's face twisted in a nasty grimace the moment they pulled up, and the butler snapped. So landowners have to hand over part of their profits to the kingdom. They showed up anyway, armed with everything they'd heard about the orc attack, because the tax inspector is the one who sets that's the yearly tax they demand. Pay it, because they've got the power to make you, and you can't say no. The protagonist snapped, don't sweat it, he's not getting a single penny, period. Let him. He just stood there and watched, and the old man stared at him like he couldn't believe his eyes. Allow me to say it, their lord is absolutely incredible. Damn. When the MC burst into the office, he lit up with pure joy, sprinted straight to Rebecca, and grinned as he said, maybe. She's wiped out from the long journey. Then he leans in, tells her his name, and straight up says he wants to ask her for something. He dropped to his knees in a heartbeat, bowed deep, and begged her to spare them from taxes for this. This year, the servant stared at him like he'd turned invisible. Then Rebecca shot to her feet and demanded, could a lord really slam his forehead to the floor and call it peace, with zero pride left? They all said, if it keeps our residents' peaceful life safe, then he's totally fine with it. Without warning, he shot up, snatched a napkin, and started wiping her shoes, blurting that her boots were just a little, just plain dirty. She stared at him, completely baffled, not knowing what to do, and then the inspector snapped out, sheer. She heard the orcs were coming in hot, attacking without mercy, and then she snapped to thinking maybe she could finally get the full story. After she laid everything out, Rebecca looked at him and said, I see. Now it all clicked for her, like the pieces finally snapped into place. Yet one thing still didn't add up, and it left her totally baffled. The inspector leaned in and explained, those massive walls. The protagonist didn't just talk, he built them all with everyone. It's going great, he said with a grin, then he added, yeah, but that doesn't mean we're done. Not ready to ship anything yet. Right now they're dead set on learning how to live off the land, and with those words, he slid a covered tray in front of her and carried on, talking like they were already weighing a plan to supply the thing they might offer. He stared at the odd treasures from that tiny estate, popped the tray lid wide open and snapped, none of this is your fruit. Let her try it, Rebecca blurted, stunned. She'd never seen anything like that in her life, so tell me, what do you think? Rebecca almost couldn't believe how good it was just from trying one bite. Then the inspector popped a single berry in her mouth and lit up with pure joy, and Rebecca blurted, I'm embarrassed. It's so moist and so sweet it coats your tongue, and it even feels like it wipes away fatigue. Fatigue dragged her down and a headache throbbed in her skull. Then after she snatched a few more berries, she stared at it, thinking hard. But MC paused, then added, we're thinking about growing it too, and that's where it could go. And while she was whipping up sweets and even brewing alcohol, she blurted it out in shock. For a split second, the inspector weighed it in his mind. Then he snapped to his feet and said, very well, he said, then for people like them, the rules let them dodge taxes this year. And after that, things went quiet for a while. Everyone spilled out to see her off, and the inspector leaned in like, wait, there's one more thing. They might call it a warning, but honestly, it felt like it was going to be the start of something, probably this. It all came down to skill, and among the very last to get it, there was one guy. Noct spotted one person with a freakishly rare skill, and she couldn't shake the feeling she'd just hit the moment right before everything went sideways. Rebecca hit the nail on the head, then leaned in and said a country will. Relying on just one man's strength can't last forever. Eventually, everything collapses, then the inspector scrambles in right after. Mia dove into the carriage, and they tore off into the night. Then she snapped, I'm a terrible person. The protagonist shot back, no way. She could have been soft, but she was kind. Then the servant stared at him, totally baffled. Wildermint snapped that betting everything on his own skill was wrong, because when things go sideways, you don't get a second chance. If it happened to him, it would wipe everyone else out too, and now there were even more of them than before, so if he vanished suddenly, the residents would have to hold it together without him. Joseph snapped into tears, wiped them away with a napkin, and choked out that he'd grown so much. He'd become exactly like his father. The protagonist blushed, stretched out on the spot, and grinned, see, now I can keep my peace, right here. All he could do was lie around and sleep all day. Then, out of nowhere, he snapped his head to Joseph and demanded, did you say something? The old man just sank with a gloomy, no. He imagined it, and after a while the MC finally circled back to it. The hunting ban got lifted and production kicked off. Thanks. With food, clothes, and shelter rolling in non-stop, the population of the Big Smalls holdings exploded. Planted an onion flower and grinned like she'd done it, then just said, now we wait. That's it, the mayor answered. She'll go practice her whistling. And she wished. Flowers are going to go huge, he thought with a grin. Then he said, guess I'll sleep for now, just before he finally laid down. Joseph marched up to him and muttered, I feel sick again since lunch. And as if that weren't bad enough, the whole crowd had ballooned into something huge. So what kind of example is he really setting for them? And what's his father going to think when he finally got back, he shot back indignantly. But then he knuckled down and kept working right up to lunch. They teamed up with the mayor, grinding day after day, all chasing one dream: growing the sweetest onions and tomatoes anyone had ever tasted. Tomatoes, even without his skill. Now it all boils down to the pollination stage. Joseph snorted in disgust and barked at him, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing, telling him with a sharp, stern voice he warned him, "Don't you dare lie to his face." Then, after a while, the protagonist. He went to Olivia and spilled his complaints, but that butler wouldn't trust him for a second. "Doesn't that feel downright cruel to you?" Cruel? Then she blurted out a heartfelt, "I'm so sorry." Cook Lewis patted him gently on the back and said, "Olivia's brother was amazing, and when she tried an onion, she couldn't hide her shock. But man, this vegetable is so sweet," he blurted out. "Yeah, that's exactly it." Yep, Joseph doesn't buy it for a second, even as the beast woman leans in. She leaned toward him and said, "That's right, he really did put in the work, didn't he? He was great." She burst out laughing, then patted his head, and the moment she felt it, her breath caught and she froze, eyes wide. "You can't do that." Olivia blurted out a shaky apology and quickly added. He caught himself like he always did, and noticed she was acting just like she did with Kuklua. Then rage tightened in his fists and he stewed in resentment. Then the protagonist leaned in and said, "Look, there's also a tomato." Kuklua shoved herself against him and said. Olivia stared in shock like, "Wait, he's that great?" Then she blinked again, onion and tomato. "Hey, maybe he's hungry, because they've got loads of veggies right there. Wouldn't you want some too?" Lunch knocked shot back. Of course he was hungry. Were they really cooking outside? Olivia blurted, "Yes," then grinned. "Cooking in the sun feels way better, right?" She snapped the fireball on, fired up the stove and started cooking, and he just sat there thinking. Thought, finally, he'll sink his teeth into a master's cooking, and most importantly, home-cooked food was calling to him, and the protagonist dragged the chairs into place before everything kicked off. And he stared at Kuklua as she hurried in with a basket of vegetables for her mother, flopped onto the sofa, and figured a quick midday nap would hit perfectly, while the smells and sounds of cooking swirled around him and he wakes up and goes straight for the table, total bliss. Right then, Verdena barrels up to him, sniffing hard like she can smell him, and his eyes widen. Wait, is it her? Rael rolled up beside her and said, "We are back again," and she couldn't help thinking, was this real, or was he dreaming? Because the moment he asked, "Want to do it again?" she knew she was done for. The protagonist shot him a furious look, pressed a finger to his lips and snapped, "Keep it secret." Right then, Rock's voice thundered out, "I'm starving." And when the MC stepped into view, the dwarf fired back, "What are you doing?" Olivia scanned the room with a sharp, mysterious stare and then said, A Napoleon-sized salad of sweet onions and juicy tomatoes sat right there on the table, ready to steal the scene. Right out of nowhere, the villagers swarmed in nearby and the whole place erupted. People hustled to set the table, knocking around, staring and gasping in shock. Olivia said, "What's the big deal?" And when she tasted that salad, she acted like it was a full-on celebration. The protagonist blurted, "This is delicious." And everyone immediately nodded along, going, "Yeah, totally." Joseph said you could make that taste happen with nothing but onions and tomatoes, and he was so thrilled it practically burst out of him. Sylvia shot him a shy grin and confessed she was just happy he liked it. Yeah, and then. But this wasn't just any veggie. This was their master's invention, built so anyone could grow it without any special skill. And it's the reason these greens are so wildly unique. Vegetables, Joseph blurted in shock. Did he really go all that way just to get that? He slid a plate onto the table, piled on mouthwatering onions and tomatoes, and then the butler. The butler dropped into a deep bow and blurted out his apology to his master for how everything went this morning. The vagueness shot me a confused look and demanded, "What the heck happened this morning?" This morning, Joseph stared at him, stunned like he'd just seen a ghost. Olivia said it was always loud, bright, and buzzing with non-stop cheerful energy. MC shot him a shy, awkward look, like he didn't know what to do with himself. Not even close, at least not like it was with his father, of course. The beast woman snapped back, "That's not true," and she cut herself off mid-sentence, like she was about to say the rest. Scattered off to all those different places, and Kuklua turned painfully timid, until the moment they showed up. They finally got here, and found a spot where they could breathe easy again. Seriously, she couldn't believe it, but coming here paid off big time. Every villager was buzzing with gratitude. He couldn't stop his gratitude, and when he finally met her eyes, confusion hit him. Was it him? He should have been the one thanking them all, because deep down he was already thinking, "I'll pray for this." He vowed it would never end like that. He'd do whatever it took to stop history from repeating itself. It repeated itself, and just moments later, the hunters came back with disturbing news, proving it to him. Then the second he showed up with them, he spotted Orc right there, cutting through the tracks after they traced the trail and confirmed where it led. Noct declared they'd stop right here, then spun on his heel and headed back. Was this reconnaissance, or was something way bigger going on? So it was true, his father and brother were really gone. He replayed every word from his chat with the butler the day he came back. He finally came back from training. He even blurted, "They've been missing for 4 days." But his father and brother still couldn't get back to school. Joseph shot back that he wouldn't even want to entertain the thought, because honestly, they were probably already no longer alive. Then out of nowhere he felt it. The orcs were closing in. They were coming back for round 2, ready to strike again. No way they wouldn't stop. It was only a matter of time, so what was he supposed to do now? If this was happening, then what the hell would he even do? If his father or brother were there, they'd have locked onto the answer instantly. He tore back home and told his comrades all about the. Joseph stared at the tracks, and the whole group went silent with confusion. Then he demanded to know if the orcs had slipped out. A scout, just one, and the mayor stared in shock, thinking, how could they even dream up something like that? Others shot back that massive tracks were stamped into the ground, and they had a leader. These things were split into everyday orcs, brainy leaders, and a brilliant general with a towering presence. Some kind of huge king, then it hits. An unusual species, and yeah, it most likely was a. Verdina nodded and said, yeah, those orcs are terrifying. She watched them tear into animals and slowly chew through them, just a little at a time. Then their kids finally showed up, and they dove in for a little too. The protagonist stared back, and like cattle, Verdina gaped at him, shocked, totally caught off guard, while the realization hit. They'd already swung first. Had it really happened already? Joseph asked, glass in hand, eyes narrowing. Glasses snapped, that's terrible, and the giant froze, totally lost. Wait, what are you saying? They'll all die. I'll die for this, she snapped. And when the protagonist demanded how, she just yanked his arm with those exact words, like it was fate. She shoved him toward the window and started to chase after him, but Greg grabbed her and snapped. Their lord has to make the call, right now, and Mia blurts out to the MC, all nerves and urgency. Then he kicked off cell activation to heal the bump on his head, and he demanded, let every one of them. So you decide, are you brave enough to move into that forest, or are you backing out? I couldn't stop wondering, would they just drop everything and run? They'd already sacrificed so much, but he couldn't bark orders like his father or brother. He couldn't, period. And the moment you saw his confusion, you knew that was the end of it. She slipped her hand into his, squeezing encouragement into him. Luz leaned in and asked, so what's the Baron's big plan? He stayed totally silent, and when the maid finally called his name, she said. Everyone leaned in, desperate to hear him out. He still remembered the words his father once told him about shielding his subjects with his own medicine. He couldn't help but think, yeah, just like his father left it to him, he was about. He'd protect them because, yeah, he could speak. The MC whipped around to his allies and flat out confessed, I can't do that. If he's stuck on his own, that's not the move. Let them jump in and help him, because together they've got this. Together they'd stand shoulder to shoulder and defend their home, protecting their families no matter what. So everyone nodded, fully on board. With their looks and appearances, Pico leaned in and said, you're weird, and the awkward silence stretched on. After a while, soon enough, everyone scattered like a firestorm, busy with their own plans and troubles. Meanwhile, Joseph and Mia teamed up with Ted Lee, scribbling whatever it was, and constantly pausing to consult someone now and then. They huddled and talked, and right then, Verdina snapped his name across the room. He blurts, what happened? Is she seriously going after meat again? She just ate. A girl shot him down hard. No, not for meat. I don't want that. I want you to make me bigger. No. Make it bigger, she'll get way stronger that way. He blurted, stunned by what he'd just realized. That's awesome, so are you sure she really wants to stick with them? Right, that's what you mean, right? The girl shot back. Sure it matters, but it's more than that. But most importantly, everyone's safe and accounted for, so she begs him to do it. And the protagonist shoots her a grateful look, like he's ready to repay her kindness. He chuckled, patted her head and said, you're seriously so cool. The giant blushed hard at all the praise, then let out an awkward, sheepish laugh. He hit the enlargement spell on her, then Verdina snapped right back to her normal size. She snapped her arm back and hurled the device to the protagonist, then ordered her to take it. Then move along the wall, she said, and Verdina immediately tore into action to carry out the order. The mayor marched up to the MC and demanded he make her strong too, because she wanted to fight, right alongside him, and the MC froze in shock like, wait, what is she even talking about? If she suddenly grew gigantic, she'd lose control, wouldn't she? The maid snapped, furious, and swore he'd have to do more than that. He had to actually reach into her heart. What the heck did he just say? How far have they pushed this journey? Then, without warning, he bolted forward. She sprinted toward Verdun, clutching her close, and noticed the giant watching her like a trap ready to snap. And as he felt the aura shift, he snapped, they're coming. And right on cue, the orcs burst out from behind the fort, flooding the scene. Forest everywhere he looked, more of them than he could count, and just as the allies closed in, Noct arrived. At the wall, the orcs surged forward, roaring at the top of their lungs, while a gigantic orc led the charge, having ripped up a. He thrust the tree up in the air, and Rail just stared, absolutely blown away by how gigantic it was. The protagonist sizing him up, eyes sharp, and then he finally saw him, those swords his father and brothers left behind, staring back like a promise of revenge. Others rushed to hang ornaments on the enemy's neck, and they blurted out in total confusion. That's not just some grunt, no, that's the orc. Or king, he just Rail muttered under his breath, a monster. But right then a supreme presence loomed, heavy, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. A cream being infused with razor-sharp intelligence, and wrapped in divine protection. Protection? Yeah, that idea was dead wrong, because who in their right mind would have expected a monster like that to be right here? The protagonist snapped the move aside, and yeah, he'd seen this exact outcome coming. Now it finally hit him, why his father and brother never came back. The merchant snapped into action, started counting the enemies, and blurted out loud. He blurted, there are over 500 of them, and we've only got 20. MC stared them down and said there was no point in killing every last one of them, especially if they'd already taken the king. The orcs would smash their way through, fighting like they owned the battlefield. This time they'd win clean, without a single casualty. It was a relief he showed up in person, because if everything had to depend on someone else, it never would have worked out. Things weren't going to go smoothly, but they had to stick to the plan, because if they didn't, it would delay him. For a while he just held on. Then the Orc King stormed up to the fence and let out a bone-chilling roar. A startled cry tore out of him the second he saw his opponents with one. One brutal blow shattered the fence, and he charged straight into the territory. Pico yells at the top of his lungs as they surge forward through the gap. In the defense, they got knocked out cold, just as Ver spun around. He looked Verdena in the eye and told her he was counting on her. The girl leaned in and told him, with total confidence, that she got every last detail. Everything he thought, and then his gut dropped. Monsters were everywhere. He'd seen them before, so he grabbed his ally and told him, "Allies, everything's fine. They've got a backup plan, because this is a trap built to draw the stakes out and make it way easier for them to crush whoever comes." Staying with them as confusion swirls, the Orc King barks an order for the front, then the rest cuts off mid-sentence. Flank out there and carve a path for them. Then the orcs crashed down, stepped into the trap and got crushed to death. Then the others finally trudged over the aftermath, staring down in horror, pinning them to the stakes as their bodies lay scattered in the aftermath. The protagonist blinked in shock, completely thrown off by what was happening, because of course they were in. They were locked in, watching him clock every move as his opponents tried to slip out of the trap. He couldn't help but think. Alone, they barely mattered, but then someone showed up who could commanded them, and just like that, they turned into the deadliest, most unstoppable predatory army imaginable. So powerful it felt unreal. Even in the middle of the jungle with ants crawling everywhere, he still refused to abandon his home. He dove out of his home, then let them have him because he was already dropping fast, and started mowing down the orcs the moment they crawled out of the trap. One by one they fell quiet, then Greg snapped, "Okay, what do we do?" Right then Galena shouted from the wall, hurled a tiny sack at the protagonist, and demanded he grab it, fast. Take it. At first he had no clue, but when he peeked inside the sack, he found tiny models of a fence made of sharp spikes. Sharp spikes, he understood it all in one breath, and his mind went, yes, now. He vowed he'd do everything he could, then darted forward, dropped dummy targets in the enemy's way, and dove down hard, right to his next move. Joseph slapped his knees into the sand and stared, utterly confused. What was he doing out here? He'd about to go down for real. He would drop to his knees before the orcs, while MC kept his cool, hunting for the perfect opening and powering up his enlargement skill. The moment they started stepping past the dummies, he unleashed his ability and those swollen stakes tore straight through the orcs ahead. Jelena screamed at him, like, "You've got this, you can do it." "Then let her go, she can do whatever she wants." He shot back, and just like that, Greg and the others surged in, locking horns with their opponents. After a while, the mare barked that all the injured needed to come to her. Then she turned and called out to her master, telling him to retreat too, because if anything happened to him, even victory would be empty. He snapped. Then she was right and he turned away. He ripped off his jacket and tore the fabric to pieces. Brick crafted himself a headband, then fired it off with a loud shout straight at the Orc King. King let that monster charge right at him. You wanted to shout to his allies, guard him, but he couldn't make it happen. He yanked up his sword and fired both skills at once. Honestly, he beefed up his weapon, swung his sword, and in an instant several orcs had their heads rolling. The whole village erupted in cheers. Right there, Noct declared, like this. The villagers can't chase their master, so when he bolts forward, Mia yells his name, right in the middle of. An alarm blared, then Rail stared in disbelief as the protagonist fought off the orcs, and somehow his sword only got bigger. He holds that lord position through the whole slash, keeping his balance steady as his power skyrockets. Then he burns through a brutal amount of energy. He used the skill on something complex, yet the monster turned out to be just a plain, everyday sword, and he barely had to try. And just like that, it hits its absolute peak, perfectly mastered by the young master. The butler, clutching a shattered slingshot, blurts out the protagonist's name, stunned. Pico counted the foes, 89 left, now it's 84, and yeah, they're about to pull this off. Right then the air shattered. An orc king materialized behind MC. C blurted meh and knocked froze. Fear hit him like a wave. He fired a warning into the air about what was coming, then spun around to square up with his opponent. But the opponent got there too late, and the king drove a brutal punch into his gut, with so much force that the impact left him, that the protagonist doubled over in a sharp, breathless heave. Verdna. Seeing it, he snapped forward like lightning, furious to help. Help, she screamed as the rest of the orcs started hammering her leg. Those legs of hers were wrecking her, filling every step with sharp, constant pain. Relief hit for a second, then the girl lunged forward anyway. She surged forward and smashed into the orc king with everything she had, like her last breath depended on it. Rage surged through him, but he didn't freeze. He braced for her strike and kicked hard. Kicked her aside, blasting her through the air like a cannon shot. After a long, brutal stretch of travel, the protagonist finally crumpled onto the ground, sprawled out in defeat. Ground snapped the magnification on his sword to life, and lunged forward, trying to drive straight through that terrifying wall of an enemy. Then the orc king flashed a wicked grin and snapped his guard into place, deflecting the attack like he'd seen it coming. Breaking the sword, still confused and stunned. MC thought, "Are you serious?" as he halted his weapon. With one simple press, the weapon snaps to life, and the orc lunges toward it. Rail spun toward him. Then a crushing, powerful hand shot out and clamped down, and Rail blurted. He blurts out in pure horror, is he really torturing him? Didn't scream in agony, and still dropped into her. He slipped into unconsciousness, and figured the pain finally knocked him out. He was absolutely wrecked, bone-tired, eyes glued shut. He'd done more than enough, didn't he? When he finally apologized to his father for never bringing the cloak back, a vivid memory hit, his father lifting him and his brother onto his back. Monster tales flared across his fading consciousness, right there on his lap, because before bed it was another lesson. As men, they had to know what monsters were. Casselusia is a cursed plant that lures the world into hallucinations with its pollen, and once it hits, it devours every last person and animal. But if you splash it with water, that plant turns harmless. Rutherford leaned in and asked the orc's weakness, then the protagonist snapped back, fire. They're terrified of fire. A flash of fire lit the moment up, and his father slapped his shoulder, saying, yes, he remembered it, out of all things. Then his father snapped the book shut and barked, all right, Aston Super, time to wake up. Rutherford jolts awake in shock, then slaps his hand down like he can't believe what's happening. He whipped around on his head and yanked him hard to the side. He snapped his eyes open and saw Verdna and Luz crashing into the Orc King in the middle of an all-out attack. While King helped Mia heal her master, Mia finally opened her eyes, and when she saw him awake, the maid burst out in pure relief. You're alive. If she was that thrilled, Verdna would have lit up too, calling his name with pure joy, and he couldn't help but think that. Stunned, he followed along with the mayor's help, and suddenly he couldn't wrap his head around it. What in the world was he even doing? Sleeping there was miserable, because you only got to rest. After grinding for days, the MC just sat there, watching the orc giant didn't just show up, it smashed down from above, dropping out of the sky like a nightmare. He whipped up a fireball, then the enemy finally locked eyes on him, and where did he aim it? Mostly, he slammed the hit, and drove his hand out straight like a strike ready to land. He thrust forward a flaming magical circle that blazed to life in front of him. He turned to his father and brother and blurted, thanks to you, I never forgot. He snapped back and remembered. Turns out he was the fire god's golden favorite. He was a flame summoner, and with these words, the protagonist was born. The antagonist kicked the fireball into a brutal chain reaction, multiplying its power again and again, igniting a raging flame that shoots into impossible, jaw-dropping proportions. Portions, yeah, that's where it all went sideways. The Orc King stared at him in pure confusion, and then all the orcs and the protagonist. His antagonist's allies stared in disbelief as he surged his power, multiplying it again and again, until it became something straight out of a nightmare. Like, seriously, you couldn't even believe what you were seeing. With a fiery burst, the Orc King whipped around and launched into a full sprint. Rage ripped through him as he cursed, and screamed that he was going to run away. At that exact moment, Verdna exploded into action and launched forward. Launched those broken fence posts after him, digging into his side as they tore through the air. Into his opponent's legs, she flashed a grin and said she was repainting the whole scene. After paying him, the Orc King blasted his warriors with a loud shout, right there in his. He shouted in his own language, and then boom, every last orc surged out in a furious rush. Hustling after their king, they threw themselves into place and snapped up a protective barrier right in front of him. Joseph blurted, shocked, "Wait, he's using his." Jelena used her comrades like a living shield and drove home her shot. Scorn dripping from every word, he sneered, "Oh look, royal like that matters." See, it didn't stop, continued magnifying everything. At that exact moment, the orc king yanked his kerchief right off. White tears streamed down as it ripped free and tore out. The sword he carried came from the wishart hanging on his necklace. Then he snatched a nearby girl and hoisted her into the air like it was nothing. Villagers screamed in full panic, "No, not her. Not her!" This monster crushed the child in a death grip, squeezing tight enough to steal every breath. Blood exploded across the ground. Then he threw the sword like a missile, shards flying everywhere. At Noct, he unleashed everything he had, weapon in hand, all his might behind the strike. He flipped midair and somehow still shot forward like a bullet, straight into the protagonist's grip. He stared at it, baffled. This was his brother's sword. Men barked at him to move his hand, but he knew. He knew that if he pulled that move right now, every ounce of his effort would all come crashing down. Completely, no saving it. For nothing, the sword came for the hand that held back the F. The fiery whirlwind tore through the halls, then the maids shrieked in pure terror. And fear crawled up his spine, so watch it. He started dodging the weapon blazing, he twists his body into position, and that final move. At last, the sword thundered down and disappeared into the grove. He slammed to the ground. In that blink of an eye, he unleashed a scorching attack straight at his opponent. The sheer blast of his attack ripped straight through the world, leaving a deep ridges tore into the earth under his furious step. The orc shield plus the king's him. He stood there alone, and the rest of the orcs just broke and ran. Bolted, Greg, and every single person with someone else was staring too, and their mouths hung open in pure shock. MC Swad widened his eyes in pure amazement. His consciousness was drowning, drifting in a sea of darkness. The mayor grabbed him and the whole crowd surged toward them. Then, for a moment when Noct opened his eyes, his brain refused to catch up. He couldn't even figure out what happened to him, or where he ended up, just a blurry silhouette standing there like a ghost. Right in front of him, he froze and blurted, "What's happening?" Then when his mind finally snapped back, he looked up and saw the mare leaning over him, tears streaming as he sobbed his plea, begging her body to kick those cells into gear, forcing them to snap him back to reality. Then, just like clockwork, the protagonist lunged in and called out her name every week. Her name, then she shot up from her seat and burst out, screaming his name with pure joy. He shot her a question, "How long have you been here?" And right then the room's door slammed open, and the butler burst in, face pale, voice cracking, screaming, "What's wrong with our master?" Once the chaos finally died down, the servants rushed in and spilled the whole story. So when they finished, he blurted, wide-eyed, "Wait, what are you saying?" Out, he'd crushed 3 full days of sleep, convinced he was some kind of sleep genius, while Joseph was saying that. While he slept, Mia kept using her skill on him, pressing the power into his body like it wouldn't let go. He told the girl she needed to rest, then the maid. He snapped up a comb and scissors, then tore into the scene like his life depended on it. To tidy him up, suddenly her strength crumbled, and she reached for a way to cope. She sharpened her skill on herself, right before it all hit, MC. Then he froze in shock, self-healing. Mia's eyes lit up and she blurted out, she's his maid and the work is only just kicking off. He flashed a grin and said, "Well, all right, she's going to pay for those 3 days she skipped. After all, first, she's got to get herself some real." He got arrested, and as they dragged him to the edge, he snapped, "Here, let her lie down in my bed." Said she dropped onto the bed and zoned out immediately, like sleep hit a switch, and Noct just watched her with warm eyes, then told them to thank her for everything. He hauled himself out of bed and bolted for the door. Joseph, stunned, demanded, "Where are you going?" Knowing, the protagonist shot back that he'd check on the others, and were going to hunt down whoever did this. Then he nodded toward his brother's scarf, now wrapped around his own neck. As soon as he stepped out the door, he took a deep breath of fresh air, like the world was calling him. He grinned and strolled across the estate, like he couldn't wait for what came next. Kuklua spotted him and spun around, eyes wide with shock. With shaking eyes, he dropped into a crouch in front of the girl and blurted out that consciousness snapped back into him. Thanks to you," the girl blurted, baffled doctor-wise, "but you're not just Ace." He blurted out a laugh and yanked it back. No, not a stone. He meant a doc. Dr. Greg was busy casting his magic, and Luz spun toward the protagonist like everything was about to snap into place, and fired off that it was about time to grab the best. As soon as he woke up, the villagers erupted in joy. Lightning flashed, and Dina watched him start blasting fireworks up into the sky, like the night itself just got set on fire. He finally got the whole picture, then bolted straight headfirst toward the astro. The earth buckled under them, Then Greg snatched the MC and shouted. Verdana blurted in pure shock, because the earthquake hit, and everything shattered all at once. With a scream of his name, she bolted toward Noct at full speed. With a terrified scream, the protagonist snapped, shrinking on herself in a flash, right as he was about to. Before he could even react, she slammed him down and kept crushing the moment, repeating his name over and over. Tears streaked her face as he begged her to forgive him for abandoning her in that huge form for 3 brutal days, until the giant. She shot out a gasp, "I'm starving," and he snatched a vegetable, stretched it bigger with a flash, then grinned, "There, snack sorted." The girl started chewing it. He apologized, then the pain hit hard because she was so weak, but she promised she'd get stronger. The protagonist shrank her down, dropped to his knees, gently stroked her head and said, he said, and if she hadn't been there, he would have dropped dead on the spot, right there. By the way, where Escalina? The moment the question left his mouth, the dwarf popped up like she'd been waiting for it. Rog spoke like it was nothing. "I've got a request. The grave cross needs to be enlarged." The dwarves shoved him forward, marching him right to the memorial where that cross loomed. He shoved it bigger, thanked Killen, then drove his brother's sword straight into the ground beside the cross. He also thanked Vishard for pulling him out, and then the MC grabbed his brother and moved. His brother's torn, blood-stained kerchief, still wrapped around his neck, hung there, enlarged in. He hoisted it up and lashed it to the cross. Then, with the crowd hanging on every word, he declared it after it had grown. Once it's grown bigger, nothing stays the same, so let him finally forgive him. He's furious you brought it back to him like that. He's barely holding on, and somehow he still has to fight. Fought at full power, since childhood, he'd never even laid eyes on his. His father's sleep, every time he tried. His dad shut him down the moment he felt. They felt swallowed by loneliness and craved his arms. And honestly, their villagers are the only family they've got. He has to work for them, so their father said the job would be lonely, but everyone bowed to their father, and his blood runs through him. So he vows to guard what their father guarded, standing tall as the baron of these lands. Right then, Verdana and Kuklua came up with flowers. The giant slung an arm around his shoulders like a proud shield, and the dwarves stared at him with pure respect. Later, the villagers and allies threw a feast to honor their beloved lord's flawless victory, and with his restoration finally complete, the rail guard clinked a glass beside him and grinned, saying he was just relieved it all ended the right way. And somehow, he tore through and defeated the strongest orc. So now he was sure nothing dangerous was left to stop him in this F. In the middle of his forest, the protagonist answered, "Yeah, it's all thanks to your hard work, and I mean it. Thanks for everything." The merchant said everything was safe now, so maybe they could finally get back to work, and the protagonist stared at him, completely baffled. Fusion, what was he even talking about? Rail shouted for Pico to get the glasses ready, then he grabbed. Abdom C let his hands go to work, and boldly suggested opening a shop. Nock stared in stunned silence at the merchant's shocking proposal, completely frozen as the merchant kept talking. He kept going and you could tell it. Thanks to his hard work, those lands were bursting with opportunity. To seize the opportunity and grow, they had to start trading. Then the protagonist stepped in. Panicked, he couldn't even think, because some part of him was already sure he'd messed up beyond saving. Joseph had already busted his tail enough, but his curiosity wouldn't let him stop. In the strange little but massive lands, the protagonist spots a sail and doesn't blink. Noticing how real his interest was, I let out a breath and said, yeah, sure, like he'd get away that easily. No way, he'd still have to make. His dad and his brother looked at him like he was a legend. Then he blurted out, "Okay MC, enlarge the P." He grabbed the paper, snatched a pen and burst out. All right, now they're finally going to record the history of the first shop in that huge, small domain. Jelena shouted that it had to be a tavern because alcohol is treated like a miracle cure, like it can save lives and fix everything. Then it hit him, memories of his past life surged back, and suddenly everything just clicked. A drunken guy stumbles onto the bed, warm buzzed from alcohol, tucks himself under a blanket, and passes out. Honestly, it's kind of wonderful. Luz snapped, saying that wasn't true. They needed a farm and they'd go catch. They'd hunt rare, delicious creatures, then breed them like crazy, because if they had that meat, they'd basically have everything they needed. So he started imagining it, and in his head, there was nothing left to say. Stuff your stomach until you're stuffed, then crash into sleep. Honestly, that's pretty wonderful too, you know. But what's the smartest way to get some sleep, if you're trying to figure out the best choice for sleep to? To wake up to a stunning servant beside him, and a breakfast so fresh it felt like a victory. Breakfast, he told them to crack it open and step inside, and every time someone tossed out an option, indignation hit them like a wave. Kuklua charged right in and started hammering at them, full attack mode. He chomped on that veggie and grinned like he'd just promised a feast was coming. God's invisible hand keeps steering their lives toward a hunger that swallowed them whole. The world went quiet in his head, and when he finally turned toward her, Total confusion hit him hard. He stared at it for a second, then the meaning clicked. After a long rethink, he ruffled her hair, thanked her, and told her it was absolutely excellent. Excellent idea. Big Small's first move is setting up a trading post. He posted the rating, and the villagers stared at him like he'd just set the whole place on edge. He said it with a slow, careful pause like, "That's way too simple." And then he leaned in, asking, "But is it even acceptable?" So yeah, if they were in charge of it, they could grab everything they needed straight off the rails. So what the heck was he even trying to sell? They even traded bites with each other. No way they had anything to sell. He threw out a real apology and admitted, "I didn't mean it like that. What I was trying to say was, they wanted to kick off a gold coin circulation in these holdings. Like, right here, right now." She hauled the loot in, sold it to the store, pocketed the money, and then the store turned right around and handed it to the people who needed it. He grabbed that meat like it was fuel, and the whole economy roared back to life. Then the mayor stared at him with pure admiration and said, "So that meant their holdings would roll right back into the original system, just like it was before. Was before the orc attack, and when I agreed, I told them we had to drag those days back. They de-slam the door on the old system, bring back the free market, and crank up the cash by selling exclusive goods. Watch that profit skyrocket. Their influence keeps swelling, and soon traders from nearby lands start flocking to them, bringing their coins, ready to build an entire plan if they have to. And right there on the ground floor, a dining room is coming, cooked with fresh, special ingredients, and everything they once treasured gets split up equally, piece by piece. Everything. From now on, it's all shared, everyone pitches in. Sure, they busted their backs in the fields, but now they've got a carpenter, a hunter, and a cook to keep the whole crew going. They've got real craftsmen, armed with real skill, and that kind of talent lets them pull off amazing things. And once they strike it rich, they'll roll out a land tax." They stared in shock at what they just heard, and knocked snapped that they'd managed to dodge it. They dodged it this year, but next year, they're getting hit with the bill, no way out. They won't all get to live under one roof, just to guard that big and small holding together. Buildings must be rebuilt to kick the economy back to life, and he could see it in every face. All the residents were furious and fed up. "So you're telling me," you asked, and they still drag their feet like they don't want to do it. Kuklua's bite stopped mid-chew. She dropped the veggie and snatched the hem of her robe, and with tears streaming down they begged, "Please, could they stop eating together now?" He gently stroked her head and told her, with a warm grin, that they could do it anytime they wanted. Rog called his sister and told her, "Let's build a tavern," but Galena's eyes dropped. She looked heartbroken and asked, "If we do this then?" If she could pull it off by herself. He recalled what she told him earlier. Luz had said that. And on top of that, they were flat broke, so he just sat there thinking hard. She insisted she was right, and now they were staring down one thing they couldn't skip, capital, and then he called Ray. He yanked the rail, shoved him just a bit to the side, and snapped. He said the moment had finally arrived for exactly that right after. They dumped several huge bags of money onto the table, like the kind of cash that could change everything in one night. The protagonist leaned in and told everyone he'd snagged that money for a job that was done for him. 50 million goals are on the table here, and every single one of them is getting a full 1 million. Just like they agreed up front, this should be plenty to kickstart their plans. If they ever needed help, they'd go straight to him, because he'd back them up with everything he had. He shouted for everyone and made it clear they'd all ended up here for a reason, one way or another. Maybe, just maybe, one of them actually slipped free and made it through all this time after everything they'd tried. To get to today, they even survived the orc attack, unlike those who lived in peace. Peace didn't just happen to them, they barely had to endure suffering, so they quickly shot up stronger and stronger. Stronger, yeah, 1 million is a mountain of money, but do they even have a clue what's going on in his head? Because every single one of them. They deserved every cent of it. Those words hit them like lightning. Their spirits surged, and they figured maybe it really wasn't as bad as it looked. Terrible idea, he said it plain that in a normal situation, it'd never work. He'd never stand a chance, yet somehow he's still convinced. He convinced them, then shot his hand up and shouted, "Right inner." With a ruthless, no-turning-back tone, he vowed that starting today, he would. He slammed down the rules and declared their domain a free market. And everyone cheered and backed him like it was the greatest idea ever. And Joseph said there was nothing to worry about. No hesitation, no slipping out. And that fact made tension creep into his chest like a storm that hadn't broken yet. And then they promised they'd sing the praises of the free market. Then, after some time at the house, the MC snapped that they had to decide whether the construction was about to kick off. So Julina barreled up to him and demanded he take a look. She sketched a lightning-fast map of Big Small's holdings, shoved it in front of him, and watched his eyes lock on it. Then he said. He stared at the city like it was the answer to a riddle, and she told him, with a warning in her voice, to remember it. He couldn't stop feeling thankful he'd made it to the capital, short visit or not. He wouldn't copy it word for word, but it was good enough as a guide, and he'd use it as a reference right from there. He'd build his own city from the ground up. He grabbed a quill, flashed a grin, and swore he'd do it later. She slid right up to him and asked, "So how's it going?" And before he could answer, she shot back, "Wait, did you really come up?" He flashed the map and grinned that it was the best way to go, while she huffed in pure irritation, staring at it like it had just ruined her day. He said it was tiny, but why would he draw it so small? Was he broke? And on top of that, it was way too far from her house, and he figured they'd already settled it. First store would be a rail branch, so he headed to the best spot he could find, right by the mansion and the gate. Yeah, but she was right, because it sat way out beyond the residential area. Like, come on, if only. Only the area where the first field had been built was free. He sketched a new house somewhere else and asked her what she thought, and she beamed, happily saying that it felt perfectly close, like it couldn't be more right, so he started thinking. He paced it through in his head, then snapped loudly that it still wasn't good enough. If Kuklua's house were any farther away, Olivia would have to take a bus. Turn after turn, she whipped up fresh maps in seconds while he scribbled new routes, switching them up fast. He wandered through different places, but he couldn't make up his mind, so he blurted out, loud and clear, that it might be. Sure, it's convenient right now, but they can't ignore what comes next, because the future is closing in. Picking up one of the abandoned drawings felt like the hardest decision they'd ever have to make when that man showed up, and said it felt like the only choice that actually made sense. He spun around and stared straight at it, and he swore this was the first choice he'd ever really made. Then he spotted the man's face hidden in the drawing and couldn't help thinking, who is he? How was he? He stretched out his hand, apologize right now, and then asked, who is he? But he just refused to answer, leaving everyone in total confusion. Then the door swung open, and the newcomer snapped that he'd better not mock the residents. It turned out to be Pico, grinning as he swore the new resident of Runner was totally harmless. He was about to start as the newest worker at the rail branch. Then he stepped up, slipped tiny drums around his neck, and he swore the boss would finally open up his very own store in the city. He even promised he'd plug those massive little holdings. Then he pointed straight at him like, "You're the one," then snapped his fingers, basically ordering him to start pounding the drums. And then they told him that meant he'd be the director. Knott's jaw dropped, and he immediately pushed, "Are you sure about this decision, based on his experience and age?" He suddenly looked like he belonged there. Then he pulled out a horn and said it didn't matter. A merchant's true lifeline is his earnings. Maybe he's packed with knowledge, but the crazy part is, he still hasn't managed to sell a single thing. He stared him down and thought, that face is way too terrifying. He stared at the drawing they shoved into his hands and demanded, "Why do you think this place is the best one?" He snapped his fingers off the instruments, then declared it was a must to open a store where people could come together. "This spot is perfect for locals and visiting guests alike." He nodded like, "Yeah, I've thought about that too, right?" Then he agreed, said it out loud. Then he paused and added, "But honestly he wanted to rebuild a whole city, just like the capital. But now, he didn't know whether to focus only on the plans that sit in front of him." Plans, Runner explained, the capital didn't just appear. It was hammered together over years, and only after several decades finally became the place everyone knows today. It looked like the residents were on the same page too. Now, it was time to think about what everyone needed right now, and he agreed. He figured his looks were rough, but his words hit like pure wisdom. Then he let out a slight smile. "If things develop the right way, be ready. Because once the dust settles, reconstruction is coming, and trust me, it sounds problematic." He said there was no point in all this because the boss already told him how good he was. If you're reading this, shrunk an already built building like it was nothing. And yeah, it's totally possible to move it too. They dragged it to a whole new place, and the protagonist froze in shock, thinking that it felt like stepping straight into one of the games I played back in a past life. He looks terrifying at first glance, but the second you get close, you realize he's bursting with ideas. Pico's the kind of guy you can count on. Then he smiles and steals the whole room's attention, and together, they make an unstoppable team. Later, they all step outside too. He leaned in and said, "I can slip out of trouble anytime. I can move by shrinking." A perfect pick for the very first store. He hated having to rip this option away. He said, "Remove it," because it was their first field, and he thought you might need to. You've got to shrink the area, so picture it in your head and start cutting it down. Imagining the block, he fired off the skill and shoved that field down, steady and precise as he went. He carefully snatched it up, carried it to a new spot, and set it down. He tore it down, snapped it back to its full normal size, and grinned as he said, "Happy Expo." They told him to keep going, to carry that same fire forward. He figured the object would be easy, so he barely spent a drop of effort. After a while, he popped the enlargement skill on the store, and they went straight on. He strode inside with a grin, glanced around, and then, whoosh, Kuklua sprinted straight at him. He tracked him down, called out to him, and shouted that his store was already open. He nodded in agreement, and they hustled to the store. Then he grabbed a veggie and asked Pico if he could take it, and Pico, since he was the first visitor, he got it for free. So he dug in, instantly loved it, and she confessed she'd worked her heart out growing it. He blinked, totally stunned, and said, "So that's how she pitched it to the rail. This way mutual circulation will be. From this point on, they'll explode in popularity. More and more people will swarm in and savor that flavor." She beamed and said, "This is what economic recovery looks like. I'll give it my best shot," and the MC shot his hand up. With a grin on his face, he slapped his hand down and blared that the first, big small, store was officially open. Later, once the crowd of customers had finally piled up outside the store, the whole place went electric. He said the very first store on their land was blowing up. Everybody wanted in. Even with only local residents showing up, his popularity still shot up. Because under normal rules, selection takes around 10 years, but with his and the mayor's skill, they managed to pull it off, and they forced a process that usually takes dozens of generations to happen in just 7 days, and somehow churned out tons of products while locking in steady, reliable production. Rail tore into fruit and bragged that even in the capital, you'll never find vegetables packed with this much sugar. Now that's a real win. He'll hawk it in Seora, then he jumps onto a cart, rides out, waves goodbye, and tosses him a smile as he wishes him good luck. In the next few days, get ready. Visitors and merchants are about to flood in, all eager to grab your products. So yeah, the moment's finally here. Galena's heart burned with one dream, to open her very own inn, she blurted. He looked downright pissed, like this was the only thing he'd been chasing all along. Then he turned around. He leaned in and said, if they'd built this first, Joseph would have started grumbling from the jump. But this time, he just couldn't bring himself to disagree. She said the free market would make it brutally hard, and then he told her, I warned you, I'd always stand by you, because honestly, who's going to sleep without him? Still, that's not what he was trying to say. He needed her to lend a hand. He wanted her to build it with her own 2 dwarf hands, so she spun around and shot back. Did you seriously forget we're dwarves? They didn't slap together boxes, they built real houses, and then everything. That rule only fit the ordinary dwarves, and she'd go even further, crafting furniture too, because that's exactly what she loved to do. Noct grinned, saying he knew exactly what she was great at, and she fired back loud and clear that they were doing it, just like that. First, they had to pick who'd run this place, because if nobody took charge, keeping track of the accounts would have drained him, and he knew he had to handle it. She shot him a glare and snapped that he was the worst of the bunch, Mia and Joseph included, then complained she needed more time to sleep. Just as that moment hit, she peeked out from behind the bush, heard her name shouted, and blurted out aloud, yes. He spun toward her and demanded, what's Joseph doing right now? She answered, he's watering the fields. Then she added, and yes, I'm the one. She wasn't trained enough for this, period. She'd have to call him later, and yeah, maybe there were. Only some people on that territory matched the rules right now, and were actually free, so she showed up with a list, saying she'd already narrowed it down to a small one. Later, they finally reached Olivia's place, and her whole face lit up. She even asked if the Lord had come to pay them a visit. She burst with relief, so glad he was finally here, then realized he should make him wait just a minute, because if he'd shown up a bit earlier, he could have joined in. Show up for dinner with them, though it's still early. Maybe they'll invite you before that moment slips away. She tossed a snack into the mix, pulled out cake, and the two of them dug in like they couldn't wait another second. And he swore there was this solid, mouth-watering sweetness in it, but the fruity. Those notes hit like fresh air, pure relief for the stomach, and somehow it kept getting better. And for her soul, too. She locked eyes with him and asked if he'd want her as the inn manager. He nodded fast and fired back, asking, and asked if it would be too much of a burden, but Kuklua snapped back that she'd handle her mother. Then the protagonist said he told him he'd spotted her tied up with something earlier, and she nodded like, yeah, I'm just making. They were grinding out medicine, but right then, no doctor was anywhere on their property. If things went sideways, they couldn't lean on the mare by herself, because she was already thinking about opening. She cracked open the pharmacy doors like it was her home base. Everything she needed was right there. Then she and the others stepped outside, and she told him that if he needed someone fit to handle it, he should just introduce him to someone. They stormed up to the house and ran straight into Hannah. Hannah, Felicai, and Levi. Then Levi steps up and greets me. He flashed them a grin, then introduced himself, name and all. Olivia leaned in and told the Lord that his family had once been running the show. The inn, he ruffled his daughter's hair and told her, with a heavy pause, that it had been ages. Before she was even born, all of it started years ago. He let out a happy laugh. Nice, he's on his way to manage the first one in the land of Big Small, but Galena snapped back, saying he was overreacting. Honestly, they're not doing much acting at all. Their real job is basically handling the reception and scrubbing the place clean. They both spun toward her, demanding to know what she meant by the good. The good ending was right there on the land itself, but the moment they saw it, they were completely blindsided by what happened next. Their thoughts locked in perfectly, and then they just stared at each other in silence. And she shot back, "So when did this turn into your territory?" And he answered, right there in her face. And then he dropped that old "all's well that ends well" line: work, drinks, trips, because no one really remembers the middle. They only lock onto how it all finishes. Levi told them that once you reach an inn, your traveler's day finally hits its finish line. They both blurted it out the same way. The quality of an inn is inner. He sized up the whole big and small territory like it was a chessboard, lit a cigar, and beckoned him over. He leaned in and asked if he got what he was saying. Yeah, he grinned, and then he was so sure he'd nailed it that he challenged her, asking if she actually knew what she was talking about. She knew a good service isn't sold, it's given from the heart. They tossed in their choices too, but knocked cut in and spoke up a bit. He slipped into the bedroom, set up a spot to eat, and right when they looked around, confusion hit them hard. They locked eyes, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just missed something big. During that heated debate about what the best hotels need, they fired off different choices again, at the exact same time. He sounded so confident, but it was obvious he had no clue what he was saying. He thought he was getting it all wrong, but it was obvious he couldn't possibly be, because something just didn't add up. Olivia basically dragged him in and introduced him like it was totally normal. But yeah, he was clearly off the wall. And he didn't want to hurt her feelings, yet he couldn't just let it stay like this. He had to prove that his version of justice was the one that mattered, and that the truth was on his side. He clenched his hands into fists, then barked, said that then he'd have to prove it. Then they headed straight for the square, where the residents had shown up too, throwing a big presentation contest to decide which hotel they'd pick. Joseph showed up too and told everyone they were. Levi clocked their faces and demanded to know what wild scheme they were cooking up again. The protagonist cut them off and said, "Jelena's the one who's going to make it happen." He poured his skill into building models bigger and better, so they could finally dream up and construct the hotel of their dreams. Dreams in less than an hour on this piece of paper. He should paint his dream hotel in words, then grinned, picked up the quill and said it looked like a blast. Then he snatched a quill and bellowed for everyone to figure out whose dream hotel it was. "Is the best in the world." Then after a while he blared out, "Listen up, this is my place." His version, this is the layout, and it has to be just like this. Every single room is a bedroom, except the reception room, and right here was a place to rest. He followed him, scanned the area, and asked if everything. This whole setup feels way too dull, so why not spice it up with some multi-layer math? If that mattress has shock-absorbing magic, you'll sleep here way more comfortable than you ever thought possible. The MC told everyone, people act like the mattress is what matters most in a bed, but they're dead wrong. But don't miss this. Those springs that carry the weight matter way more for a real good night's sleep, and there's only one. They've got 1,500 springs in these beds, so the moment you lie down, it's pure comfort. Then they step outside and Levi said they'll check his side next. Inside, it's basically a half bedroom. A bedroom and a half dining room mashed together. He spun in place, stared, and muttered that the whole thing was ridiculous, like, just look at it if you count the kitchen too. The food area hogs 2/3 of the whole space. Turns out it's not an inn anymore. He said, dead confident, that when someone wants to rest, they always convince themselves they've got to sleep first. He might have slept, sure, but that's not the whole truth, you know. You've got to see it from the other side, and suddenly those pleasant memories hit like a wave. Memories stacked up, good drinks hit hard, the food was unreal, and we partied non-stop, right up until the very end, and only then did. So when night falls, do they finally hit the sheets? He gets it right. Honestly, that's completely fair. Business, some walk away smiling, others get crushed. That's how it goes, win big or lose everything. They went out. Jelena stepped outside with a smile, and when the last model finally got knocked, it spun back to her and asked if she decided to join in too. He sprang into action. Magic surged through him. And she said, "What good are the best beds in the world if no one walks into the inn and chooses to stay the night? That's why from the outside it should look like a stunning castle, because that's how it is meant to feel." He stared in shock at what he saw, and she looked at it with pure admiration, making sure they'd finally sleep deep and wake up rested in a place like this. He asked, a bit confused, "Don't you think I can sleep here?" Then pulled the building back on her. He refused to back down and admitted, more or less, that if he kept wandering around, he'd only end up more exhausted. So she bristled with fury and demanded at the top of her lungs why he'd walked it back. He didn't back down, he ignored it all, turned to him, and said they finally understood each other's ideas. "So how about a draw? Levi shot back loud and clear that the person whose hotel has the most. The more residents who packed in, the better your odds, because it became a head-to-head showdown for who'd run the top hotel in that tiny big territory. Later on, the protagonist was slumped in his hotel room, and he told everyone, 12 of the 43 residents from the territory have already checked in. In that other hotel, there were already 14 people. So far, it's been neck and neck. Then he snapped out loud in a no-nonsense voice that his hotel was anything but cool. There was no chance of losing, so they couldn't just sit there. They had to go find out how this was really going to play out. Everything was moving with him. Then they swapped clothes, slipped into the hall, and the mayor started talking He took in the place with a shock, because it was actually buzzing, and then he slid into his seat at the table. They set a dish in front of him, and he shot off a loud warning that you're not allowed to eat within 3 hours of going to bed. This is outright forbidden. There's no way he didn't lose his mind. How in the world did they even approve this? He took a bite, his face lit up, and he blurted out how much he loved it. He knew it the second he stepped in. This wasn't a hotel, this was a cafe, or at best, a restaurant. What is this even supposed to be? This is downright unacceptable. He wolfed down the last bite, grabbed his empty plate, and then he demanded the cook bring more, because soon enough he jolted awake in bed, and the terrified mayor called him right away. Joseph returned to the hall, slumped down, and told them he was insanely sleepy. She noticed him and snapped that it was all because he ate way too much. With a sharp, disgusted glare, he snapped that he'd only finished 1 plate. Then he turned to the other guy and insisted, dead serious, that he'd actually eaten 3. She froze in shock and blurted out, "Is there poison or sleeping pills in this food?" He shot it down and insisted that every bite here was easy on the stomach. Some foods crank up your digestion, and the best ones don't just help, they top them all. He didn't just pick a snack. He nailed the perfect pre-bed meal, timing every spice and measuring every bit like it was all calculated to the last detail. This gentleman broke it down like a battlefield. Business always has a winner and a loser, and he'd already mapped out every single detail to the very last one. He didn't just talk about his dream hotel, he showed it in real life too, and honestly, it's mind-blowing. He slammed a star onto his opponent's board for the vote, then admitted, straight up, that he'd completely lost. Levi spotted him and snapped, "We need to talk." And after that, time dragged on. At that moment, Verdna burst into MC's room, called out his name, grinned like she had something perfect in mind, and then offered to sleep together. She glanced around, confused, like, wait, isn't he here today either? At the same time, he sat in the hotel, already done eating, and thanked him. He fired off a question about it, then leaned in and demanded to know if there were any other free rooms. Levi flashed a wide grin and nodded like he'd just been waiting for this. Then he grabbed the laid and pulled him along too. He dragged him into the room and told him the mattress here has He had exactly 1,500 springs, then turned the first floor into his dining room and stacked his second and third floors for himself, a flawless little paradise. He even lined every room with beds, flopped onto the mattress, and demanded answers like, "Why did I do all this if I already won the competition?" He said that the second he stared at it, memories of his past crashed in. No worries about losses or gains, he was only trying to look after the travelers' bodies, but that kindness spiraled into chaos and piled problem after problem onto everyone. He should have been guarding the ones who mattered most, but instead he chased some impossible dream, and it was pure, foolish blind faith. Right then Verdina and Maya barged into the room, then Levi's question, "Can you be more?" froze them, because what they saw knocked the breath out of them. "Be quiet," he said, smiling as he poked his own cheek, bragging that he looked so blissfully content whenever he fell asleep. After a while, Noct sank into the bath, grinning like he'd found paradise, and told Maya that this huge, open-air private soak was the best thing ever right as Maya approached with a drink, and the moment cut off mid. She blurted that it was the brand-new natal juice, handed him a glass, and he immediately tried to wave her off, too embarrassed to admit she should be the one pouring. She slipped into the bath and told him, straight to his face, that if he wanted, she'd trade that for a massage. He took a sip of the juice, then whispered that everything was so eerily quiet, like time itself had frozen, stopped moving, just soaking in the quiet and glory that everyday life never gives him. Then his mind drifted straight to a giant city, staring out as he leaned in. She faded into the distance and told him people need that kind of time alone. Then she slipped back close, rubbed his leg and promised, "I'm right here." He was seconds from speaking when he spotted Verdna, crouched behind a column like she'd been hiding there the whole time. He leaned in, and when he saw her, panic hit, because he could already feel Joseph's anger snapping back at him. Again, he held his breath and prayed she wouldn't move any closer. He called her and demanded to know what was wrong. Was she hungry? She shot closer fast, like she'd been waiting for the signal, and then she took He downed the juice and started drinking, then immediately called the mayor. only for her to come rushing over. He shoved a fresh glass of juice onto a tray toward him, then hurled that tray as hard as he could into the distance, and told her to grab it, quick. Verdena shot back fast with a tray clenched between her teeth, but the moment she clocked what? Something happened and her fury snapped on like a switch. She glared at him and told him, in a sharp, annoyed voice, not to play with her. With a confused frown, he demanded to know what was wrong with her, because she was acting way too strange. Then she stared at it, lifted her hand, and, with a bright, happy grin, she said she wanted to work. Then he froze, confused, and snapped back that she already did. She hunted for a living because she loved meat, then suddenly blurted out she wanted to switch things up, while he stared at her, totally lost and confused. Look said she was downright strange for wanting to work that much. She told everyone, I just want to be useful, so tell me, is there a job out there I'd actually love? Later. Soon they reached the estate, and she slipped into a maid's dress the moment they arrived. With a slightly stunned face, she blurted that she couldn't move at all, and Maya stepped in calmly, calling her name. Relax. Work and fashion demand patience. Then she strode right up to him and declared that just the two of them, and one maid, would be more than enough for him. He started to say SS. That smile is the kind kids want to copy, so Dina should totally let her try to be just like her, even if Dina's clearly not happy about it. That pleased look on her face screamed, see, I'm not a kid after all. And he nodded. Right then she burst out, loud and proud, so if that's true I'll give him a massage. Then the protagonist snapped, calling her stupid, and swore he wouldn't let her do it. After that, he flopped onto his bed and declared, all right, now I'm going to get you to master the basic skills of a housekeeper, Mayor. The mayor handed him a tree branch and told him to crash in the forest. Fresh, crystal clear air waiting for him. With a fierce, determined look, she nodded and promised, I'll do it. He tossed and turned all night, because she kept waving the tree branches right in his face. Goes up in a flash and blurts out at the top of their lungs that they need to stop making noise. Then later they slipped out to the garden and she told them to haul water from the well and soak the garden. Verdinia grabbed 2 buckets brimming with water, locked in with a determined glare, and nodded her agreement. Then she dumped a massive splash into one spot and went to work washing right away. The flood tore through everything and washed the crops away. Then he just stood there, watching from the side, and snapped that she couldn't even handle something that simple. A job. Then suddenly, a mandrake burst up from the dirt, like it had been waiting all along. Then he let out a huge scream, and the shock hit him so hard he blurted out. Shouted, but the mandrake mistook it for an attack, and kept getting angrier and angrier. Rage surged through it as it whipped its roots around, and lunged to attack him. Verdena sprinted up to him and slammed her hand down, tearing the roots free. She yanked the mandrake right in front of him and shouted, if it would hurt the master, then it couldn't be allowed. Did he finally get that? Understand her, nod in agreement, and then Greg showed up, knotted up with determination, ready to move. He stormed up to them, begged for forgiveness. MC snapped, I can't let this monster slip away again, and she whipped her gaze around the room. She spun around and blurted that her skirt was torn, and there was no way she could work wearing clothes like that. So you're telling me that's how it went? He called her up and basically announced, I got a job. She'll land the job, she's going to be his bodyguard, and she'll defend the good with everything she's got. The good guys pushed back against the bad, until it all pointed right at Stan Gardner. Guard over the order, in short, she's his bodyguard. How does that? As that sound hit her, she beamed, nodded, and happily said that she would do it. He said it, and then, she can't afford to make a reckless move. Everything about this is admirable, but it's only for the greater good. She reached for magic to heal her hands, and she blurted, is this for everyone's good? Then he stared at her and pushed back. Wait, is this what she? That's what she was chasing, right? She shot it down, then pressed him. Wait, does he? I gotta trek up to the mountains for you, right? And she needs to find a job that lets her stay by his side every day. He got completely thrown off by it, spun to go, and called out to the mayor. The mayor told her to handle the rest, and then she snapped back and called him. She clocked him, leaned in, and asked where he thought he was headed, then waved her hand like she had a plan. He waved his hand and told me he was heading back to bed, then started walking off. She strolled through the city, then caught herself. Maybe she should finally learn to respond to people's comments. She's dodging her job with common sense, like she's just some helpless kid who can't do the work. He's not totally sure. After all, she's a giant, but she's not even a little on edge about it. Lua burst out of the bushes, leapt onto his back, and shouted at the top of his lungs with worry etched across his face. He scooped her up and demanded to know what happened. She shot a worried glance over her shoulder, and whispered that some freak was tailing her. He froze in shock, and the second it hit him, Joseph's name came rushing, and he convinced himself he was the only one who could think of it. He can't stomach what he did. She pointed him out, and the anger hit like a punch. He pointed at a dark shape hiding in the bushes and told her he'd been watching her. Noct shouted his name at the top of his lungs and declared, "You've crossed the line." Hannah scrambled out of there, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And he swore it was the innkeeper's. His daughter. He stormed up to her and demanded to know what. With a blush crawling up her face, she admitted she couldn't help herself. She wanted to make friends with Kuklua. He grinned and told her to go make friends. She stood there with her, and a slightly worried look crossed her face. "Look," she bolted away so fast, he sputtered, like he couldn't even finish his sentence. With a tiny smile, she made it clear. She wasn't just scaring her, she was enjoying every second. He called her name and demanded she come closer. She sprinted right up to him, and he figured she was too nimble, too slippery, like once she moved, she was gone in a blink. She was a little shy, because soon all those people would show up, and she didn't know what to do next. She had to get used to them, and then he called her out of the blue, saying, "It's Hannah." She lit up, ready to play. She stayed shy and said she didn't think it was a problem, so he pressed. "You're sure?" Because they were about to play something special today. She swallowed her fear, grabbed her courage and said, "I'm ready to play, right away." He figured that while they were here, this was the perfect moment to try something he'd been craving. He told them both to calm down, then started shrinking them, like it was nothing. He even believed everything was fine with her, until that. An explosive blast tore across Hannah's side. He shouted her name and told her to quit trembling and just embrace it. So they both flinched in the same instant. Kukula's voice cracked with sadness as she said, She got dragged back into being a kid, and he swore he'd come back. He came back later and made sure everything was returned in full. He shook the tree hard, something crashed to the ground, and they both got ready for what happened next. Both of them snapped into panic from it. Then he handed them a plum, and he blurted out that he was sorry for scaring them, and Hannah snapped back in shock. Swedish. Sugar, she didn't hesitate, she wanted to try it, and the moment they started eating, she blurted out in shock, "This is actually delicious," and stayed right there beside him, still stunned. With a bright, joyful grin, she practically gushed that her master's skills were absolutely incredible. Kuklila snapped her head toward her and demanded, "Tell me you understand what I meant." He was insanely cool. She nodded right away, and the protagonist snapped, starting to cast magic on himself. Then he told them to start playing, and when the words hit, he shrank back and muttered that it was just another way of looking at the world. Everything around them is wild, isn't it? And then they burst into motion, hopping from leaf to leaf like it's a game. He slid down onto the bird's back, and even as he dropped in, he still went for the fight. Thought they were connected by more than just a shared thing. Turns out it's kids, except each one is packed with a totally different power. Honestly, it doesn't even matter. She's insanely beautiful. She's razor sharp and fully aware, even though she's just a kid. Later, he rushed back to the estate and found Verdina sound asleep. She dozed off, and without hesitation, he covered her with a blanket, then headed out. Climbing into another bed, she crashed to sleep and swore, straight to everyone, that she was definitely a kid. After a while, Rael finally found his way back to his room, called him in, and announced with a grin that he'd just woken up. Joseph stood beside him and snapped, "I'm wiped, I worked way too much yesterday," and then it. The weird part, MC felt older than him. Then MC grabbed his clothes and started getting dressed, and said, he told him, "I'm sorry it has to be like this, did something happen?" Then he started, "We found." He finally landed someone good for himself, and when he heard the news, pure joy lit up his face. Then he blurted, "So, is this a wizard?" "Wizard, you really believe that even in this world, wizards are priceless, and that they only thrive when their bloodline adores them, their surroundings cherish them, and their lineage blesses them. And then you'll soak up the Book of Magic Secrets, survive cutthroat training at a magic academy, and earn your mentor's full trust. He's a noble S bloodline, so that's a huge advantage for him." Then he storms out, asks to greet him immediately, and they hustle into the hall where a crowd of people was already gathered, standing shoulder to shoulder. Juno stepped forward and greeted my lord, and Sito blurted that Lord Rael had told her he was searching for talented people. Lionel stood right beside them, quiet as stone, saying nothing. Nair tried to hand them a seat, but he shot it down. So she leaned in and declared, "You're part of the Royal Magic Army now." He was stunned by what he heard, swore they were precious, top-tier people. Then she glanced away and she told him she'd finally snagged some free time, so she was hunting for work, and not grabbed her hand. They lifted that happy grin and told them, straight up, that they wanted them to work for them. She opened her mouth to speak, but Liony came over, froze for a beat, and hesitated right there. They swallowed their nerves and admitted they were an elite unit, ready to team up with them. He clocked the way she trembled, and a sharp question hit him. Was she shaking from fear or something else? She crumbled with cold fear, and he surged in to calm her down. "Hey, what's wrong?" he demanded, cutting himself off as he asked, What? He was seconds from asking what kind of magic she used, but she snatched out a note and started reading it, voice shaky and hesitant. They were about to launch an expedition to plant their own base in the heart of the city. Her allies begged her to stop, but she ignored them and snapped that she knew the land better than anyone, like she didn't even need their warning, which means their unit is called Father. Then they leaned in close, staring her down, and said that. She snapped, "Nope, it says land, not father," and the second she said it, embarrassment hit her like a wave. Red-faced by what happened, they stared at it, totally baffled and not knowing what to make of it. He closed the distance and demanded, "So tell me, what does your unit specialize in inside the magic army?" She blurted it out, face burning hot with embarrassment. They were just a band of farmers. Juno was a. Shame crashed over him, and he slammed his hands over his face like it could hide what he'd done. Then the sentence cuts off. They pulled the hood tight and swore, with absolute certainty, that this was definitely not something he could brag about. Seto swore that nothing could. They weren't just digging in the dirt. They were forcing something deeper, and he had no idea what the hell they were doing. When Rail stepped up and told him that mudbloods was what earthbenders got called, it hit like a warning. Maybe they were desperate to keep the truth buried. The protagonist grinned and said they were digging in the sand like little kids, hands buried in it like it was the greatest treasure. Kid's lion eyes shot back with indignation, then steadied himself and calmly said it was good, and that's exactly what they were hunting for answers, and this twist hit them like a punch. Then he finally spoke and everything changed, and he said with a grin like their motto was simple, live for what you love. With pure passion and years of experience, could they help them keep it all running strong? She took a deep breath, counted her way through the roads in this territory, and finally calmed down and then he blurted, "Wait, shouldn't we build a wall first?" She blinked at this shock and snapped, "Are they seriously trying to build a wall now?" Then she refused. She snapped back, refused outright, then quickly flicked her eyes at their. As soon as she stepped through their walls, everything looked brutally wrecked, totally ruined and in dreadful shape. Seto snapped that their defense was shockingly low, and if the enemy struck, they'd be finished. Juno said it was like a sheet of foil. One hit, and it would get instantly destroyed, useless in any war. She said that. She said she wouldn't bother asking who built it, but she didn't even get to finish, because MC shot his hand up and declared, "It's me," and she had to keep going with the job. She'd been freaking out about it, and her squad was like, "Nah, total lie. Just a joke," and it felt insanely good to hear words like that from. He took it in stride, then calmly said, "I'm absolutely incredible." So yeah, they'd be beyond thankful, and they'd step up to do those people an invaluable favor. Yeah, those words hit her straight in the heart. She broke down and started crying. She burst into tears, stunned she'd ever heard words like that. Then Juno called. He called out to her and barked that they'd never let their tears spill in public, then told her to stop crying. She blinked, and that's when she noticed. He had tears in his eyes, but then he snapped out loud that it was all because of the pollen floating in the air. He stared them down with a tiny smile, like he'd already guessed how brutal their suffering must have been. Monet stepped up to them and asked, straight up, if he could get them to build a wall. She spoke with a calm, heavy gaze, like she knew defending this territory was a monster of a job. Was he really willing to hand an important job to total strangers? With a calm smile back then, he clocked every mood between them, reading people as keenly as anyone could. Those words hit her like a punch. Her eyes filled up, tears spilled out, and he realized she was taking it to heart. They ditched the organization and marched straight to the border, because here, results hit harder than effort, and the ones who dig into the truth behind it all get valued the most. Results, he'd felt this same gut punch in a past life too. She wiped her tears, looked straight at my lord, and swore she would carry out his. The job left them, former members of the elite Royal Magic Army. They're about to forge the ultimate wall, one nobody, absolutely nobody, can ever get past. He snapped with an idea and said, "A new wall, turns out we'll be able to do it too." Then they set it in motion. Later, they hauled up to Greg and spilled the whole story to him. With a bright, laughing face, he declared that after all this time, the patrol's walls would finally be ready the moment the orcs come for them. Noct watched it happen. He always let Verdun handle it all, and he couldn't help thinking he was next. He always counts on girls, and he even said there's nothing to worry about. With a thunderous shout and a furious scowl, he snapped that she has no clue what anything is worth. She just stomps demons into the dirt, so there's not a single thing left to salvage. He snapped around to the mages, and declared he'd steal the elite squad's wisdom, then hand them the task of forging walls. Calls for the patrol. Lyanna shot her staff up in front of her and said that if that's what the master wants, then. She reached out and gripped Greg's hand, and right there, Juno stood nearby and started to ask, but the moment only left her with answers cut short. There are only 4 of them. Seto snapped his head toward him and asked if they could split the work into 6-hour shifts instead. Drake punched his way up out of the ground, and before anyone could panic, he snapped that they didn't need to worry, because they still had working hands. He jutted his finger at them and snapped that they were all to blame. Then panic hit hard, and he demanded answers. He blurted out, loud and sharp, "What are you all doing here?" And he couldn't stop wishing. "I swear I wish Dina was here. She'd already smashed one of these monsters." She brought her staff down onto his head, eyes locked with pure, unshakable seriousness. He shoved that expression into the world, and it shattered in his hands. Then it hit him, absolute shock. He blared out the mandrake's name, loud enough to shake the air, and demanded to know what she was even doing. After all, he was growing them with his own hands, and she couldn't believe her eyes. She gasped at the moment, blurted out, "I'm sorry," but they were still. The thing was downright disgusting. Then he jabbed his finger straight at it. He pointed toward the forest, swore those monsters were his friends too, and begged them, "Please, don't kill a single one." He started burying the fallen mandrake, and the mages were still on edge, terrified the monsters would close in any second. The moment he realized he'd become a monster tamer, pure shock hit him like a truck, and he basically told them, "Look, no matter what happens, I'm betting you'll all learn to get along with time." At that moment they were cross-legged on the floor, sketching something, and he slid right beside them, leaning in to ask, "So, what's this you're drawing?" "Smile, so he's really a former soldier," Joseph said. Said it brought him straight back to his master wish art, like when they were little. Leonaise shot to her feet and declared, "It's all set." He started pitching upgrades for the walls. First, double gates right at the entrance, so the enemy could get trapped and boxed in. Juno held up his drawing and pitched it like a weapon, pikes on the walls, moats dug deep, so they could stomp the captured enemy on their own terms. Then Sito spoke. They told them to slap up a suspended scaffold over the water, then jam a heap of pikes beneath it, so anyone trapped under there would never walk again. MC stared at it in disbelief, thinking, "This is way too much. Did they really serve in the army?" Greg shouted, loud enough to cut through everything. "They don't understand a thing. They don't even have a clue what they're proposing, and they're out there digging ditches between the. When water hits those walls, it wrecks both humans and demons alike." Hendrik sank fast, so fast he couldn't believe it, and he couldn't stop smiling like he truly loved them. Then, just a few days later, he was lying. Joseph came out of the estate, glanced over, and asked what was going on, because he laid his men on several mandrakes in the courtyard with a smug, satisfied smile. He jacks it up every now and then, huh? He swears consistency is the whole point. He came. Crouching there as he lay still, he finally blurted, "With the area's security like this, will everything actually be okay?" And the truth was, he wasn't worried at all. Worried about it, he just stayed cool and told them, "I'll hand it over to your judgment, trust us." If they're really in trouble, he's certain they'll be told right away. And honestly, he thinks it's better to let someone chase their own purpose than to try forcing them to fit the way you want. He said, "That's the way, then we'll get better results." He nodded like it was perfect, but then he snapped that everyone needs to focus on the territory, and with that he stood up. He stood up, started to leave, and promised he'd go look around. Then later they headed into the city and began searching. He glanced around and boom, said everything was going great, you know, the kind of knocked that makes you pause right. Scott smirked and said they had so many weird surprises that Rail couldn't help but buy them all. He scoured every corner to get it all, and he's convinced the citizens will be dying to check it out. The mayor snapped that there are way too many unfamiliar faces, almost as if the place suddenly filled up overnight with people he's never seen. "Merchants here," he smirked, saying more and more people were pouring in from other domains. "It feels like it isn't just the strange stuff going on that's pushing him. He brings them, and trust me, nothing in this place can be found anywhere else. The berries, they're all waiting in the allotment. Within their territory, their skills will make it possible to buy everything. All the out-of-season vegetables piled here, what a wild, perfect mashup. He even dropped it in the ads, and now he's cooking up another plan behind the scenes." They pushed into yet another spot, and he claimed he'd boosted the glass. Joseph gawked at the glasswork, and then started studying it with wide-eyed disbelief. Surprise hit, and he snapped that it was a cruel waste to burn those precious. She leaned in with that grin and asked, "Doesn't it look absolutely beautiful?" He leaned in and told them it lets sunlight pour in and keeps the inside hot, so if they stack a bunch of these structures, then even with zero skills, anyone can grow vegetables way off-season. He stormed to the exit and told them they had to bring this. He clawed his way back toward its former glory, then his face crumpled. He broke into tears and gasped that he couldn't believe it, but he still thought. They clocked it, then stormed out to the balcony, stared down at the city lights below and the protagonist. Maganus finally grinned and said the seeds they planted were sprouting at last. Their magicians swept in. Na called him and said the last stretch of the wall was finally ready. He thanked them, grabbed a small structure that felt way heavier than it should, and stood there thinking, how could something that tiny be so heavy? She said the three of them built it with materials soaked in deadly magic. Zedo said they couldn't build a big section, but even that little bit stretched it wider anyway. He wasn't sure it came out right, and then she started to explain. They had cooked up different ways to kill, and he demanded more details. He raised his hand, ready to speak, and started. I didn't. He wasn't about to listen to that. He'd wait and demand it when the time hit, because they had to look at it. He used his skill to power up the final section. Then he slammed it into place with his own hands. The gate into the city, she smiled and said that. And now nothing could touch his territory, because and just like that, it turned into an invincible fortress. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Pure shock hit him like a wave. Residents rushed up to them, gaping with admiration, and Greg burst out, joy blazing in his voice, that now they didn't have to be terrified of demons. Juno blurted out, with a wall like this, anyone could come at them. Right then, a massive dragon ripped across the sky above the city, blasting the streets with an earth-shaking gale. With its wings beating hard, MC snapped his eyes to it. He stared in horror and muttered, "This is way too much. You can't tell me that's not true, right?" Then the next day he was sprawled in the library, totally locked in, devouring a mountain of books. A mountain of books sat there. Then Joseph burst into the room and he stared in shock and demanded to know if he'd really been grinding all night. Night fell and he kept reading. Then he blurted that he was swamped with his own. Once he made up his mind, he'd go straight to bed, so he better not start complaining. Shot him a worried look and told him to rest, at least grab a nap, because in most cases, even the residents can't sleep. He's determined to take on that dragon ASAP, because if they don't act now, things will spiral fast. Deal with it right now. If you drag your feet, everything spirals and gets worse fast, and they can't afford even one mistake. In Master Rutherford's library, he searched high and low and still found nothing on the dragon's weaknesses. They're so legendary that even scraps of info are gone. No details, no weaknesses, nothing. Julina burst into the room and yelled at him right away. He said this time there was no escape. They had to build a tavern because with alcohol, he'd drown the memories and forget it all. He spun toward her with a worn-out look and demanded, "So that's what you're saying?" Then he cut himself off like, "Wait, it'd be better if we took some of." She yanked his hand and dragged him along, then snapped out that this was total nonsense, so they stomped right out. Outside, she shoved the door open and blared that everyone was already downing drinks outside. Stress hit hard and people started chugging booze right there on the street. They hunted for a bar, because nobody was leaving the cold air alive and unscathed. He couldn't believe it all happened in just one night, and he urged them to hurry up before he returned. They spun toward the estate and blared the order for everyone to come together. Noct huddled in the shadows, pulling together a list of the perfect people for reconnaissance. They agreed this mission needed the right people, then told everyone they had to pick who would come, because, yeah, if you think about it, Greg has. King's got real combat experience and he's skilled at taming, so this could be huge. He's definitely going to contribute to the mission's success. Then there's that huge catch looming ahead, too. Chances that his character might land him in the absolute worst possible situation. Worst possible situation, right there, the city was going to fall. A guard could totally save the day if things start falling apart from the plan. And when evacuation hits, he grabs 3 people, then later he meets with. He stayed with them, waved Juno over, and promised he'd handle the updates, talking to the squad non-stop during the mission. He nodded along and Verdina lit up, telling him to give it everything he had. Then he called Luz straight away and insisted her recon skills were the key to everything. This wasn't just an important mission. He was pinning everything on her, and she wore a calm smile as she said she'd already spotted the dragon. He grinned at that attitude like it was pure gold, and said that with that drive, they'd get it done, dragons and all. They shouted that they needed to be careful again. Then, after a while, it all settled in. He trudged through the forest, dead tired, and couldn't help wondering if she kept chugging water because nerves were chewing her up. It only made sense. She always needed to cool down, and then she who had. They de-battled all kinds of monsters, but this opponent hit different. Then later, they finally found this. From a secret hiding spot, the dragon stared him down and growled that. Juno stared in disbelief as he chomped straight through Nadal. He stood right beside him and shot the question. He looks like a predator, but is he one of those? He was an omnivore, so he called out to Luz and demanded, "All right, what do we do next?" Next, they went right back to sipping from her wine skin again. The protagonist yanked it straight from her grip, and he blurted out, asking what was wrong with her, and then he sniffed hard. He sniffed the air and went, "That's alcohol." She snatched it back, took one bite, and practically swooned, saying it was absolutely delicious. Sweet, irresistible, and way too powerful. She forgot everything and drifted off to sleep. He let himself fall into sleep, and then snapped awake, caught her fast, and tore out a heartfelt apology for scaring her. Juno. Bruno, eyes full of worry, shouted at him and blurted out. Said the dragon clocked them, and the shock hit him so hard he practically shouted. He snapped, how did this happen? And made it clear his plan wasn't some stupid noddle for. Verdana shoved forward and boomed that he was eating her bear right in front of her. Berries, she won't let him slip away. And then, just as he caught his breath, surprise hit him hard because there was this rare black Iberian pig. If you fed it acorns, it turned into something legendary. To its food, its meat would gain a rare, special FL flavor. She'd been munching noodles since she was a baby, and her whole body practically smelled like sweet berries, like that scent had soaked in for years, which lured the dragon in. Then the monster surged toward them and unleashed a deafening roar. A thunderous roar ripped through the air, and then it hit him. The monster wasn't hunting him at all, it was zeroing in on her. He snapped into place right in front of her, then shut his eyes tight. His eyes wide with fear, but then, to his shock, something unexpected happened. The dragon's eyes locked on Luz, and it started sniffing her. Then everything went wrong. He came in worried as hell. Then out of nowhere, the dragon straight up apologized and said he was sorry for scaring them. He didn't mean to. MC froze at what was coming out of his mouth and blurted, "Wait, what are you saying?" Asked, "Can dragons talk?" She said, "Only the higher magical creatures." She used their speech before, but this time she faced it for the very first time. He burst into laughter and said, "Of course dragons can talk," and then he shouted it so loud it echoed. They're blasting noise so hard that sleep just won't stand a chance, and everyone's staring in shock because of what's going on. And right then he snapped, "Are you two okay?" Pure shock hit him as the words left his mouth. He got a shock, thought it was honestly fascinating, but something about him didn't feel safe at all. He summoned the dragon and demanded to know why it came here, and it was so terrifying that it made them jump, scaring them out of their minds with. He showed up to steal their land, then calmly reassured them, "Don't worry, you're safe. Don't panic, he's only here for the purple berries." The Titan's daughter is all in on this, and he's been falling for it from the very start. He's been itching to try it, and he straight up asked if he was really that interested. Interested, but why didn't he try it back then? The dragon S. Reagan said she looked so insanely happy when she took that first bite. It hit me. Stealing it from her would have been a total tragedy. Verdana jabbed her finger at Luz and barked, Doesn't that hit him? Doesn't he feel her pain?" And when she saw him, did he really grasp just how terrified she was? He quickly apologized, then admitted that the sharp smell of alcohol snapped his attention right away. She glanced at her wine skin, and he casually dropped that his favorite was. He had to ask, could they really spare him just one sip? Nox shot him a grin, then poured the alcohol into. He shoved it onto the plate and demanded the dragon wait. He fired off a skill, stretched the plate bigger than he could have imagined, and it shocked him to the core. Then he started stuffing berries onto it, enlarging those too as he went. They cracked open bottles, and every single one of them drank alcohol together, laughing like they owned the night. He stared him down and said, "Looks like you've got two." The skills he'd just witnessed, and seriously, take this one as an example. Verdine's shrinking skill hit him like a gut punch. He didn't see it coming, and then the dragon called out, "Verdine." Dina walked over and demanded, "Tell me, are you the giant who devours those berries?" Wasn't she though? He was right there, waiting for her, like fate held its breath. And with that fading power of his, it felt like friendship was finally within reach. She shot her hand up and told them, "You can be my friends too." Then of course, she was his bodyguard, and that dragon leaned in with a wicked grin, asking, wasn't it him who was covering her? He wagged his tail and patted. Pats came down on his head and she told him, "Good boy." Then she leaned in like it meant everything. He was really. He spun in shock, and then, like a memory slamming back into place, he thought of his child. Back in childhood, his father ruffled his hair. Then they finished their meal. The king and the dragon reared back, calling her over, and said it felt like she was absolutely obsessed with those berries. Then she glanced at him and he blurts out, "So, is he headed somewhere after he finishes these berries?" She couldn't shake the dread, and she blurted, "Are you coming or not?" He sucked in a breath like he was about to charge off somewhere, then lifted his head and swore he wanted to do it, still, but then he changed his mind. He snapped a breath in and let it go with a loud. A raw surge of energy explodes forward, and it reshapes everything in its path, shaped itself into the exact form of a human. He couldn't believe it, pure shock hit him, and he leaned in and told me one of his abilities is transforming into a human. He stared at him stunned like, wait, so that means there are. Turns out there are others too, and yeah, it hits hard. These powers aren't automatically tied to me. To magic, he begged, "Can I live in my domain?" Juno shut Verdun's eyes and she grinned and asked, "So will you join us?" And he admitted, "I think I'd feel way too bored on my own." Alone and honestly, he hadn't touched alcohol in forever, and he was already craving it, missing that familiar burn. And then he missed the human-cooked food. Yet at first he still got curious about him, and that shock hit him hard. He closed the distance and told him, straight up, that people with skills that wild always live the most fascinating stories. He keeps pushing forward, desperate to find out what he's truly capable of. So when it all started to make no sense, confusion hit him hard. And with a calm smile, he basically said, I think we should have. He grinned and told himself, have fun. Then his thoughts sprinted right back to his family, and he couldn't stop replaying all the times someone had said those same words to him. He thrust his hand out and introduced himself. He let out a warm smile and told him, I'm really glad you're here, welcome to my home. He shot his hand back out and told him, my name is. That handshake totally wrecked my hand. MC's fingers throbbed like crazy, and he hurriedly apologized, and admitted he totally misjudged how strong it really was. Then later, they rolled into the city together, and he immediately started thinking about how his territory needed to be claimed. The territory just made a brand new friend, one that looked a lot like his father. Right at the city gates, the crowd surged in tight waves, elbow to elbow. Together, Lenny snapped loudly, hey, tell me, did they finally catch the dragon? He swore it was gone, just like that it vanished. There the tension finally died down, and he decided it was smarter to keep that secret off the residents' tongues, because saying it out loud would only stir trouble. So if they hadn't run into him, they'd be panicking. And then he leaned in close, shutting them up with quiet, instant calm. She leaned in and whispered that they'd brought him along, then her sentence cut off, like she couldn't even finish the thought. He was so shocked he went to blow up and shout something, but he clamped his hand over her mouth, demanded she calm down and made her say. Then he said every conversation had to happen in his office, and later, once they finally piled in, he started talking like, all right, here's what we're doing. So they finally tracked down the dragon in the forest. Then she slammed both hands on the table and roared, Where is he right now? Still calm as ever. He said he's in the exact same room with them. They split up and tore through the office, checking every corner for answers. Still not getting what he meant, he snatched him. Then his hand transformed. She turned into a dragon and told them. Maybe then they'd finally believe just how terrified she was because of what happened, and he claimed he used his skills to disguise himself as a human. Then he turned to him and asked if he should slip back into his real form. He blurted a huge, furious no. And he warned that he'd ruin everything she grabbed. Then he caught her hand, swore he was her master, and demanded they step aside for a moment. They moved aside and she asked in a hushed voice, Are you sure everything will be okay? He just answered. He wrestled with the question in his head, was it really okay? But the truth wouldn't come, and he just couldn't find the words. How was he even supposed to know that? The dragon studied Greg, then said he'd caught its attention with an interesting. Silence fell and that caught him off guard. He blurted out that he could hear scratching. Scratches on his armor, then that sharp smell hit. And yeah, he's a tamer, isn't he? These marks, he whispers, breath catching as he demands mandrakes. He started to sweat over it, panicking that she might judge him harshly and think badly of the. They stared at him for what he did. Then he surged closer, grabbed his hand, and held on tight. He reached out, grinning like he'd just found an old friend, and blurted that it felt unbelievably familiar. Familiar, he even used to breed them himself. So hearing this made his whole face light up, and he basically snapped, no way this can be true. He finally landed a real friend, but that job still demands you know what you're doing. Grabs grinned with bright cheer, and insisted that this kind of fun still demands real know-how. Depending on the soil and how you cultivate it, a mandrake can balloon into basically any size you can imagine. He tore across the world hunting for the best soil, held up his hand to show the rough size, and then said it looked like. Right there, it seemed that it was in. In the end, he somehow managed to grow it to about this big. Greg couldn't believe it and blurted out, Wait, can they grow through? He was 3 times larger than him. How the hell did that happen? And when asked, he said it dead. The tone made it clear he wasn't ready yet, so he blinked, caught off guard, completely startled. He was totally stunned, nodded along and said, No way, we're learning that dream's secret way too early. The dragon master leaned in with a sly little smile and asked if you wanted to become his apprentice. He didn't hesitate for a second, and the protagonist shot him a look. So he figured he'd mesh way better with the dragon master than he ever did with them. YNA said she finally understood the master. Then they ignored her, and Grab smirked that it was especially heartbreaking when the creature he cares about gets killed. He says it with a heavy, mournful stare, like they're fading away or just going to sleep. None of it mattered. What mattered was this: they were buried in the soil. She let out a heavy sigh and told him to stop right there, because there wasn't a single soul in the forest, and he thanked her. Then she cut him off mid-sentence and said that she still couldn't wrap her mind around it. Somehow, they'd made friends with this dragon, and then he burst into laughter and told them to just let things play out naturally. Then later, he said, he claimed that the truth about who Grab was would stay locked in their circle, then the rest. It was a secret. If the townspeople found out, panic would spread. Then everyone spilled out of his office and he turned to him, and with a bright grin, he admitted he hadn't been around people in ages. Maybe they should go for a walk, because he's staring at it like he's already decided. MC clocked the urgency, nodded like, got it, and threw his agreement right back at him. He nodded back with a grin and said, let's do it, this will work out better. It right away, so they dashed for the exit. And he demanded to know if they could bail right now. Then he yanked the door open and pointed. He jerked his finger sideways and said, let me introduce myself. Take me in, I want to show you this city. City, he felt relieved, then shot the idea right away. Let's start at the market. They marched into the market and he blurted, this place is packed, like, jammed with people. He brings it to his city, because everyone from the estate ends up here. Rail grabs every last thing they need. Easy, he tracks it down. Anything here, including alcohol, caught his eye and he blurted out, excuse me, I'm curious, then asked. It's delicately prepared alcohol. So insanely good it leaves you craving more. It just calms the whole soul, right? He pondered that for a second, then took it, snagged his hand, guided him onward and told him, surely the vegetable. The veggies they grow in that greenhouse are straight up delicious. And he hauled him there, proudly saying they built the whole thing with his help. His powers and the careful hands of carpenters, because this greenhouse is built with oversized. Inside that glass, you can grow any crops no matter the season. Then take a bite and savor the fresh flavor of what you just harvested. And said he uses his abilities with ruthless practicality. He's honestly way too interesting, so they pushed on until Knox finally said, now you've got yourselves a berry garden. He froze at the shock of it and blurted, these are the berries I used to make the alcohol I drank in. Deep in the forest, something got made, like a secret the trees were hiding. Was it all in his head, or did that mouthwatering scent just drift out of there, calling to him? He stared. He glanced that way, scoffed that it was nothing but some winery, and then yanked him away, snapped him out of the building's grip, and told him they had to chase something way more interesting. And later they stumbled into the bathhouse where he told me I could soak in that heavenly bath for just 500 gold per visit, then shrugged with a totally uninterested look, like there was Then the view was pure magic, until hot springs showed up and he snapped because he just couldn't handle them anymore. He finally said, I'm sorry for teasing you all this time, and begged him to let himself enjoy the best drink. Grab spiraled with worry and apologized for getting on his nerves, then blurted out, loud and clear, that it was absolutely not like that. And after the bath, the chill hit like a blade, bone-deep cold, while Levi brewed that freezing cup of coffee. He stared at it, then let out a disappointed sigh but this wasn't the answer. He strained to catch the sound and found nothing, not even a hint of it, but then boom, he jerked to his feet and unleashed a blast of power so intense it hit like a storm. Strong energy hit him, and total confusion crashed over his mind. And right then, Jelena blindsided him, smacking him hard on the head. They called him an idiot and told him, straight to his face, that his rage was completely justified. He froze in shock and blurted, I haven't even taken a nap. I'm just trying to show you around this city that everyone all built up, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the faster this was finished, the better. She said the only thing they wanted now was to. It was crystal clear. He was about to pour himself a drink, so he wheeled around toward him. He leaned in and asked, is that really true? And Grab immediately nodded like it was a slam dunk. And then he tells them, get it here for us, but she slams the door on that request. And she grinned and blurted out that all she wanted was a drink, and in a place that could finally feed that burning desire. He nodded like he'd just solved a riddle, then stared at them like they were hiding the answer. With a puzzled look, he asked, does it really matter where you pour your drink? She shot him a look and asked, are you really telling me you don't know this? And he just said, there's a world of difference between knocking back drinks at home and doing it in a gritty dive. From sipping drinks in a bar, she leaned in and said there's a fairy tale hiding right off the edge of everyday life. The best way to kill your downtime is a bar, and MC is left totally baffled like, wait, why this? He called him and ordered him to take them there. She dropped to her knees, broke into tears, and he blurted at the top of his lungs that they didn't have a bar. He froze in pure shock, absolutely couldn't believe it, and then she said, told them they'd better build it. Then, just like that, he crumpled to his knees from pure heartbreak, grit his teeth, and said, and then they shouted that they'd build it with their own hands and reclaim their fairy tale. Jelena's heart got wrecked by the words, and she said, then he blurted out, right from the depths of his heart, that she was his real friend. After that, they jumped into it and started planning the building, stocked up on alcohol, and then, later, the very first bar finally showed up on that big screen, like it was magic. Small property. When the building was finally done, he got a letter that claimed they had saved him a spot and begged him to show up. Then he strode right into he slipped into the bar without waiting in line, and it hit him. he never saw this coming. In his past life, he'd never once stepped foot into a bar. He stormed into his working room and saw a grab. The uniformed dude who'd said welcome slapped on a grin, then sat down and, outside the bar, he dropped a towel in front and made sure it was ready. A stand right in front of him. He grabbed it, staring at it like, wait, this is going to change everything, isn't it? It smelled incredible, and then he thrust something into his hands, cutting the scent of victory right off with a rushed, here. He slammed a huge book on the table and said, here's the menu just for him. He tore it open. His nerves spiked and he panicked like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to pick. Then the legend slid into the conversation. Lurking on the edges of everyday life, he wiped the glass clean. He stared at the glass right in front of him and demanded, so what are you ordering? He demanded something delicious with a baffled look, convinced he'd just said the absolute worst thing imaginable. He grinned at that and told me, if I say I want something refreshing, everything would be fine. Those words should have calmed too. He hauled him back under control, then leaned in and said, then, he needed something that would make his eyelids finally beg him to shut. After that, he wore a calm expression on his face and kept it there. With that look on his face, he started whipping up a cocktail just for him and shoved it into his hands. He grabbed it, sniffed the scent, and he told them, it smells amazing, then flashed a grateful smile like he'd just received the best gift. He just swept him through the city, and that cocktail, it's built on natal wine, so every sip hits with a sweet kick. Sweet as candy, but then boom, bright lemon danced on the tongue, and Nock blurted, shocked, that's crazy good. What do you call it? He asked, then shrugged and said they haven't settled on a name yet, so they're about to slap a name on it after these lands. An original cocktail from Big Small, and it's straight up legendary. Could they really name it after him? He blurted, stunned to the core, then broke into a smile and said, he said he never knew you could get to a place like that so easily. To relax, he snapped his hand toward Jelina's. He slid in beside her and told her to hand that lady the very same thing. The same cocktail. She beamed like she'd just won a secret bet, then asked if he finally got it. The pull of bars was real, and now he couldn't stop thinking that having a drink at home or in a cafe just didn't hit the same. Wasn't the problem, getting wasted in a bar was a whole different kind of trouble. Something else entirely, like a fairy tale that somehow exists right in front of us. Lurking on the edge of ordinary life, like a secret nobody wanted to talk about. Life called him a bar later, and then he showed up. He walked into the bar with Olivia, and the moment they were there, they clinked their glasses and toasted together. And he told her he'd raised a toast to her beautiful eyes, then she just stared and asked, what kind of bar is that, exactly? Could she just step in? He told her the whole place was hers to command, then he snapped his fingers. Fingers leaned in and ordered another drink for the young lady in Kuklua, sitting right beside him. His legs jumped for it too. She got a huge glass of milk and they kept going. He took a sip, then snapped his gaze away, only to freeze when he spotted Rail sitting right beside her, and he couldn't make sense of it. He shouted that it was all a mistake, insisting he never meant to step in or cause trouble. While he ruled over his people, he flashed a smile and swore everything was perfectly fine, then leaned in like, so, what do you say, want to try getting something? He muttered that he wanted it for himself, then froze, confusion hit hard, and he blurted, I'm talking about the underground mines. He was convinced there was a single mine sitting right between those. Small and Hadlet. Long ago they dug for jewels and minerals there, until the past finally catches up. After the orcs crushed in, the place got ditched for good. There weren't enough hands left to keep it running. He grinned and said, just like back in the old days. If they hauled those minerals back to Big Small, it meant a fortune, so he'd be totally set. Generals and jewels, and somehow he still nodded along, promising that if they turned up something new. New materials had Jelena seeing sparks everywhere, like she could whip up something truly exciting. Later, the protagonist caught himself thinking, only to realize his mind kept looping back on itself. He thought one conversation with him would seal everything, no turning back. He stormed into his office, and the mayor greeted him right away. Then Greg stepped up beside her as she told him. He asked me to try again. Once she got the cell activation from Kabusuk, a horrifying monster could spring to life at any moment. She couldn't stop her nerves from buzzing as she stared at him, and then he closed the distance. He just stared, clueless about what he even meant, because Big Small suddenly looks like it's one step away from a full-on biohazard disaster. Later, Joseph finally listened and told him, with those skills you'll get rich in no time, and his voice cut off in a tiny, stuttering. Rail smiled like she expected the same from him. Then she poured tea and leaned in, asking who he planned to hand the next responsibility to. Before anything got extracted, he insisted they had to study it first, because the mines had been left behind for ages. Time was running out, everything had to be checked, every monster had to be cut down. Once the mining site was secured, they had to send the workers out next, and he was already moving. he would go. He'd inspect first, so the choice of who came with him was totally up to him. And Verdina would definitely. He couldn't delay it, this fight was coming no matter what, so he had to go. But how many more people would get dragged into it with him? She insisted he take her along, because if a battle broke out, she'd be the one fighting and turning the tide. He nodded, grinning, and swore that having a healer around would be a lifesaver. Greg slammed his palm on the table and snapped that he was going too. He had to round up every last new monster. When MC told Lionel he'd bring yet another strange creature, Lionel didn't hesitate. He said he'd kill him for sure, and MC was totally blindsided, and dropped to his knees, begging them to take him along. Then he stared at them, sharp and determined, like he had already made up his mind. Wait, those strange things, he said. Did he really create it? He forged the tyrant mandrake, then let out a heavy sigh and admitted, I could show up, then they'd grab Juno too, because she insisted they were together when they finally reached the dragon. He kept scanning the area like a guard, and jumped in to handle all the little tasks that needed doing. You can trust him, he still remembers when earlier he came to him and saw. And he blurted out that he was truly grateful for the help, then rushed to apologize for putting you in charge. Handing it to him alone felt risky, then he spun around and told him straight up that he loved every second of it, so nothing ever went wrong. He just does his job in complete silence. He stays quiet, but his eyes never miss a thing. Then he smiles, because working under a boss like that feels like pure joy. After a while, they finally packed together and rolled up to the city gates. Nox stepped up to him and asked, so what kind of hood is this? And then wait, was he really that shy? He looked. Embarrassment flared in her chest as she politely begged him to stop, and then a worn-out Sito stretched and practically breathed. We're finally done. Finally, Liney stepped up, took her turn and marched over to him, calling them the master, and demanded what he was doing with Juno, then whipped around to face her. He leaned in and told her, we are heading to the subway mines. Then he spun around, like he couldn't wait any longer. He swung over to her and promised he'd borrow it, and that's when her anger flared. She called him out on the spot like, seriously, you're at it again. It hits again when they charge the dragon. Is it the exact same nightmare? He starts to feel She looked uneasy and blurted that the master had assigned him, and she couldn't forget how close they'd gotten during the last expedition. And he leaned in and told her everything that happened, then stood right between them and said, folks like him were famous for sinking into gloom. Then she yanked out her staff, snapped into magic, and Juno immediately dropped into a pit that opened right beneath his feet. With worried eyes, they kept signaling each other, calling out in a panic, and she flashed a tiny smile and said, But this trek was straight up lethal, and starting now, one of the squad's magicians would march alongside them. The mayor hesitated because losing would sting, but then he hit the real question. How could he even let it slip away? Verdina beamed, lifted her hand, and could it be? And told them, don't you worry, she'll protect every single one of you. Greg snapped, don't let her get hurt. Like that was the only rule that mattered, because they were friends, right? The protagonists figured there was no escape this time. No way they weren't going to clash. And Juno was the one they swore would be the perfect pick. He tried to fight it, but he couldn't. She was seriously eager as hell. He said he couldn't wait to work with her. And with a long road ahead, they had to. Lion 8 had to make sure everyone was ready for anything. Then he asked, how far is it to the M? The mine? She nearly choked when he claimed it was a 5-hour walk each way. Then the mayor came up and said, he swore everything would change once they got a carriage. Then grinned, telling her not to fret. With a flick, he tossed a tiny card onto the floor and blasted it bigger with magic. He rang Verdina and told her to stay put and start climbing the mountain. Right now. Then they hopped into the cart, and it yanked them forward so fast the world blurred, right until the cart itself. The cart jolted over every bump, and Greg's mandrake skidded out and spilled everywhere. He yanked the cart free and hauled it from behind, and later, they finally reached the mountain and started scanning everything around them, and she blurted out in shock. She couldn't believe it, this thing was way bigger than her home. Leonie stared with sharp, burning curiosity. He said it was a stunning place, so perfect, it practically begged for pioneers to stake their claim. Dana sprinted ahead and told them to rush over there, and MC snapped back, wait a second, and insisted they had to scour the nearby stuff right away. They hustled to the building right nearby, and he dropped a quick line like, it was an old office where the mine workers used to work. He strode up to the door and immediately spotted the lock, and Greg blurted, you don't have a key, do you? Then his mind snapped back to and he said there was one time he lost the key to the entire area, and he had no clue where it had gone. Verdina stepped up and asked if she could try opening it, and he ruffled her head and told her that the way she was doing it was exactly what you call proper. Property damage if you shrank the door a little, It felt like that was the only path left. Diana stormed up to them, snapped, wait, and unleashed magic to stop them cold. She whipped her hands through the air and forged a tiny key out of thin power. They were completely stunned, and she marched right up to the door. He yanked the door open and blurted, "All right, now we can finally go in." They stared at her, totally baffled, and decided she must be nothing but a thief. If she looked utterly lost, then blurted out in a panicked voice, "What's wrong?" She blurted out his name, cheeks burning, and asked, half in shame, what he'd done with Verdana. Dina, he won't pet her. He shot her a worried look and asked if she could do the same. He had his private home on his turf. She grinned and agreed, then promised she'd never let anyone block the gentleman. They followed the man's path and slipped inside, where dust clung to everything, and the mayor jerked their hand up to cover their own nose. He fanned the air with a stack of handkerchiefs, then said this place had been left on its own for nearly half a year. Sneezed so loud he practically shook the walls, and Greg just grinned and said, "Man, this place is huge." Knocked spun around, scanned the room and snapped, "This is a bedroom." He smiled and said this building could be put to the same use, if they just cleaned everything up. Lion Eyes said the door wasn't even damaged, then he suddenly spotted something off and snapped out, "This is no good," and jabbed his finger straight at the bed. He blurted out, "This bed isn't for staff," then ripped into the bedding, "What even is this mess? It looks like a wet rice cracker," and demanded they fix everything. Mayor couldn't help it. He admired him and called his antics cute, while Verdana shot a finger to the side, called him over and demanded, "What's this?" Then she closed in. He stepped up to the box and gushed that the stones were stunning, then leaned in even closer and said one of them was photoluminescent, glowing when it senses a light. The stone glowed dim, like the magic in the air was whispering to it, and the moment he snatched it up, it started to crumble in his hand. Then it started blasting out this blazing light, and he swore that if they shoved it hard enough, it'd turn into a lamp. Then he went to put the. He ordered her to shatter the stone on the floor, and she slammed her fist into it with bone-crunching force. And Liony asked, "Isn't this insanely valuable?" Because they still needed more pieces to fire up the mine. And the estate. He closed the distance, started casting magic, and declared that they had to. They needed to crush it even smaller, so grabbed the mining tools. She stared at it, totally baffled, and blurted out, "This is honestly insane. How is this even real?" They charged into the mine, and he called Verdun to tell her to move first, because she was painfully sensitive. They're quick to pick up the signs, because if anyone comes for them, Greg will step in without hesitation. These two already tore into the Orc King, so yeah, you can count on them. He spun toward them and said, "Even then." Then his powers looked unstoppable, until the protagonist snapped, saying they can't count on him right now. Yandere called out to him, because she couldn't possibly help in this tiny room, and zooming in and out just won't work. He pulled him aside and demanded, "What about her?" And he snapped back, "She'll handle it." The moment the enemy stepped into their territory, she nodded and agreed, then they'd handle it. And he couldn't shake the thought that even though she used to be a loyalist, she still isn't just some ordinary one. An engineer, yeah, they can't boss anyone around. Once they realized what was going on, they stopped cold and stared. Then they spotted a pack of monsters charging straight at them. He clenched his resolve, then snapped into a fighting stance, ready to throw down. But then crystals shot up out of the ground and stabbed straight through. She skewered the ants, her magic was already working, and she murmured with a small smile, like he'd just claimed this was their turf. He froze in shock, convinced this was exactly how the royal magic worked. They marched on, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Had been left to rot for ages, and this tiny, sealed space fought him tooth and nail, because it just wouldn't match his size changes. Good skill or not, this place is packed to the brim with monsters. Monsters surged toward them in waves, and he blared that there were way more than they ever expected. No matter how many times they got slain, they still came back. Mayor yanked on his clothes, panic hitting him hard because of the brutal. Severe pain racked them, and Mayor, face tight with worry, shouted, "What are you doing?" He didn't know what to do, then spotted a monstrous ant, and panic hit him so hard he felt frozen in place. Medina sprinted straight at the monster, and slammed a brutal kick into its head. She burst into laughter right after, worry creasing her face as she stared at him. She called out to him, and I swear, she's got real strength, doesn't she? He hit the ground and snapped that they should just stare at those ants, and guilt crushed his chest, while Greg stood by the mandrakes, yelling to her at the top of his lungs. He marched up to her and barked at her to stop wreaking havoc, and the MC shot him a look that practically oozed annoyance. And right in that split second, it hit him. This wasn't just any moment anymore, it was proof he was born to be an adventurer. Dina kept blazing forward, mowing down monsters without stopping, on and on. Along the way, Leonette jumped in and helped her, right when she needed it. The Earth Spear spell, and later, she grinned so brightly you'd think she just won the whole fight, saying that. And it felt like a pure, electric joy. Every time they struck down a monster, the the whole world got brighter and better. A better place. Maya shot her hands toward him, called his name, and promised that if he wanted to come back, he should come back and grab her hands. He thought this with a quick, annoyed look like, It felt like he was the only one taking it seriously, while everyone else was just going along. A bat shot toward them and screamed so loud it made the air vibrate. He froze in shock, thinking, yeah, of course, vampires. Ghostly empire bats live here, but this place feels wildly wrong. This monster is absolutely massive, like, it's impossible to ignore. The monster slammed down nearby, squashed the mandrake to dust, and Greg raged. Then he snapped its name out loud, and said the monster swallowed him whole, then knocked. With worry etched on his face, he blurted out that if they caught him, they'd eat him. The bat slammed Verdant to the ground, and she looked totally baffled and blurted out that she couldn't hear a single thing. Liony snapped into action and slammed out earth spears. Then the monster, Mr. quickly lunged forward in a blur and slipped past every single attack. He came charging at the monster, swung once, wham, and chopped its head clean off, and he struck back, vanquishing his mandrake. Then, right after that, he snapped open the earth shield technique and chained that monster in place. Monster, she snapped to attention, shocked by what she was seeing, and started picking apart every detail of what he had. So he proved it, then said there wasn't a single crack here, and I'm telling you that precision and speed were unreal. Where did he even learn that? He flashed a small smile and said it was worth it to keep taking those regular baths. She couldn't believe it. Somehow, a Bat King was supposed to be hiding in a place like this. Then he shot it down, saying it didn't look like any king at all. He had zero skills, like none at all, and it was driving him crazy, because maybe it was just some weird mutation. They hit a dead end, and right when the mayor spotted a thin glow tucked in a tiny crack, he snapped a warning before anything else could happen. Warned them, then he shoved the crack wider, and they slipped inside a hidden. He stepped into a hidden cave and with pure awe, marveled that the entire gem-bright sparks danced across the ceiling like living jewels, and he blurted the question with a confused look. What the heck was it? Greg stared at him and blurted, what was it? Lion Eyes cut him off and said, forget it, he didn't actually. Did you really think he'd just lose it? An ordinary manatee, that's what they called him, until the name snapped back into his memory. He slipped in for a name and demanded, so what is it? And he started to say, it's that manatite ore just clicks with everything. It's crazy compatible. With magic coursing through it, if you forge a staff from that power, the magic surges upward, massively. And if you swing it as a weapon, it turns into a magic sword that boosts your strength and endurance, and even dumps in special magic power too. It's seriously powerful. That incredibly rare resource is worth a fortune. So the protagonist said a payoff that big could turn into serious profit fast. He couldn't shake it. Rail just felt connected to all of this, and she promised that if they teamed up to extract the resource, they could use it to beef up the territory. He swore he was going to do it, and then the sentence just cut off. He was itching to show it to Galena and the others, because deep down, it all hinged on this, more importantly. Now he could finally cough up the annual tax, and the mayor practically lit up, so excited he even said he'd done it. He said it with a bright, cheerful grin that they had to report this to Rail. Ferdinand snatched him by the collar, yanked him forward, and he blurted out a question, an urgent one. And, with a confused look on her face, she wondered what she was even doing, then drove her finger straight into the depths of the. He pointed toward the cave and told him to check there, because right inside, there were people waiting. People in the crowd were shouting, is this manatite? When they saw that massive vein. They're closing in right up on them. And Liony blared out, demanding to know exactly who they were. He stared at them for a second, the memory hit, and then he blurted out their name. They shouted his name, stunned, and then blurted it out again like it couldn't be real. Name, she spun toward him and demanded, so tell me, is it true? If they knew each other, he nodded at once and said, yeah, we were. They worked at the Metro mine, and they weren't just any people. Once, they were citizens of Big Small. They were finally about to meet again, after way too long apart. How was it? They didn't have to guess. They remembered everything that happened. And he begged for forgiveness, then vowed he was finally rising out of that mess. So in that situation, they just stood there, doing nothing at all. He marched right up to them and without warning, asked for forgiveness on the spot. They were utterly confused, then he dropped the truth. He'd applied for it. He throws out a trembling apology, because he couldn't shield them after all. Back then none of this mattered. Then suddenly they crossed paths again, and he couldn't stop smiling, but now the real question hits. What are they doing right this minute? A guy charged in and snatched Alton by the hair, screaming so loud it cut through everything. Demanded to know if they were screwing around here. He screamed that they were idiots, then slammed him down to the ground. And they heard it straight away. Manatite was right there in front of them, so they should. He snapped, enough with the games, then clocked the other people nearby and demanded, who are you? Mayor charged up to him, poured healing magic into his wounds, and then Noct stepped forward, introduced himself, and declared himself the lord of the big small territory, and he figured that judging by what he did next, this was nothing less than was their boss, and the moment he heard it, the man snapped with surprise and demanded, "So he's the lord of the neighboring lands?" The miners shook like they were ready to break under fear. Fear clawed at him, but he marched closer anyway, and with a grin, he said it was an honor to meet him, sir. Quick question. Could you please leave? This place is built so the metro mine sits right in the middle of it, like it's part of the whole thing. Between the territory of two cities, this is where everything gets twisted. This whole place is theirs. Mayor was the one who claimed it. He blurted out, shocked, "Wait, do you really want to monopolize?" Manatite's eyes widened, because what he heard absolutely blew him away. He crashed to the ground and demanded answers, because how could they pull that off? Now he finally can pay his taxes, so he turns to Rebecca and blurts out an apology. The man grinned and said he felt for him deeply. Lioneye stared at the map, slid up to him, and told him to hold on for a second like, just wait, could he? Can he please explain his claim? From the map, this spot sits in no man's land, right between two opposing territories. They need to sit down and settle, once and for all, who's truly getting to own that manatite. He lunged at her, yanked her cloak in his grip, and she cut in with a terrifying voice that made it sound like she was shut down before she could even speak. Rage burned in his eyes as he stared her down, and she called. He just calmly asked, "So tell me, what does her gender have to do with it?" The protagonist snapped, fury ripping through him the second this hit. And he thought, how dare he, like it hit him right in the chest. He's no gentleman. He stared her down and blared, loud enough for everyone to hear that. And he spoke directly with the Lord. Then he shoved his hand away, stormed up to them, and snapped that he was out. Absolutely, this has to be settled between the two who face it. The two lords step in, and he demands the chance to speak directly with Headlet's ruler. Now they'll grab the manatite and take it with them, and he'll have to push his request straight to the authorities. The man spat and stormed out with the miners, and Maya's rage flared as he threw a loud, indignant question after him. Did he really just spit in the Lord's presence? And Lioneye just smiled like she already knew how this would blow up. She called him up and thanked him, saying she'd never forget how he stood up for her. It looked like pure bravery. Then for her, he suddenly crumpled to the ground and started. He slammed his hands into the ground and shouted that they added a headache. A brutal headache hit him. Then she slid down beside him, eyes full of worry, and snapped that he better start acting decent. After a while at the estate, Joseph finally listened to him, then told him that back in the day, when the signs started screaming that a monster attack was about to hit from in the Great Forest, his father sent desperate requests for help. In the brutal virgin lands, every lord quietly looks out for the others, no words needed. Hadlet never actually marched a single troop against them. At most, they just held back. That's just a tiny stash of resources, and that's exactly where their help kicks in. The meeting finally ended. Then the mayor tore into his office, called him and told him, "I just got a call." He got a letter from Hadlet, snatched it up and blurted, "Did you send this to say we're meeting tomorrow afternoon? We need to talk about it." She hauled herself to her family estate, furious as thunder, and shouted that it was unforgivably rude to the Lord, so maybe, just maybe she should kill him. Rael said. He realized, way too late, that it would have been smarter to come here, because he completely underestimated what he was walking into. If his power wasn't enough, they'd be wiped out, so it felt like there was no point even going there. MC dug in his heels and refused, then snapped back that he'd go there himself for their sake. In the end, they couldn't just text or talk around it. They had to meet face to face. The very next day, they rattled along in a carriage. Mia found himself in front of him and praised him, saying, "You were downright magnificent this morning, getting up that early." He lay there with a peaceful face, then snapped that being late was just plain unacceptable. Ferdinia waved He yanked the curtains aside and blurted, "How much farther?" Then he snapped at her, "Don't mess with the curtains," and cut off her answer there like it mattered. Today, they were finally heading out for those life-or-death negotiations, and when they arrived, it was in the capital of the Hadlet territory. They spun around, stunned by what was in front of them, and blurted out how massive that Bell was. Bell was absolutely enormous, and with a calm face, he said it. The look on his face said it loud. There was nothing left. Nothing surprising about it, even though it was the exact same plane as the one in the Big Small. Admiral Ferdinia said, "This territory is thriving, everything's flourishing here." He couldn't stop staring. He said it was all thanks to Hadlet being a multinational country, and that's why the house felt so fascinating. That's why the place feels like a melting pot of cultures. Then he dialed Jelena and Rag and told them, "Go on, take a look around." Could they pull off the same move on their own turf? They scanned the area, then he snapped and called out to Luz. She said elves were here too, like, for real, and I asked if she knew them, but she just stayed calm and said she didn't think she did. So she was the lone elf from her village who dared to leave, because the village shut its gates behind her. Caught off guard, she wondered why she hadn't joined them back then, and he promised himself he'd ask next time, because right now he was. He was burning with thirst, so Fredinia blared his name and shouted that this dirty ground smelled weirdly amazing, like it had some secret in it somehow. Strange knocked slid up beside her, scanned the area and whispered that it was. Even back then, Curry was already living in this world too. The waiter slammed it down and she stared like she'd just been punched. Is this dirt? He said yes. She snapped, insisting she should stop and start eating. Like, even if it smells amazing, it's still dirt. He didn't listen to her, not a bit. She took one bite and the second she did, her eyes lit up. This is insanely delicious. Then everyone crowded in and bombarded her with, okay, but. She stared in pure shock. Wait, was it really this delicious? You have to let her taste it too, they urged, and then everyone dove in, eating and praising what they were staring at. She licked that flavor, then grinned and jabbed her finger like a boss, telling him to cut back this store so they could take it. Take it home, then he ate and told her, if you want to use it later, go ahead. But later, it's going to blow up, he'll cook the curry himself. He stumbled up to a shelf packed with spices, grinned and said, yeah, it's crazy expensive, but we've got to buy it. They hurried to grab the spices for their curry, because they genuinely wanted to cook the real thing at home, and that idea shocked them so much they blurted, wait, what? Can they even taste it in big small? He snatched the plate with this dish and grinned, saying, somehow that curry tasted like a warm blanket and it made him think, let's eat, laugh and enjoy ourselves. Then someone blared a question, loud and rude, about work like it couldn't wait. After they wrapped up buying all kinds of stuff, they finally rolled up to the estate when a surfer showed up. A servant rushed up, guided them straight to the study, and slammed on the door, knocking hard, like he meant business. He rapped on the door and blurted that Baron Big Small had just arrived. With permission in hand, he swung the door open. He cracked the door open and waved them in, where the guy on the sofa was just sitting there. Sofa admitted he'd thrown out an apology for calling them all the way from that far a distant place, and he was freaking out, terrified about what was coming next. Padlet, king of this whole territory, had the protagonist stride up to him, then bow low in front of him. Bode stepped up, introduced himself with a grin, told him it was an honor to meet him, and then took a seat. He sank into the chair right in front of him and snapped, telling them it was time to get down to business. This was all about who gets the rights to mine manatite. Then he stared like he'd already made up his mind. He stared him down, convinced he'd already dug through every one of his father's archives, but still found nothing. No clue about where that man was supposed to go. Was found, then the talks kicked off, and he insisted that 40% will be enough. They were seizing every single right to mine the manatite for their territory. He blinked in shock at what he heard, then fired back, on what grounds? Waving his hand like it was obvious as he snapped, it's all written in the documents they sold to their family. He demanded that every territorial document be handed over, no excuses. It was almost over, but they still didn't have the right documents, so he snatched the papers they handed him. Then she leaned in and told him it was wild, because he handed him those. The MC demanded access, and said he just wanted a chance to verify the documents himself. He grabbed the document, convinced there wasn't a single chance of error. He'd bent over backward to pull it off, but it was all a counterfeit. Still, he had to keep going and needed to. To somehow prove it, Norvis said that not long ago, monsters tore through the little territory. Maybe they. When they lost that document, he snapped back and swore it was all a lie, insisting the mansion was. Nothing was broken on it, so there was no way anyone could call it lost, because this document was a fake. He asked, cool as ice, if they had any proof, and he made it sound like he'd only accept an answer if they really meant it. To lose what they already had the right to, that's on them, that's the mistake. Now it's only war that can settle everything. He blinked at that, caught off guard, and thought. They believed this was one of those noble traditions people used to settle fights and end the bloodshed. Two lords slammed their troops into a spot they'd already picked out, holding the ground like it was theirs by fate, and plunge into a fake war. They shoved a stack of documents at him and snapped, come here, right now, so he'd have zero time to get what he needed. Gather the proof, then, right in the dialogue. He slams down an ultimatum without wasting a second. He snapped the deal into pieces and declared war, just like he'd been plotting for ages, because that lord couldn't just throw his life away for a handful of resources. If he caved in right now, he'd unleash a rumor that Lord Big Small was a weakling who ducked back down to earth. The second that pseudo-war was even breathed into the room, he'd treat him like a threat, and then the temptation would hit hard to take more than just there. But there are plenty of other resources too. Noct demanded answers fast, asking if his turf had been hit lately and drained dry, then snapped, You mean to wage war now and still call that honorable? With a cool face and zero hesitation, Norvis snapped that if that's the deal, they'll only send 100 soldiers. Promise. And if they throw as many as they want at him, he can still handle every single one. So what's he gonna say back? He shot an apology at the girls nearby, then slamming his palm on the table, he declared it so loud that everyone froze, like the room itself heard it. With a deep breath, he accepted the challenge, swearing it in the name of Lord Bigsmall. He met his gaze with a calm grin and told him, "All right, let's pick the place, set the date, and lock in the time." Later on, they were riding in a carriage, firing off a reply to him, spilling everything that happened, and bowing with a full-on apology. Mug stayed calm and told him not to panic, because he probably just pissed him off. Then he exhaled hard and said, "When we get back home, we're apologizing." Galena told the others, if anyone dares object, we'll jump in and help him to explain. Later, they raced back to his mansion, where his comrades surged up to him and demanded, "Will you fight us?" And before anyone could blink, he snatched Kuklua. And Juno nearly choked when she saw how calm they stayed, like nothing just happened. He flashed the blueprint and bragged that he'd cooked up a brand new deadly. Greg's loud claim hit the air. He said he'd already upgraded the mandrake and demanded they take a look. Andrax couldn't believe it. Sito pulled out the magic stone and told everyone she'd warned them long before this. He said it looked weak, so it kept picking fights like it was hungry for chaos. Yet somehow, not a single moment would ever be boring. So now tell me, what are they going to do in this war? The protagonist shot back that they wouldn't lay a single deadly trap, period. The fake war raged for 10 long days, and it was supposed to break out on the strip of air between their territories, the weapon waiting to be unleashed. It's bound by strict rules, non-lethal, and built so the person who lands the knock can't get seriously hurt. They lured wins in one brutal strike, then crowded around the map, and Liney fired off the question, what were their odds? Mia said the Lord's miracle-working negotiating skills saved the day, cutting the enemy army down fast. To 100 in advance, he nodded along, then added, and if he came through for them, he'd show up later at the bar, bowing like a man with something to prove. And Grab demanded to know what happened. Why was he dropping to his knees out of nowhere? Then he claimed he needed a favor, like a wild pseudo-war between the big ones. Right now, for real. Big Small and Hadlet were about to kick off, so could he somehow throw his strength behind them and make it count? With nothing left to do, he had to swallow his pride and agree to the war, because the fate of every single inhabitant of Big Small was hanging on his decision. On these negotiations, and he's fully aware he's got a gentle heart, so he's already thinking things will turn out okay, probably. He probably hates fights, but they need his power, so he marches in and slams the glass down on the counter. He leaned in, tapped the counter, and told them these lands were just starting to bloom, like the real development hadn't even kicked off yet. So the place is already bursting with light, and he doesn't want to develop anything further. He just wants it stopped. Wanting to lose it, if they're in danger, he'll come for them, period. He'll always burst in to save the day, no matter what, because he's built for it. He was over the moon about it and thanked him at the top of his lungs. The girls promised they'd show up for the pseudo-war against the Red Dragon, and honestly, that changes everything, doesn't it? And it's never happened like this before, so how in the world does he pull it off? Guess that's just the way he is. The way their lord demanded it. Then, soon as later hit, everyone started gearing up for battle on their own. Mayor shows up at MC's office, calls him out by name and tells him, right there, how things are going to be done. Then they blurted that another messenger from the kingdom had arrived. Rebecca stormed into the office, which absolutely stunned him, and he blurts out. She snapped back, "Am I supposed to be a tax inspector?" Then shot the next question, "Did I get fired?" and answered it herself. "No, I'm an official and we've got a lot of." She handled tons of roles, even the little seconds, and after that he thanked her for her work. Then he pressed, "Don't they usually send a secretary?" He grabbed the grapes and told her she'd come looking to uncover how his lands grew that fast, then paused, and the moment kept building. If that secret is really tied to his skill, the kingdom might come knocking, begging him to help. To get help with their problems, he glanced around with a tense, worried look. Because it was a secret, he thought he'd really like to. She tried to stop her from spilling the secret, then said it with a deadly serious expression. The choice she made to volunteer for this role, because if she hadn't, everything would have turned out differently. Anyone tied to House Hadlet would have been. He clinched the second spot, and you could see the shock hit him. He bowed, then thanked her like he meant it. He pulled her close and called her his savior, and she, without missing a beat, slid the grapes into the basket, warning him not to twist her words. She'd stayed totally impartial, so when he looked at her, you could feel it. As she stepped away, realizing just how huge the strength gap was between them, they'd already stacked the odds so high, because even with Grab backing them, they'd still prepared for everything. After a while, he realized, those enemy soldiers didn't have a clue what skills he even brought to the fight. Soldiers had. He swooped over the battlefield and shouted that there were 3 times as many people as anyone could have guessed. Noct thought he caught Rebecca's spells ripping into the scorching sky, right as the great battle kicked off, the one that would decide everything, determine the fate of Big Small as a fake war ignites over Hadal territory, sparked by a rare resource from the Manatee Metro mines. Greg said with unwavering grit that he truly believed the people of Hadlet enjoyed. They lived a quiet, peaceful life, because somehow they'd survived the Orc King's battle, and that victory gave them a massive edge. He added, with a sharp edge, that he couldn't be so confident this time, because their enemies weren't monsters at all, they were humans. It was man versus man, and that war raged for 10 brutal days, pure survival from start to finish. Those 4 days got slammed into prepping positions, because there was no victory never guaranteed. But the teams that prepare the hardest always come out on top, so they yanked open the crate. Ancito gasped, stunned, that it was packed with mana and healing, potions and a mountain of them, and with a tiny smile he murmured, "Man, a tight." With everything on the line, that cost didn't even matter, it was worth every penny. And somehow, he talked his way into an amazing deal that felt too good to be true. Deal? Norva stared from his territory as supplies rolled in, right before his eyes. His eyes were razor alert, scanning everything around him, and he smirked like he already knew what came next. But it looked like he'd drained every last resource he had. He grabbed some resources, lit up a cigar, and drawled that you could say, "Tell me that was a wise choice for an idiot, because if he's a..." So he'll clam up and start playing it safe, thinking like some regular, when he's afraid to swing for the big win. Or worse, like a straight-up loser. So yeah, even with all the resources at his disposal, he still has to. He's got maybe 20 or 30 soldiers at best, and a fortress like that can't last. You can't build anything without labor, and these soldiers are slamming wooden planks together to raise their building from the ground up. And he just dropped the bomb, 4 days to prepare. 4 days, how are they even supposed to pull that off? You've got a brutal 96-hour shift, and the soldiers are thrown for a loop. And with a booming shout, he demanded, "So you're telling me we really ended up in hell?" Rebecca sits in a tent, and yeah, hell, everything feels wrong. A brutal long distance away from both camps. Watch everything through your binoculars, and swear that as long as you still can, you'll. If he got even a single second, he'd never dare to resort to the real deal. Dirty tactics, and still, without him, nothing could be done. No chance, his advantage was crushingly overwhelming. So what's the ruler of Big Small gonna do next? NNA and her squad inched forward and raised their hands to the sky, ready for whatever came next. With a flick of her staff, the 3 of them unleashed earth magic together. The protagonist tore forward toward them and threw his help right into the situation. She snapped, "Hey, will you use earth magic like you did with that bathtub?" "No way," he denied it flat out, saying it was just like moving the store. He tapped into his imagination and shaped a solid block of earth, then smashed it smaller with the shrink skill. His allies lit up, absolutely thrilled. Norvus peered at it through his binoculars and said, as if he could twist the dirt on that massive scale, and do it at mind-bending speed. Only an elite earthmage could pull off speed like that, and the Lord himself is. They're also crazy good at magic, like, seriously, just think about it there. Their lands sit right before a massive forest, and yeah, they've been living with it forever. Right when the fighting started, blades flashing, foxes getting cut down, a soldier charged straight toward him. He pointed at him, called out his name, and told him there was nothing to fear, because he was going to be fine. Juno should take a closer look, because right then, her strength vanished, and she crumpled to the ground. As soon as the ground hit, the MC bolted straight up to him and demanded, "Hey." With a worried look on his face, he looked wrecked. Is he even okay? And why didn't he say anything if he was this exhausted? He said he only wanted to give it everything he had, and Norvus watched with a proud smile. He grabbed a glass of alcohol, muttered that this kind of magic was getting way too out of hand, and then, when he took a sip, the potions tasted utterly plain. Disgusting, the mayor closed in on Leona, started hurling magic at her, and then told her that that had to be stopped. Then Jelena burst in, right on time, and cut them off mid-sentence, and told them to switch. Now it's their turn to jump in. They hauled in a tiny building, and he started using. He cast an enlargement spell, and then thrust up a towering castle that dominated the horizon. Rebecca snapped into action, totally caught off guard by what she saw. He blurted out, "What is this? Are you kidding me?" Magic. Magic hit the air like a punch. Norvus couldn't believe what he was seeing through. He smashed his way through the glass, shot to his feet, and demanded, "Is this hypnosis? Tell yourself this is all an illusion." He's hypnotizing them in bulk, and it's working. With this many people, you're gonna burn through mana faster than you can blink. An illusion is enough to conjure up chaos in one place. Yet first, they even dug a real moat just to make it feel painfully real. way more than a costume ever could, and this is where the story gets tense. So that stupid plan was doomed from the start. Their thinking was weak, and once they finally crack the secret, there's nothing left to hold back. Don't panic, everything's under control, but they're going to raise the exact same building anyway. Then he pulled out a real whip and started slashing the soldiers, right as the chaos erupted. He roared that they'd work until they dropped dead, and then, once they were gone, he dragged them into the other world. One soldier hauled in food, called him over, and told him flat out, they weren't building a damn thing on an empty stomach. He clutched his stomach, dug into his food, and spat out, "You selfish pigs." Fine, go ahead and chow down on his delicious dried meat in that black BR. Bread, hey, what are they even showing over there? Because you sure can't get full on illusions. Turns out they didn't just build the house, they finally get to eat now. Kaklua clutched a basket of fruit and blurted, "These are her best vegetables," and he stared at it with a sharp, curious look. She flashed a small smile and said it was sweet, too, and then he even packed some spices, then unleashed his magnification skill to dial everything in. Olivia started cooking the dish, and he tapped into that same skill again, big time. He shoved the plan into overdrive, stuffing the pot bigger and bigger so every one of his comrades could eat. Norvis snapped his focus at once and watched through the binoculars, then said, he said it felt like coming home. Like a warm, perfect dinner landing right in the middle of the battlefield. That warm hush from the hearth, did they really just snatch it like it was nothing? Steel was the heartbeat of Hadlic culture, right down to their curry. Now the protagonist, completely transformed. They turned him human and demanded an answer from him. He took one bite, loved it instantly, and couldn't stop there. Then he unleashed a blinding surge of energy and roared that it was all about to hold things back. Delicious, so delicious that the enemy soldiers caught the scent and started drooling the second they smelled it. Shock hit him so hard he had to wonder, was this a real illusion playing tricks on him? He crumpled to the ground, and a soldier rushed in to press a cigar into his hands, and demanded he snap out of it, so he bit down on the words like they were medicine. They started panicking over it. He slapped the table and yelled that his stomach needed to be cleared. Now, the container was cleared out, now they had to pour the potion into it right after. After the drinking, he suddenly vomited, and a soldier tried to peek through by pounding the door. Loud binoculars blared, shouting that Lord Big Small and the whole crew had arrived. Right then, MC strode up to Rebecca, called her name, and told her they'd brought her a treat, only for her to glare, clearly not thrilled. Displeased, he snapped that bribing her was pointless, and then he admitted it felt downright satisfying. She was grateful for everything staying in order, and once she tasted the curry, her face lit up because she genuinely loved it. Norvis caught it and blurted, telling them to toss her some dried meat delicacy too. And bread. When he said it, the soldiers snapped to agreement right away. Right beside him, and in that exact instant, something zipped past his face like a bullet. A bunch of people swarmed up to them and demanded, "Wait, are you really Greg?" Just as he came back for another loss, he snapped his head toward them and caught them devouring their food, Kerr. They stared at the curry and couldn't stop thinking, when did we even get the time to grab it and start? "Stop eating," he snapped, dragging the guy over with a confused stare, and he demanded, "Did you?" If he recognized them, he blurted with a confused face like, "Do I know you?" Noct stared in shock, so they weren't just fighters, they were dragon slayers, and then he froze mid-thought. What he heard, remember, grab it, and realized this was the one crack in their armor. He shouted it so loud that everyone heard. Big Small was nothing but a tiny and weak territory, if anyone was even remotely worthy of. So yeah, right there, it was only Lord Rutherford, the former one, and his eldest son, Wishart. He figured this time things would finally turn around. Now that they were gone, he didn't just have a chance, he could crush the win in no time. The Dragon Slayers came charging back to camp, and shot a quick question like, should we move on to Greg? Eggs. Then the curry hits like a punch, so good he's already thinking, I've got to go get more. He snatches for more, then whips around to the soldiers with a hard, serious stare, and demanded they crack open the second vault right now. He kept saying we need more money, then he hit the third. The third and fourth vaults still had to be unlocked. Then the advisor closed in on him, right on his heels, and told the Lord that the cash in the fourth vault was locked away to cover the taxes for the whole year. He spun toward him and declared, "We've just raised the stakes." He refused to back away, and the Dragon Slayers closed in. She marched up to him and asked, "Can we get curry here too?" He spun toward them, flashed a grin, and told them he would spoil them with curry they'd never tasted before. Like the world's most addictive flavor was about to hit their tongues. Right in the middle of everything, an advisor marched up to him and boomed to the Lord that if they couldn't pour more money into the war, their lands would soon be swallowed up. He broke down in a grim, stone-faced way and said, "We'll still get the manatate, and somehow it'll be even more cash than he'd ever seen before." Slayers stared at him with that smug grin and cut in, "You sure about that? because those words were sure to set them off. He leaned in and snapped, "Listen to me." Then he paused like, "Or is there anyone else?" Among their acquaintances, they flashed for money, and he shot back, asking if they were truly sure he could handle that acquaintance. Norvis swore he wouldn't be stingy, so when I heard that I nodded and told him. Then they'd reach out to their acquaintances next. After that, the protagonist and his crew started warming up, and Grab said the Dragon Slayers were just what he needed, and he wanted to test his power against them, though he admitted he couldn't do it anyway because that place was pure danger. Yet the mercenaries were the real threat. They're not just racing to a fortress anymore. The thing's already built, they're warmed up and ready, and now victory is within their grasp. It would all be theirs. Then he realized, right then and there, a whole swarm of carts was coming. With the supplies finally in hand, they got stacked right beside the unfinished building under construction. And when he said that, you could tell it wasn't the whole truth. He also spotted several. A pack of mercenaries rolled in like a war storm, hauling supplies with them. He couldn't take it and erupted in loud anger, shouting that. So they'd shattered the rules. He'd march straight over to tell them, and Verdino would tag along. He stormed into the enemy camp and told them they'd already agreed. Only 100 soldiers were allowed on their side. Even the Dragon Slayer said it right to his face. "Yeah, it's still true, it's just a game." To play a substitution, he snapped with indignation, shouting straight at them. "What kind of demagoguery is this? It's crystal clear, and it's straight up unfair." He shrugged, saying the rules didn't cover that at all. Then they dove straight into cooking the meat. He spotted the meat nearby, and then he grinned like, "It's snack time," sprinting over to it. He passed the meat to his comrades, and they dove in like it was pure treasure, loved every bite. She couldn't help but enjoy it. Then it instantly grabbed Verdon's attention like a punch to the chest, and she sprinted up to They shoved her toward the grill and handed her a juicy piece of meat. Then everything just kept happening. A crowd of members waved, then snatched up a juicy piece of meat and shoved it toward MC, but he refused flat out. Later, they hauled themselves back, crashed back to their camp, and Joseph, eyes full of worry, was just about to ask a question. They both tore into the meat, and then he blurted out that everything was going wrong. Terrific meat, sure, but the whole thing still felt bad. They weren't just wasting time. These things were worth a fortune, and they dove straight into business.